Potent practices. Harry Crow. Disclaimer, the only thing I own here is the iPad I used to type this. Harry Potter belongs to JKR. Since Apple are about the only people with more cash than Joe Rowling, I am available for sponsorship deals. A new iPad. A little product placement can go a long way. Chapter 26. Dan Granger was practically shitting himself with fright. He hardly noticed that his wife's fingers were almost touching bone as Emma gripped his arm for support. They were both standing there watching their only daughter fighting for her life, at least that's what it looked like to them. Bill and Harry had set down some special stones that would stop any magic escaping, and both parents had been excited to see the kids training. That excitement soon turned to terror. The tickling hex Hermione had used on Dan had in no way prepared the young witch's muggle parents for magical displays of this nature. 3 of them were currently attacking Harry, who strangely appeared to be holding his own. When a red beam of light managed to hit Neville and drop him to the ground, Emma's scream was loud and piercing. This caught Hermione's attention, and Harry used the distraction to put her out the fight too. Padma didn't last long after that. Only after Harry began reviving his downed friends did the parents recover their power of thought and speech. What the hell was that? Dan's question demand was fired off as powerfully as any curse, and targeted directly at Bill. Twice a week, these 4 take their normal defense lessons with their friends. At the weekend, I'm training Harry so he can hopefully survive a fight with Voldemort or his Death Eaters. The other 3 wanted to be part of those lessons and are plugging on game day. Harry buying dueling robes has enabled us to step up the severity of curses quite a bit, though all 3 were just hit on unprotected parts of their bodies by stunners. A stunner will put you out of a fight until someone applies the counter curse, or it will eventually wear off. By this point they had been joined by the 4 kids. Emma was hugging and inspecting Hermione for damage at the same time. Mum, I'm fine. We do this every week. What did you think extra defense training was? Bill wanted his lesson back on track. Okay, where did we go wrong? We weren't fighting on a flat floor. I stumbled and Harry nailed me. Good point, Neville. We'll work on that next week. I'm sure the room could provide us with different terrains. Next. Hermione had her head down. Mum's scream distracted me. That was all Harry needed. Bill had drummed into them that they needed to be honest here. It was vital that they learned from their mistakes. Padma was certainly honest in her assessment of what happened next. I just couldn't handle Harry on my own, and he certainly never gave me a chance to revive any of these 2. This received an understanding nod from their tutor. Anything to add, Harry? They're still sticking together too much, playing safety in numbers. Neville mentioned terrain yet none of them used it. Anyone getting behind that tree would have been murder to take out. All good points. Remember, the best way not to be hit is not to be there. Hiding behind a solid object would certainly be high on the list too. Now, let's practice our shield drills. There was no grumpiness or moaning as they split into 2 pairs, with one shielding while the other fired curses at it. They then swapped when it was their partner's turn to shield. Bill had a very concerned father on his hands. This looks like combat training. I don't know that I'm happy about my daughter learning this. As I said, Dan, my remit from Gringotts is to train Harry. The other 3 specifically asked to be involved. I know I'm pushing them, but again, that's my job here. If you want Hermione out of these lessons, then there's nothing I can do about that. One thing's for sure though, you get to tell her. While every bit as concerned as her husband, Emma wasn't certain if they should go that far. Can you give us some idea of what level the kids are at? This is all new to us and it may not be as dangerous as it looks to the uninitiated. That was a fair question, one that Bill had to put a bit of thought into answering. They've been getting at least an extra 6 hours of defense tuition every weekend for about 6 months now. We're not working through textbooks or doing any written work at all. Their time is spent purely on the practical application of defense. In terms of magically dueling, I would put them ahead of my twin brothers, and they're in 3rd year. This shocked Emma. They're really that far ahead. In the practical side, yes. I really have to wait until they are a bit older before teaching them more powerful spells. This is more about building up their magical power levels until they get older. These shield drills help with that. None of the other first years can cast a shield, or a stunner. This actually made sense to both parents. Can I assume that's why you're trying to instill tactical awareness into them now? So that as they mature, they will already have that in their minds. To be honest, Dan, Harry's been raised to be tactically aware. It's something he does now without thinking. It will take a few years to get the others anywhere near that level, but they're already far ahead of their peers. He then stopped the drills before they started flagging. It was now time for some fun. Okay, take 5 while I set up some target practice. Let's see if we can knock the reigning champion off his lofty perch. Bill then removed what appeared at first to be a couple of dolls from his bag, only for them to grow to about 5 foot in height. These mannequins were then animated to quickly but randomly move around the garden. The kids held a quick rock, paper, scissors tournament to decide the order they would compete in. Padma was up first. When Bill gave the command to start, she began unleashing curses at the pair of targets. With her 3 friends shouting encouragement, Padma had soon completed the task. Bill was explaining to the Grangers just what was happening here. These training dummies will move randomly until they receive 5 spell hits. They will then stop for 10 seconds. They have to get both dummies stopped at the same time to complete their task. This teaches accuracy, speed of casting and also awareness. They need to know how many times they've hit each target, otherwise the first dummy could be moving before they've got the second one stopped. Well done, Padma, you just broke the 2-minute barrier. This saw the delighted witch being congratulated by her friends. It was now Harry's turn. When the call came to begin, Harry's hand was a blur as his knife seemed to appear from nowhere and began spitting out curses. Dan now understood both boys being quite underwhelmed that day at his shooting club, a rather unusual reaction to having a gun in your hand for the first time. Compared to this though, it was no wonder the small paper targets neither excited nor grabbed Harry and Neville's attention. Dan didn't need to hear a time to know that Harry had completed the task quicker than Padma. What he did next though surprised the hell out of him. Harry's knife disappeared as his sword was drawn. Knowing he had only a few seconds before they reanimated, Harry gave it his best effort. A web shot out of his sword and captured the 2 mannequins, but that wasn't the end of the matter. His sword directed the webbing to the tree and the dummies were hanging suspended by webbing from one of its lower branches. Having been attempting this since Christmas, Harry gave out a loud victory whoop of delight. This left Emma shaking her head. Quote ellipsis. And that is why you shouldn't give a young boy who can perform magic Spider-Man comics. His tutor though was very impressed. That is a very effective way of putting someone out a fight, Harry. If you can hang them high enough, then anyone releasing the prisoners will also have to catch them before they hit the ground. Otherwise, they could be permanently out of the fight. The shooter in Dan saw him coming at this from a different angle. Why did you use your sword? It took precious seconds to swap from your knife. A happy Harry was being congratulated by his friends. Hermione had watched him practice that spell every morning in their training. This was the first time he pulled it off. Dan's question made him stop and think. I have a lot more power when I cast with my sword, but I lose some of my speed of casting. This was roughly what Dan expected Harry's answer to be. Your knife is a pistol while the sword is a rifle. Can you cast further with your sword? Hermione understood at once what her father was alluding to, but none of the other wizards, witch or goblin there had a clue what Dan was talking about. A rifle is a much bigger gun than the pistols you and Neville would have used. It not only carries a lot more power but has a far greater range. If your sword acts the same way, you could put someone down before they got close enough to use their wand on you. Their tutor could also see the benefit of that but again needed to get his lesson back on track. That's something that will need to wait until you're back at Hogwarts to discover. Trying it here would take us outside the wards. Can I have my dummies back please? Neville is up next. He also broke 2 minutes before a rather nervous Hermione was ready to go. She needed to show her parents that these lessons were a great benefit to their daughter. Her fencing lessons were improving her reflexes and her hand-eye coordination. This was reflected in her display. Again Dan didn't need a stopwatch to know Hermione was faster than both Padma and Neville. Harry hoisting her up in the air was a big clue that this might actually be her fastest ever. He told that ass Dursley that any of the kids could have made mincemeat out of Dudley's gang. His daughter had just proven beyond doubt to her father that she actually could. This was a proud moment for Dan, one that made up for the terror he felt earlier. They'd just been given a demonstration of how much these lessons were helping Hermione. They would be foolish to stop them now. The fact that Dan didn't have to tell Hermione that her father was stopping these lessons played no part in his decision, or so he told himself. Nothing had prepared Vernon for the terror he was currently feeling. Waking up to the sound of your wife screaming and the distant wail of sirens getting closer was not how he imagined his Saturday morning kicking off when going to bed last night. Then again, last night his bedroom had 4 walls, it currently had only 3. It was hard to tell from where he and Petunia were now pressed for safety against the back wall of their bedroom, but it appeared as if the Dursleys' home had acquired a vertical mine shaft where the front garden used to be. That same mine shaft also appeared to have swallowed the front wall of the house. Thank goodness Dudley's bedroom was at the back. Their driveway was gone too, as was their car that Vernon had proudly parked there yesterday. The "For Sale" sign with the red, "Sold" sticker was still prominently standing in a small untouched corner of their property, its wooden post anchored into the only patch of front garden they had left. This sign though accounted for a good proportion of Vernon's terror. Without any question, the proposed sale of their house would immediately fall into an even deeper black hole than the one currently in front of them, as would their move to a new home. There was also little doubt in Vernon's mind that the various insurance policies wouldn't cover this catastrophe, just like there would be no records of any mine shafts ever existing in this area. The insurance companies would shrug their shoulders and put it down to an act of God. Vernon knew better. This was no act of God, more likely an act of goblins, an act that could financially ruin the Dursleys. Emma had lunch ready but Bill found himself having to expand the Grangers' dining room table to accommodate everyone who was going to be eating there. Barchoke had arrived with Sirius and Henrika, making 10 for lunch. Bill was also staying since Minerva had sent him an owl cancelling this weekend's extra defense tutorials. With 11 Ravenclaws having to spend the night in the infirmary, the deputy headmistress really had no other choice. This though would save Bill a trip back to Gringotts. He needed to discover what information about this incident Barchoke wanted him to pass on to his father. The Cursebreaker managed to keep his smile in place when talking with Sirius, even though the wizard now had Henrika by his side. Bill felt like cursing himself for having a clear opportunity with the beautiful witch but had pondered and deliberated with himself about making any move in that direction. It would seem Sirius wasn't suffering from the same problem. He had to be philosophical about the situation though, the timing wasn't right for him. He'd just been handed what Bill considered to be easily the most important task of his life, only to then meet the most beautiful witch he'd ever laid eyes on. That Gringotts had then given him another task that was as equally important as the first, and concerned his family too, left Bill thinking this was probably for the best. Henrika Hobson was a witch who would demand the full attention of any prospective suitor, and he simply wasn't in a position to give that amount of attention to anyone at the moment. The next few years of his life could help redefine the future of magical Britain. What was a possible romance in comparison to that? This outlook may have helped him deal with the current situation. It didn't stop Bill silently promising himself that next time he wouldn't hold back. The only problem he could foresee with that promise was where to find another witch like Henrika Hobson. Barchoke had seized the chance to have lunch with Harry and his friends. This also gave him the opportunity to bring everyone up to speed with exactly what was happening, and let Cursebreaker Weasley know this information was safe to pass on to his father. My sources are keeping me well informed about this situation. Apparently the minister exploded when he heard the news. He and Madam Bones are heading to Hogwarts today, probably another reason those extra defense lessons were cancelled. The wily goblin had no intention of mentioning that Amelia Bones had actually sent him an owl with all the pertinent information to this case. Since it was his son that was the supposed victim, Amelia had decided to treat Barchoke the same as any other parent with a child at Hogwarts. This more than anything convinced the goblin he was right to listen to Harry and let the ministry deal with the matter. The Auras reported that both sets of parents promised further retribution to the daughters, each of the fathers expressing their horror that these potions were so readily available. The impression given though was that they were both more worried about these potions being used on the girls. You can expect some apologies by Owl soon. Both Granger parents were delighted, not to mention relieved, that Hermione had such good friends. Anyone attempting to use these abominations on Hermione, or Padma, would find Harry and Neville standing in their way. Neither lad was likely to show anyone trying to potion the girls any mercy. Dan was positive one of Harry's razor-sharp blades would be used on any wizard trying to drug Hermione. The Slytherin girl's parents denied sending any note or sweets. She of course had long since destroyed the incriminating parchment. The Hogwarts potion master is of the opinion this potion is well beyond the girl's brewing abilities. Master Pitsley has analyzed his samples and agreed. The prank potions were nothing more than infatuation strength. They would have worked well enough to have Harry here more than willing to kiss them. The other one would have seen him professing undying love and offering to run away together, not something a third-year student could possibly brew, or should have access to. Gringotts are already considering action against the family, only awaiting the end of the ministry's investigation before imposing any restrictions. There was one thing about this entire situation that bothered Emma. We have wards on our home precisely to stop anyone sending something like that here. Are you saying Hogwarts doesn't have this protection? It was actually Bill who answered Emma's question. I've seen the ward scheme for this house. I needed to know what the wards would take for our lesson this morning. Along with the Patil property, it's some of Gringotts' best work outside of the bank. Invisibility cloaks, animagus forms, all the same to these wards. If Hermione doesn't add your name then no witch or wizard is getting past them. This saw Harry blushing, and even Barchok sit with his head down. Emma had no intention of letting that continue. I would like to thank you both for helping protect this family. The more I learn of the magical world, the more I appreciate what you've done for us. Seeing his godson's embarrassment caused Sirius to act. I thought you four all earned outstandings for your behavior last night. Today, we're going to be looking more into the origins of Wizarding Society, and where all this formal code of conduct evolved from. Even today, not knowing the accepted and proper way to conduct yourself could see you facing a duel. This drew Barchok back into the conversation. Goblin society is similar in that respect. Duels are discouraged as ways of settling disputes, but sometimes there is no other alternative. A formal duel now needs the director's permission before it can take place. If the challenge is more to do with greed than honor, one or both parties could lose their heads before reaching the dueling pit. Well, I agree with Sirius. I thought you all conducted yourselves in a manner fitting for young lords and ladies. What Dan wasn't saying was that he had to choke back his laughter when Harry asked his permission to dance with Emma. Seeing the looks he was getting from the two ladies in his life inspired him to come up with a good answer. His reply of only if I get to dance with your beautiful date, won Daniel Granger's smiles all round, and certainly helped make his evening more enjoyable. Now they were going to spend the afternoon discovering just what the daughter and her friends were learning each weekend. Both parents hoped it would be a lot less violent than this morning's lesson. As this was not only Neville's first time at the Grangers, but first time in a Muggle house too, they were having takeaway and a movie tonight. Hermione didn't think Neville was ready for a trip to the cinema just yet. Sirius mentioning that today's lesson would also touch on formal courtship behavior focused everyone's attention back on the lesson for this afternoon, just as the Marauder knew it would. The minister's attention was focused on the Hogwarts headmaster, and Cornelius was not liking what he was hearing. You had fights breaking out around the castle, a dozen or so students had to spend the night in the infirmary, and it was only by sheer dumb luck Hogwarts avoided fatalities. You then have the nerve to stand there and try to pass this whole incident off as a harmless prank. I'm beginning to think you're spending far too much time sitting in this room and talking to a bunch of dead headmasters, Albus, rather than seeing what is really going on in your school. I resent that accusation. Cornelius wasn't for backing down and came right back at Dumbledore. Quote ellipsis. And I resent the fact that I'm here on a Saturday, trying to sort your mess out. These students are in your care, isn't it about time you started providing some? I don't need to be lectured about my responsibilities by you. Visions of his grand scheme to get closer to the boy who lived being torn apart by this incident were fueling the minister's rage. Then perhaps it's time you started carrying him out, or passed him on to someone who will. We all know it's only a matter of time before this appears in the press, and the lad's father is also sure to react. I need to know what you are doing about this situation, and I need to know now. With Albus taken aback at this never-before-seen version of Cornelius, Minerva provided the answer. All three girls got an immediate 1-week suspension, with a year's probation to follow. We all consider Miss Bowl to be a far more serious case, but, like the ministry, we can neither prove nor disprove her claims that she was instructed by her parents to carry this out. As to preventing this ever happening again, wards are not my field of expertise, so I wouldn't even know where to start. Amelia offered a suggestion. What about contacting the goblins for advice on the school's wards? As Harry will be here at least 9 months of the year, they may consider lending their expertise. This suggestion didn't sit well with the headmaster. The parents would never stand for handing over the very security of the castle to the goblins. Once again, Albus found himself rudely interrupted. You're forgetting, Albus, I'm one of those parents. I would have no concerns about the goblins updating the Hogwarts wards. I do have serious concerns about the level of protection currently provided. If things don't improve, I'm also seriously considering moving Susan elsewhere. I can assure you there will be other parents thinking the same way about the daughter's safety. The headmaster was beginning to think he was receiving the good or bad oral treatment as Cornelius picked right up where Amelia left off. The only problem with that analogy was that both the minister and the head of the DMLE appeared to be auditioning for the role of bad oral, with the good one dispatched straight to the rubbish tip. The situation would be much worse if it was a witch who had received these potions. I understand Harry is very protective of his best friend. I hate to think what would happen if it was she who had been targeted. Amelia's concern was there for all to see. That's precisely my point, Cornelius. With the current configuration of Hogwarts wards, we have no way of knowing if anyone else received potions like this. With the staff sitting back and doing nothing, unless the situation explodes right in front of them, it hardly inspires confidence. Minerva had a confession to make, one that wasn't going to be well received. I contacted Harry's father about this incident, and wards were mentioned. Barchok indicated to me that the goblins wouldn't be prepared to help Hogwarts, at least not while Albus Dumbledore is headmaster. 3 of the people currently in the headmaster's office thought that wasn't too unreasonable. Albus though had a different opinion. Even with his own son attending Hogwarts, the goblins wouldn't help. Where is this caring father I hear you talking so much about now? His deputy though had an answer for her boss. Barchoke knows Hogwarts herself will protect Harry from anyone trying to slip something into his food, and we saw how well his son handled the situation where he didn't know the source of those chocolates. Barchoke also pointed out that it's our responsibility to keep the students safe, not his or Gringotts. Barchoke will take any necessary action to protect his son. That's as far as he and the Goblin Nation will go while Albus is headmaster. Albus has been banned from doing business with Gringotts for over a decade. They are not about to rush to his aid now. Neither the politician or the lady of the law saw anything wrong with that argument. Albus once more disagreed. The goblins are again interfering in wizarding affairs. This is something that needs to be brought before the Wizengamot. The minister hit that on the head immediately. It wasn't the correct time for his solution to be aired in the chamber. Where are they interfering? When did refusing to work with Albus Dumbledore become interfering in wizarding affairs? As usual, Amelia told it like she saw it. If you were to take this to the chamber, it could start a movement to get you out of the castle. Your standing isn't exactly at its highest point at the moment, and that's before this latest screw-up hits the prophet. The members would probably think having their family protected by goblin wards while they attended Hogwarts would be a fair trade-off to get rid of the current headmaster. A headmaster who seems to blindly lurch from one crisis to the next. Susan is the last of my family and I would certainly consider that result a fair trade to have her protected. Albus was wondering how long his run of bad luck could continue. Every time he thought things couldn't get any worse, they promptly did. Had he known about the meeting that would be taking place that evening, Albus might have realized there was still a long way for him yet to fall. Rita was shown into the usual office, nervous to hear how her latest journalistic efforts had been received. She liked the word, journalistic, because that's precisely what she had been doing, conducting herself as a journalist should. She was quite proud of the parchment sitting on this goblin's desk. It was easily her best work. His first sentence though sent her hopes crashing. Miss Skeeter, we will not be sending this to the prophet. Quite simply, it's much too good for them. Good doesn't do this work justice, it's nothing short of brilliant. This left me in a bit of a quandary though. What's the best way to use it? Tell me, Miss Skeeter, have you ever considered writing a book? She was an animagus, not a metamorphmagus, but Barchoke would swear her eyes turned the shape and color of a couple of galleons. I would like that very much. This could be massive for Rita. Any book featuring the information she was digging up on Dumbledore could be a bestseller, add in The Boy Who Lived plus you know who and it would be an instant hit. She decided to see just how much this goblin wanted her work. Praise didn't pay the bills. I think we should talk about an advance on prospective book sales, a possible percentage of the profits, and I insist on editorial control. I don't want my discoveries diluted down so as not to upset some powerful people. Miss Skeeter, I can assure you we hope to upset some powerful people. Provided you can supply proof of your claims, we will print the book as potent as you wish. On the strength of the material you've already provided, I would be quite happy to discuss an advance on the book. I am considering purchasing a printing press so that the entire project can remain top secret. The first that anyone will know of this venture is when we announce the sale of Dumbledore's unofficial warts and all biography. The goblin could see he had what he wanted. Miss Skeeter was well and truly hooked. It was time for Barchoke to reel her in. I think a percentage of the profits is also something we can agree on here. We both need to get more information before settling on just what that percentage should be. She quickly agreed to that too. For a shot at becoming a best-selling author, Rita would probably have agreed to anything. Barchoke was thinking that Gringotts' share of the profits from this Albus Dumbledore expose would probably pay for the printing of Professor Hobson's book on the Nation too. This would certainly place a smile on the director's face. Dumbledore publicly slaughtered, the Nation moved even further into the limelight and a profit being made in the process. For a goblin, it didn't get much better than that. He made it plain to Rita that she was under no pressure to rush the rest of her research. They put an initial figure of 6 months on her having the first draft completed. They also discussed a possible release date, with Halloween looking favorite. September 1st was considered, but the witch and goblin agreed that the extra 2 months would give them time to do it properly. That was more important to both than rushing something out to meet a deadline they'd just pulled out the air. Rita left Gringotts with a spring in her step. Life was looking good for the sack reporter and she couldn't wait to see people eating their words. If it wasn't that the prophet was the biggest source of free advertising, she wouldn't even give the backstabbing bastards an interview when her book was released. That didn't mean she wasn't going to string them along though. She would soon have the prophet begging her to come back. Harry was unsure of his welcome as he approached the Ravenclaw table for breakfast. After returning on Monday morning, he needn't have worried. Any grumblings in the house had been quickly settled at dinner last night by 3 first-year witches, each pointing out they had told their fellow Ravenclaws not to eat the chocolate. They were also greeted by the sight of a contrite Cho Chang, whose apology to the group of friends felt a lot more genuine than the one she'd offered up to Hermione. This actually confused the new arrivals. I didn't know there were any Ravenclaws involved in sending me those chocolates. There wasn't, Harry, and I didn't. I ate some of the chocolates that bitch Bowl tried to slip you. I found myself skipping class and stalking that Slytherin along to Transfiguration, only to jump into a fight with 2 5th years and a 6th, all of whom had the same potions-fueled idea. You can probably guess I got my ass kicked, but those flushing potions we had forced down our throat were a lot worse, to our bodies and our egos. Harry was bemused to where Cho was going with this, as were most of their house, currently watching this while enjoying breakfast. The little second year didn't keep them waiting long. Lying in the infirmary gave me the time to consider my behavior toward you, and I wasn't proud of it. I could have been one of your friends. Instead I became a whining spoilt little brat, determined to claim your undivided attention. For all the trouble that I've caused, I'm really sorry. Jo then left to get ready for her first class, leaving Penny to try and offer some form of explanation to a stunned table. I was one of those 5th years fighting over Bowl, and I was absolutely disgusted with myself. You actually know what you're saying and doing, but have no control over those actions, or even your emotions. The potion has a total grip of you. Everything you say and do is centered around pleasing the new most important person in your life. I understand where Cho is coming from. Everyone in the infirmary did a lot of thinking over this. As bad as Valentine's Day was, we all recognized it could have been so much worse. Had that been a boy who had slipped me the same potion, I would have done anything to please him. Penny was a very popular figure in Ravenclaw, and everyone felt her pain as a visible shudder of revulsion passed through her. It was also obvious most of the witches present shared in her fear of these potions. This incident had brought crashing home just how vulnerable they all were. Neither was it missed by anyone in the castle that it took Harry's insistence to have the auras involved. The very thought of what these potions could do was bad enough, without it then being classed merely as a school prank and swept under the rug. The story had broken in yesterday's prophet and led to a flock of owls from concerned parents, all desperate to know their children were okay. Madame Bones announcing her intentions to bring a motion before the Wizengamot that would class these potions as liquid forms of the Imperious Curse was a measure that certainly got the full backing of everyone inside the castle. The practically unanimous opinion of the students was that anyone using one of these potions deserved to have their ass flung straight into Azkaban. Having just returned from a fabulous weekend, the quartet couldn't miss the stark contrast from the fun and laughter of Crawley to the depressing atmosphere currently inside Hogwarts. Penny was usually such a bubbly witch, a witch who took her prefect duties very seriously. All the first-year Claws thought of her as a friend and confidant. Harry was discovering that these potions were loathed by witches almost as much as they were by the goblins, but it took him being attacked by these disgusting things to get something done about it. Once more, the nation was influencing the wizarding community through the boy who lived. Harry also thought there was a quick and simple way to lift Penny's spirits. He would worry about the expense later. As you now know, we goblins find these potions repulsive and consider them our unforgivables. So much so, our potion masters weren't content with just developing an antidote. They invented a preventative elixir that neutralizes most of these potions' effects on you, an elixir that offers the drinker months of protection. A victim would still know someone had slipped them a love potion, and even who the chemical attraction is key to, but you'd remain in control. More importantly, you'd still have enough control to fight back or seek help. I'll contact my father and ask if Master Pitsley can bring some on Friday. One dose should protect you until at least the summer holidays. The tears welling in Penny's eyes were in stark contrast to the smile breaking out on her face. You would have to drink the elixir in front of Master Pitsley though. We won't take the chance of this formula slipping into anyone else's hands. The last thing we need is for these brewers to develop a potion that can get around our elixir's defenses. Marietta, could you tell Cho the offer is open to her too? Harry quickly indicated to his friends that he intended to have them protected as well, getting broad smiles from Hermione and Padma. Hermione's bracelet provided some protection, but the elixir was better. A nod to Lisa, Morag and Mandy was greeted with wide smiles too. Offering the elixir to Parvati, Hannah and Susan was also something Harry would do before the morning was out. The prophet being delivered then drew everyone's attention to the newspaper. As expected, the follow-up to the potions incident was front-page news. The ministry were reluctantly forced to admit there was nothing they could do, except pursue the suppliers of these vile potions. A statement from Gringotts was more forthcoming. They pointed out that, while they understood that the ministry needed evidence to prosecute, Gringotts were under no such obligation when it came to deciding who they were willing to conduct business with. There was no question that a member of the Bowl family had attempted to attack a centurion, by use of an illegal potion to ensnare him. This was more than enough for the bank to withdraw all services to the Bowl family, and demand a settlement of all outstanding loans and debts. There was absolutely no sympathy for the Bowl family at the Ravenclaw table, and not much in the rest of the castle either. Miss Bowl would convince her parents she needed transferring out of Hogwarts before the end of her week's suspension, an action that again lifted the spirits of those inside the castle. The Weasley twins also had a plan, or rather a prank, to lift Hogwarts spirits. As a side issue, it also gave their headmaster a chance to experience firsthand what it was like to be controlled by a potion. Fred and George had also been present when Dumbledore had fought against the involvement of the auras, both were certain he wouldn't call them for this. Working with Master Pitsley had seen the potion's ability advance by leaps and bounds, and finally the once untouchable Albus Dumbledore was now within the grasp. A hush settled over the hall as Dumbledore climbed onto the staff table and started cavorting about on his knuckles and toes. His chimpanzee noises were clearly audible. McGonagall lifted her plate off the table and onto her lap, still eating her breakfast while sitting back and watching the show. This set the tone of response from the rest of the professors, and her approach to the situation was copied up and down the staff table. Henrika had just returned that morning with the 4 first years, and this impromptu entertainment was topping off a wonderful weekend. She could easily imagine Sirius, Barchoke and Master Pitsley sitting around the memory she was going to be sending and pissing themselves laughing, as some unknown individuals made a monkey out of Dumbledore. Thanks for reading. The Wolf Amongst the Sheep. Harry Crow. Disclaimer, with Christmas fast approaching, I have once more asked Santa for ownership of the Harry Potter empire. Since I'm more likely to get a jumper that would make one knitted by Molly Weasley look cool, I'm legally obliged to state here that Harry Potter still isn't mine. Chapter 27. It was an impassioned Amelia Bones who presented her case to the assembled Wizengamot. This really was something very close to her heart. Attempting to change centuries of accepted abuse was never going to be easy though. When the first protest came, it was from an unexpected quarter. Amelia had counted on the backing of all the witches in the Wizengamot. Apparently she was wrong to make that assumption. Oh, how she hated that hem, and the false, high-pitched little girl voice that wasn't fooling anyone. Apart from clearly failing the long, slim part of the criteria, Dolores Umbridge was pure barracuda. I am having difficulty understanding Madame Bones' concern over this matter. Didn't I read in the Prophet the other week that, due to her association with this crow creature, her niece was now taking some goblin concoction that supposedly protected the girl from unscrupulous wizards? Dolores' smile never reached her eyes. Here was the fabled wicked witch who would attempt to ensnare children into her gingerbread house, only to cook their bones in her cauldron. A false sweet and innocent facade hiding the real evil behind, but not fooling those who knew what Dolores really was. She smilingly twisted the proverbial dagger her question had just thrust into the heart of Amelia's proposal. One is then left to wonder about the motive behind this motion. Could it be to bring further publicity to what is nothing more than a very minor matter? Thus allowing her goblin friends to make even more gold from selling this protection myth to frighten fathers of young witches. Amelia was livid. Her years spent as an Auror had taught her not to waste time and energy by fighting against that anger, but to use that very same anger to aid her in battle. There was no doubt Amelia was now embroiled in a battle she intended to win. Umbridge was not only going down, Amelia was going to bury her for getting personal and introducing Susan into the argument. Wizengamot chamber decorum now allowed Amelia to get personal in her rebuffing of this bitch's argument. The head of the DMLE intended to take full advantage of that. Although Susan is my niece, I have raised her since she was a toddler as both her parents were murdered by Death Eaters. I look on Susan as my daughter and of course want to protect her, just as any parent would. It is perfectly understandable that Madame Umbridge doesn't have the maternal experience to comprehend this emotion. Amelia had a lot more to say, taking Dolores' deliberately misconstrued supposition apart a piece at a time. She is also badly misinformed about the goblin elixir that now protects my niece's virtue and honor. At no point did gold change hands between myself and the goblins over this matter, nor were the other young witches currently using this elixir asked for any form of payment. Harry is one of the most honorable people I have ever met, and he just wanted his friends protected from this vile and very real threat. I for one sleep better at night knowing Susan has this protection, and such a good friend looking out for her. Stick that in your pipe and smoke it, bitch. Amelia though wasn't finished, not by a long shot. Her anger had just sparked a piece of inspiration that might provide a method for swinging everyone behind her proposal. Her voice may have been steady but Amelia's determination to end a perceived wrong shone through. Before us is a motion to criminalize these potions that don't just affect and control witches. For generations, stories have been smugly and almost jokingly bandied about of witches using these type of potions to get a wizard interested in their charms. This behavior has almost become socially acceptable in our society, but it is every bit as wrong as a wizard using these disgusting potions to take advantage of a witch. This bit of truth shook the chamber out of its apathy. Amelia had just made this real for them. She pressed home that advantage. Imagine, if you will, waking up beside a person you would never willingly take to bed. Amelia's attention was currently fixed on Dolores, and not by accident. Now, bad as that is, add in a ring or a child conceived while under the influence of these potions and you have an instant recipe for disaster. Amelia's stare had now focused the chamber's attention onto Dolores. This was unwanted attention that saw Umbridge become red with rage, as wizard after wizard drew the conclusion Amelia had hoped for. The only way a wizard would ever end up in bed with Dolores Umbridge was under the influence of a massive amount of alcohol, or one of these potions. While waking up with a hangover beside Umbridge may be a vomit-inducing scenario, at least they would have the knowledge they must have been far too drunk to have gotten up to anything. These potions were an entirely different matter. Amelia's victory was never in doubt after that, with a discussion on a sliding scale of severity actually taking place before the vote was cast. The final ballot handed a landslide victory to the head of the DMLE, and it would now be illegal to brew, posses and especially use a love potion in Britain. Cornelius had the delighted head of the DMLE in his office for a celebratory drink, and couldn't help but wonder why he hadn't listened to Amelia's counsel more often. This decision today would certainly assist his plans to bring the goblins closer, and he was now certain Amelia would be a great team member to have on his side to help see those plans realized. I would like to offer my personal congratulations on your victory today. You spearheaded that brilliantly through an originally apathetic chamber. I was wondering if you would like the same challenge for a cause that I've been working on. This time though, the chamber might be downright hostile. The minister could see he had piqued her interest, and attempted to make the offer irresistible. What I need from you though is a promise of secrecy, until I'm ready to introduce this to the chamber. Even if you oppose the idea, which I obviously don't think you will, I must still have your promise. Asking to have the head of the DMLE on board meant there was no way this could be something that was even slightly dodgy, and her promise of silence only lasted until the motion was introduced. Okay, Cornelius, I'll bite. Just what are you up to? The minister waited until she'd actually given her word before passing on the information. I want to shut down Arthur Weasley's department, and make him head of a new one that handles all our relations between the ministry, the muggles and the goblins. As Amelia was mentally running through the ramifications of that, she held her glass out for a refill. She took a sip before coming up with questions that got right to the heart of the matter. Weasley is an inspired choice. Old pureblood family, loves muggles and has a son who's employed by Gringotts, and also teaches Harry. I'm assuming you're using the connection to sound out the goblins about this proposal. Their responses appear to be very positive, and so far they've not demanded anything that would break the deal. We've been asked to recognize an ambassador who would handle all their dealings with the ministry. Weasley would be our representative. This made perfect sense to Amelia. For the ministry to accept an ambassador from the goblins would be the wizards and witches of Britain acknowledging they were a sovereign nation, a large leap up from considering them beasts. With some Wizengamot members thinking muggles and goblins were equally beneath them, Cornelius might actually have a chance of getting this through the chamber without too much of a fight. Can you tell me anything more? Barchoke's name has been put forward as their first ambassador. This started Amelia laughing. Oh, that is just priceless. Have you a timescale in mind? I was hoping to introduce this at the end of June. A motion that changes laws and charters must sit in the chamber 40 days to allow proper time for discussion, and give any opposition time to build their arguments. During those 40 days I'm gambling on Harry attending the ministry summer ball, putting public pressure on those hoping to scupper the motion. Finishing off her drink, Amelia gave Cornelius the bad news. Harry won't be in Britain at that time. I've seen his summer plans, because I'll be joining him for part of those holidays. It was now Cornelius' turn to finish his drink. He thought for a moment before being totally honest with his head of DMLE. Amelia, without Harry at that ball, I don't think I can get the votes needed to pull this off. You clearly have information I don't. How can I get Harry to the ball? The problem might be his guests. Harry's invited them on holiday with him. I don't know whether he'd leave those guests and return to Britain, just so he could attend a ministry ball. The minister was basically thinking out loud now. He needed this to happen. What if we invited his guests too? Just who are we talking about? I see a couple of problems with that. The Bones, Abbotts, Longbottoms and Pattles shouldn't pose any political trouble, neither would Sirius Black and his date. Harry probably wouldn't even consider attending without Miss Granger, but it's her parents and Barchoke that will be the main obstacles. Can you swing a pair of muggles and a goblin attending the ministry's premier event? Fudge didn't get to be minister without being able to put a political spin on just about anything. What if we gave the group their own table? Add in the Weasleys as the ministry representative, you would be there as Harry's invited guest. Do you think the Grangers and Barchoke would be accepted for the opportunity to attend the premier magical event in Europe this summer, a ball with the boy who lived as the guest of honor? The goblins made him a centurion for chasing a ghost out of Hogwarts. It's now the ministry's turn to honor our savior. We could even hold it on his birthday, and come up with some kind of gift or award to show how much the Potter's sacrifice means to us. What do you think? I think you have the beginnings of a great idea. Rather than trying to heap honors onto Harry, I think you may have more success if you honor James and Lily. Yes, by all means include Harry in any award, but this spreads it around, and may make the evening more palatable to everyone attending. The minister loved that idea. We get to honor James and Lily Potter, as well as Harry Crow. That would certainly pacify some of the more traditional families who usually attend. Both knew what Cornelius meant by more traditional, but now they were left to decide what form the award would take. They still had time, so decided to ask Barchoke for his opinion. Changed days indeed when a goblin was being consulted on a prestigious ministry event. Amelia hadn't actually said she was on board for this adventure. As usual, she let her actions speak for her. Severus intended to let his actions speak for him too, or rather his inactions. Despite repeated prompting from Albus and Lucius, he wanted nothing to do with Harry Crow. Severus had no intention of going anywhere near the lad. Painful things seemed to happen to those antagonists who got too close to Centurion Crow. Albus and Lucius being two prime examples. He understood Albus's fear, it was hard not to. The headmaster ensured Severus knew the history of Tom Riddle, and Crow was so far ahead of where that future Dark Lord had reached at the same age it was terrifying Albus. Harry had political influence and financial power that a young Tom couldn't even dream about, and that was without taking into account the whole Hogwarts champion and a Centurion to boot. If Tom Riddle had those same advantages when he'd set foot inside the castle, Severus had not one shred of doubt Britain would now be ruled by Lord Voldemort. Today's prophet emphasized the casual power wielded by this 11-year-old. The law had just changed because Harry Crow had been sent some potion-scented chocolates by Owl. He neither ate the chocolates nor asked for the law to be changed. The ministry just tripped over itself in its haste to appease the boy. What Severus was struggling to understand was the way Albus kept trying to peddle the same old shit in Harry's direction, after repeatedly being slapped down for that very action. What made it worse though was his repeated efforts to get Severus to join him in this fatally flawed campaign. He wondered if Albus getting his own way, unopposed for so long, left him unable to adapt when things suddenly stopped proceeding as he intended they should. The headmaster was unquestionably a learned wizard, yet appeared to be blinkered where Harry was concerned. When his scheming didn't work, there was no plan B, just a different variation of the same shit plan that had already spectacularly failed. Even his godson, Draco, had learned to leave Crow alone, yet Albus seemed incapable of grasping the same lesson that was blatantly obvious to a pre-teen boy. Perhaps the headmaster suffered from a simple case of arrogance. Albus Dumbledore knew better than everyone else, so therefore he must be right. It didn't really matter to Severus what it was, he still wanted no part of it. What Severus really struggled to understand was the puzzle of why the Sorting Hat had placed the boy in Ravenclaw. His mother was still the brightest witch Severus had ever met in his life. While he may have called the lad's father a stuck-up arrogant bullying bastard of a git, stupid was not a term you could associate with James Potter. Harry though, while undoubtedly very bright, was easily the most Slytherin child to come through Hogwarts since Salazar opened his house to students. His godson was supposed to be a Slytherin, yet Severus shuddered to think what Draco's attitude would be like with even a tenth of Harry's power and fame. Harry on the other hand quietly went about his business, cultivating close friends and associates while destroying enemies with an efficient ruthlessness Salazar Slytherin would have been proud of. Crow ruled the first years without even trying or apparently meaning to do so, the entire year group following him out the Great Hall from the Christmas feast being the best example Severus could think of. On the other hand, Dumbledore's popularity had slipped to a level Argus Filch would be hard-pressed to match. That picture in the Prophet with Harry standing over a bloody Albus Dumbledore was a massive blow to his public persona. Even though the newspaper clearly stated it was Sirius Black who had knocked Albus to the floor, it was the image of Crow standing there with his sword pinning Dumbledore down everyone remembered. Severus was certain that those blasted Weasley twins were responsible for making Albus go ape, purely due to the fact Crow and his friends had just returned to the castle that very morning. With no proof, and the headmaster's already noted attitude to pranks and potions, Minerva wouldn't even allow him to take points from her house. It was now obvious to everyone that the headmaster was losing control of the school, and wouldn't be in the castle much longer if he didn't modify his behavior. This presented Severus with an even greater dilemma: what to do if Albus got booted out of Hogwarts. There existed an uneasy state of détente between himself and Crow at the moment, that would swiftly switch to all-out war should the lad ever discover the part 1 Severus Snape played in the Potter's demise. The potions master was sure being barred from Gringotts would be the least of his problems, keeping his head attached to his neck would be his number one priority. Albus wanted Severus to stay in Hogwarts, but all bets would be off if there was a new headmaster in charge. His mind was made up: if when Dumbledore got kicked out the castle, Severus would then make his own escape. Should Crow manage to get Albus out of Hogwarts, even defeating the Dark Lord might not be beyond this lad's growing capabilities. After that, magical Britain would swoon at his feet, and give him anything he asked for. Crow requesting Severus Snape's head on a stick was a distinct possibility. He needed to get said head onto the other side of the planet before that happened. The magical world might not know a lot about goblins, but asking one you'd wronged for mercy was simply a waste of breath, probably your last breath too. Sirius was out of breath by the time he'd climbed all the way up the hills, his dragon hide boots standing up to the journey through this desolate landscape better than the rest of his attire. He could have apparated by line of sight, but Sirius didn't want to make the person he was here to see any more nervous than he had to. By making his way up the hill, Bloody Mountain, on foot, he would have been visible for ages, and recognizable for at least the last half a mile. He approached the lone figure carefully, making no sudden movements and keeping his empty hands in plain sight. You're a hard person to find, hidden away in this wilderness. Well, at least I know you're still a marauder. What a prank, putting a wolf in charge of the sheep. How's it going, Shepherd Lupin? You look like shit. At least I'm dressed for the terrain, and the weather. Who the hell picked your clothes? My beautiful blonde girlfriend, it's supposed to be the latest fashion. She's a Swedish feeler who's taken pity on an old dog, and my tail has never stopped wagging since. If you think I'm going to say anything other than, yes honey, to whatever she wants, then you're crazier than you look, Mooney. The ragged and weather-beaten man replied with a sarcastic laugh. Well, I certainly considered me being crazy as one option when I saw you tripping through the heather. The old-timers told me this would happen if I spent too much time up here by myself, seems they were right. Humor a crazy old werewolf and tell me how you managed to get your badly tailored ass out of Azkaban. Harry and his father sprung me. Remus now had an angry look in his eyes, and a wand in his hand. Harry also sliced clean through the wand of the last wizard who drew on me. You have no idea how proud I am to say it was Albus Dumbledore he faced down, I've even got the pictures to prove it. He could see this wasn't helping his friend understand, so got serious. Sorry Mooney, I should have said Harry's adopted father. I know better than anyone James and Lily are dead, but first wasn't the secret keeper. I still blame myself for the deaths though, convincing them to swap to Peter was just stupid. Rat bastard led his master straight to them. He's still out there, Remus, but I had to promise Harry's father I wouldn't go chasing after him. I was told in no uncertain terms that Harry needs his godfather in his life, he also needs his Uncle Mooney. Now I know this is real, my imagination could never come up with a story half as crazy as that. Sirius, if this is your idea of some bullshit prank, I swear I'll kill you myself. Marauder's honor, Mooney. Henrika really is a beautiful blonde Swedish feeler. Mooney sprang at Sirius and soon they were hugging like long lost brothers, which is effectively what they were. To 11 and 12-year-olds, anyone out of their teens was considered old. By that method of reckoning, Professor McGonagall was ancient. Using this same measuring scale, the small stooped witch currently standing next to their transfiguration professor must be Methuselah's mother. It was Neville who provided the witch's identity to his three friends as they took the usual seats in transfiguration. That's Griselda Marchbanks, she's a friend of my grand's. She is also head of the Wizarding Examination Board, I wonder what she's doing here. ALs and NEWTs don't start for nearly 5 weeks, and we're only first year. This caused Hermione to stop as if she'd been poleaxed, earning concerned glances from her friends. I can't believe exams are just over 4 weeks away, and I forgot all about them. I haven't even started revising. Her panic attack would need to wait until later as McGonagall now demanded her class full attention. Good morning class. As you have already noticed, we have a visitor with us this morning. Madam Marchbanks has been testing Hogwarts students since the headmaster sat his NEWTs. I've asked her here today in the hope of gaining her expert opinion on this class. I want this to be a class exercise, so today we will all be working on transfiguring the same type of item. Minerva's wand soon had trays containing teapots landing at the end of each bench. Her students knew what to do with them. If it was anyone else other than Minerva McGonagall asking for this favor, Griselda would have rather impolitely told them to get stuffed. She figured Minnie had discovered a transfiguration prodigy, why else would she be handing out teapots to a group of first years? Griselda couldn't quite remember whether the teapot to turtle transfiguration was the end of second year, or the beginning of third. It certainly wasn't taught in first. The ancient witch needed her cane to keep from falling over as student after student completed the transfiguration. That wasn't what made Griselda's head spin though, they were using neither a recognized spell nor wand movements. Minerva soon had a chair configured for her guest before turning back to her class. Very well done. Now, as a treat, I want you spending the rest of the lesson using your imagination to see what else you can transfigure that teapot into. Madam Marchbanks and I will be observing, and I better not see anything dangerous on your bench. Minerva conjured a chair for herself and a small table between them. No sooner was the table solid than a tea service appeared on it. The professor poured tea for both of them, since Griselda couldn't take her eyes off the first years. I know exactly how you feel, this breaks the rules of magic we apparently only thought existed. I couldn't tell you about it before, you wouldn't have believed me anyway. This is one of those things you really need to see for yourself. With her hand shaking more than usual, Griselda reached for her tea. Minnie, I'm looking at it, and I still don't believe it. Now, before my old heart gives up in shock, I want you to tell me exactly what we're witnessing here. She was listening to a tale of goblin transfiguration while watching a menagerie of small animals run, scurry and hop around the benches. Quote ellipsis. So now I have a class that are so far ahead of their peers, I have no idea how to proceed into second year. They don't learn spells and there are no books to deal with a situation like this. As a written test, I required an essay on the difficulties of transfiguring inanimate material into a living creature. The essays were astonishing. They didn't waste reams of parchment giving me the wrong spells or back to front wand movements. Every single one of them got the fact that it was all about concentration, and their ability to properly imagine the creature they were aiming for. Madam Griselda Marchbanks didn't become the head of the exam board because she was stupid, the old witch caught on at once. Strip away the spell and wand movements, that's all there is left. Exactly. This leaves a very big problem though. This is easily the best class one have ever taught, but every single one of them will fail the current OWL and Newt exams. They'll ace the practicals, then fail miserably at the written part, because it's information they don't need to know. I could have them conjuring items in their second year, because every session is spent with a wand in their hand. Do you plan on rolling this out through the school? No, for a few good reasons. I'm having to learn a different way to transfigure myself. It will take a while longer to get the harder spells down. I think that's purely because I've been doing them a different way for most of my life. It's not easy to conceive there's a better way to do something that you're a certified master of. I can't ignore what's right in front of me though. There are students in this class who would struggle with traditional methods. You can see for yourself how quickly they're picking this up. Griselda found it impossible to refute what was right in front of her eyes. Minerva though wasn't finished. I'm hoping you can help me with the other reason. If the exams can't be changed, I'm going to have to spend the next 6 years teaching this class spells they will never use. On those headings, I won't teach September's new first year this method. This drew a sharp response from her friend. You have to continue teaching this method. I've never seen children this young so comfortable with their magic. I'll bring the rest of the examiners in to observe this class when we're here in June. I won't say a word to them beforehand. If we change the exam to, say 75% practical, with the rest made up of a few essay questions, that should be acceptable. We could even raise the threshold of transfiguration we expect them to be able to accomplish. Otherwise, this lot will be at ordinary wizarding level by the end of the 3rd year. I take it some of the class are even more accomplished than what we're seeing here. With a smile, Minerva levitated a large block of wood in Harry's direction. She'd hoped Griselda would ask that question. Centurion Crow, would you please show Madam Marchbanks what this method of transfiguration is capable of? It took a moment of thought before Harry decided what he wanted to do. The block of wood became a young lion cub, before being transfigured into a magnificent golden eagle. If there was any doubt what Harry was attempting, it ended when the eagle became a badger. A large silver serpent drew some gasps, before a baby dragon changed those gasps to shrieks. Hermione heard Harry telling the dragon to behave itself and asked if it was safe to touch. Being told to keep talking to it and scratch behind its ears saw her do just that. The deputy headmaster of Hogwarts and the head of the wizarding exam board were just as enthralled as the rest of the class, watching in disbelief as the young muggle-born witch scratched a baby dragon while talking to it in gobbledygook. Minerva finally found her voice. I understood the house emblems, Centurion Crow, but why the baby dragon? The symbol of Gringotts, Professor. I may have been sorted into Ravenclaw, but I'm still a goblin. Hermione removed her hand and, when no one else appeared interested in emulating her feat, Harry returned the dragon to the block of wood he started with. The bell signaled the end to the quickest lesson Griselda could ever remember. The time had appeared to fly past. She watched as student after student transfigured their creation back to the original teapot, and placed it on the end of their bench as they left. There were no bags to pack, no books or parchment to put away. Stow their wands and leave, that was all they had to do. Excitement buzzed around the ancient witch's body. She casually told the tale of being Albus Dumbledore's examiner for his NEWTs. What she didn't often mention was that those exams were still the same ones sat by today's young witches and wizards. Did the same shit for over a century and it was hard to get excited about it. Here was something new, so new it practically blew her mind. Minerva, you have to continue this. They've 4 years yet before they sit owls. That gives us plenty of time to bring in a new exam. If Hogwarts has another 4 years worth of students, trained in this method, following on behind, the ministry will be forced to change the exam. The professor could see the sense in that argument. It was one she wouldn't have considered though without Griselda's backing. I want you to keep me informed of their progress. This class will be our test group and I want them closely monitored. Gauging their abilities will be necessary for setting the exam criterion. If, as I suspect, the transfiguration they perform in that exam is of a far higher standard than currently required for owls, publicizing that should quickly kill off any opposition. She could hardly wait to bring the rest of the examiners to see this class. It had been at least a couple of decades since Griselda had felt like that about spending the beginning of June inside Hogwarts. They had no sooner left the classroom than Harry broached the subject that had got Hermione hot and bothered before class started. He was worried his best friend was regretting all the time they spent together, and would now want to spend that time studying for exams. What made it worse in Harry's opinion was that these were exams he was sure they would both ace. You seemed worried about our exams, Hermione. Surely you know you'll be top in all your classes. Harry, you're miles ahead in defense, potions and transfiguration. Neville has green thumbs to go with those green fingers of his and Stargazer Patil here has us all beat in astronomy. I might get top in charms and history of magic, but that's hardly all my classes. Isn't that enough? It was a serious question, a question that deserved a serious answer. Although the question had come from Padma, she could see the concern in Harry's eyes. If he thought for 1 second she was going to stop hanging around with her best friend to go on some revision crusade, he was badly mistaken. It was more surprise at Neville mentioning exams, and me not realizing how close they were. Before Hogwarts, I would have had a chart on my wall at home, with a color-coded revision schedule all worked out, since April. We spent April hammering through our extra lessons, and getting another upgrade to our potions books. Not once did I even think of exams. Neville was confused, not a new state for him when with his friends but one that he'd been experiencing less of late. You say that as if it's a bad thing, Hermione. Oh, it's certainly not a bad thing, it was more a surprise at myself. Before Hogwarts, exams were all I had, only books were my friends. I think it just hit me how much I had changed, and I'm very happy with those changes. I'm still going to try and beat Harry to be number 1 student in our year, but I can live with it if he wins. This got a chuckle out of Neville. Well, we've certainly got enough experience of it. He beats us every weekend in defense. I know what you mean though, my gran barely lets me out of her sight at home. I've never had friends before either, so Hogwarts has been unbelievable for me too. Well, I've enjoyed it as well. Being in a different house from my sister has allowed me to be myself, instead of everyone looking at us as if we were two halves of the same person. I know George and Fred play on that aspect a lot, but sometimes I think they are the same person. Parvati and I are very different. I need to catch her before lunch. I'll see you guys then. As their friend headed off, a smiling Harry thought he'd changed the most. He didn't mention that though, they had far more important things to talk about with Padma gone. Okay, now we've sorted that out, what are we going to do for the twins' birthday? We can use the room again for a party. I think we better check with McGonagall first this time. Both agreed with that idea before Neville aired his thoughts on the real problem. I think the way Harry handled it at Christmas was the right idea. Getting Parvati a gift as Padma's sister. I like Parvati, I just don't want her getting the wrong idea and hanging all over me because I wish her a happy birthday. Both Harry and Hermione were in total agreement with that. Padma meant a lot to all three of them and her twin sister had to be taken into consideration. With Hogwarts' help, a party for both would be easily arranged, and they had Sirius or Urgit to acquire any gifts they needed to buy. Since Lavender would have to be invited, any plans toward a surprise birthday party died then and there. The blonde Gryffindor would have the story spread all over the castle within hours of being told, so there was no chance of her keeping it from Parvati. With a general invite to all students of first year, Minerva couldn't find a reason to refuse their plans for a party. That she, Phileas and Henrika were all invited to made it an easy decision for the deputy headmistress to reach. Usually birthday parties would be held in the celebrating students' common room. With the twins being sorted into different houses, that option was not available in this instance. Harry and Neville made their way from the staff table, the Ravenclaw smiling while the Gryffindor searched for the courage his house was noted for. Both boys made their way to identical Asian witches, with the same task in mind. Harry knew he was getting off lightly while Neville wished for the umpteenth time the hat had placed him in Ravenclaw with his friends. Padma, we know it's your birthday tomorrow and wanted to hold a party in the room. McGonagall just gave us permission. A shriek of delight pierced the great hall, and probably a few eardrums too. All eyes were drawn to where Parvati had Neville in what could easily be described as a headlock, while she jumped up and down in excitement. You made Neville tell Parvati. Hey, he's the Gryffindor, I'm not brave enough for that. We're asking all of first year, we'll have our dinner there Saturday night. Some of the professors will be there too, and Sirius of course. The young witch's eyes sparkled with moisture as she answered her friends. That will be wonderful, and thanks for including Parv. No problem, her birthday is the 2nd of May too. Harry thought he was getting better at cracking jokes as both Padma and Hermione began laughing. It was only when he spotted Parvati out the corner of his eye, heading at speed straight for a certain centurion, he realized the joke was on him. Harry, bracing himself for the worst, just saw the two girls laugh harder. The excitement of a party swept through the great hall, infecting every house. This presented a problem for Draco. What to do? He'd kept his distance from Crow, no more antagonizing but certainly no socializing either. Now he was being forced to make a decision. Tales of the great time had by those who followed Crow out the hall at Christmas had Draco wanting to attend, but his pride was in the way. It was only thinking about the instructions his father had given that allowed Draco to circumvent his prideful obstacle. His father wanted information on Crow, so Draco could put this down as a spying mission. Of course, he would have to pretend to enjoy himself, otherwise he would stand out like a sore thumb. A spy needed to be unobtrusive and inconspicuous. Draco intended to blend right in. Ron Weasley had no such dilemma. There would be cake, he was sort of invited, no-brainer. He would finally get to see this room Seamus and Dean raved about. There might even be some of that goblin ale that was supposedly better than butterbeer. Ron finally had something to look forward to that wasn't related to Gryffindor playing Quidditch. Albus watched on, a mere observer as the castle slipped a little further from his grasp. His opinion was neither sort, nor did he think it would be listened to. For Albus Dumbledore, being ignored was a new experience, and not in any way a pleasant one. Thanks for reading. 2 I have been incredibly busy lately, so much so that I haven't one word written of the next chapter. Hope to maintain my weekly posting schedule but it may slip by a day or two. Questions and answers. Harry Crow. Disclaimer, I don't own these characters and my writing certainly couldn't be considered canon. If my efforts don't fit your idea of what a Harry Potter story should be, I can only offer my apologies and a suggestion. Writing your own really is the only way to ensure the story progresses exactly the way you want it to. It also gives the rest of us something to read. Chapter 28. Sirius finished their lesson early to allow the girls plenty of time to get ready for the party, and so he could have a private talk with his godson. Padma and Hermione left chatting to Henrika about what they were going to wear tonight. Neville quickly headed in the opposite direction from that of the three witches. The moment they were alone, Sirius gave Harry the news he'd been asked to deliver. Your father had a visit from Amelia Bones yesterday, and wants to come to Hogwarts tomorrow to talk with you about it. He wouldn't come today because it was the girl's birthday. Harry could see Sirius didn't understand his father's delay, so tried to explain. We goblins don't celebrate Christmas, or any of the other days of the year that wizards and muggles use as an excuse for a day off to party. Someone's birthday though is their most important day of the year, and really should be celebrated. He wouldn't want anything to disturb what we've set up for tonight. Have you any idea what this visit from Amelia was about? I got the impression that the ministry were trying to forge closer ties to the nation, and of course you were stuck right in the middle of it. I think our guess at Christmas appears to be spot on, and a certain someone might be making an appearance at the ministry's summer ball. Just as well I've had all those extra lessons on wizarding etiquette then, thanks to Lord Black. You got a date for this ball. This drew a smile from his godfather, delighted that their relationship had reached the stage where they joked easily in each other's company. Well, since I assume the most beautiful witch we both know will soon have a date, I was going to ask Henrika. What do you think the chances are she'll say yes? Sirius was surprised that Harry didn't have a smart answer for him. His godson actually appeared troubled about something. You think Henrika will say no, or are you worried that Hermione might? The joking was gone as Harry asked him a serious question, probably one of the most serious questions it was possible to ask another person. Sirius, how do you know when a girl is the one? This had Sirius backpedaling. He was delighted beyond words that Harry trusted him enough to ask that question, and terrified beyond measure of the consequences should he muck it up. Well, Harry, that's a biggie. Have you asked your father? Goblins are different, Sirius. Apparently the couple just know when they've met their life partner. My father explained it as the couple being instantly attracted to each other, growing very close in a short space of time and never wanting to be parted. Here's the problem though, I think I may be more goblin than anyone thought possible. My father's own words kinda perfectly describes how I feel about Hermione. My problem is I don't know what to do next. Harry, at your age that's not necessarily a bad thing. Sirius realized he'd gotten it wrong by the anger in his godson's reply. I am head of a noble and ancient house, hold the rank of centurion and am champion of Hogwarts. That troll never complained about how young I was when I had to cut it down. If you can't take this seriously, I'll talk to Cursebreaker Weasley about it. This forced Sirius to really look at the young wizard, goblin in front of him and concede his godson was correct. Harry certainly never acted 11, so perhaps it was time to stop treating him as such. I'm sorry Harry, your question just threw me for a moment. I'm still struggling to see what your problem is here. We both know how Hermione feels about you. A knockback is certainly not on the cards. Sorry, Sirius, I shouldn't be getting angry with you. Last year I told Hermione I wouldn't even think of starting anything before Voldemort was gone. Neither of us have any idea how long that could be. Hermione is beautiful, smart and just wonderful to spend time with. What if she gets fed up waiting on me and looks elsewhere? I don't think I could handle that. Harry, Hermione is as likely to look elsewhere as you are. Since the entire country now knows who she is, and you will in all probability be taking her to the ministry ball, I don't see how asking her to be your girlfriend could be putting her in any more danger. Just from watching you two, I know she is anything but a distraction to your training. You work harder just to please her, and she does the exact same for you. My advice would be to just ask the girl, though you get to tell Dan and Emma. That's pretty much what I was thinking, but there is still a massive problem. You taught us about the proper courting behavior and that would be great, except that I'm a goblin. If I followed the procedure, the press would be all over us and claiming I had chosen to live as a wizard. This was like a light coming on for Sirius as he finally grasped his godson's unique problem. Quote ellipsis. And I'm assuming that there is a goblin procedure, which would lead to the opposite charge. Relieved that his godfather finally got it, Harry nodded. It's like I'm boxed in and don't know what to do next. I want to tell Hermione how I feel about her, but where would that leave us? I think you should tell her, and explain the problem. There is a third option that you're forgetting about, though I'm sure Hermione will soon bring it to your attention. The look of longing in Harry's eyes meant Sirius couldn't leave his godson hanging a moment longer. You're overthinking what is basically a very simple problem, with an even simpler solution. If the magical and goblin options aren't available, surely there must be a muggle method for girls and boys to get together. Just ask Hermione to be your girlfriend, no magical or goblin courtship, nothing formalized. The only difference I can see happening between you two is that everyone would then know you were a couple. Do you think Hermione would be happy with that? Harry, I think your young lady would be ecstatic with that. I've watched the two of you together and can clearly see this is something you've thought about. A word of advice from your godfather though, best friend to girlfriend is such a huge step. At this stage, you really need to take your time before making any further commitment. I'll be happy as long as Hermione agrees to become my girlfriend, anything else we'll deal with as time goes by. Since September, I've had witches coming onto me from all directions, and none of them can hold a candle to Hermione. She can make me feel happy and wanted just by holding my hand. The smile now on Harry's face had Sirius giving himself the proverbial pat on the back. He should have known pride comes before a fall. His godson's next question brought him crashing back down to earth. Sirius, how do you feel about Henrika? Needing a moment to think about that, Sirius answered with a question of his own. Why do I get the feeling there's more than idle curiosity behind that question? As well as liking her very much, she also works for me, well, the Lily Potter Foundation. When not teaching in Hogwarts, the professor will be dividing her summer holidays between working in Gringotts and coming on holiday with our group. If you are serious about each other, that's great. If not, then things could get really awkward if it all goes wrong. Sirius was left wondering how Harry could be so insecure to be fretting over Hermione, yet mature enough to ask a question like that. Sirius hadn't even thought about the consequences Harry was mentioning, being happy at the moment just taking things a day at a time. It was, though, time for total honesty with his godson. Harry, after 10 years in Azkaban, I'm not the same young wizard who went into that shithole. Am I serious about Henrika? I honestly don't know. Could I become serious over one of the best things that's ever happened to me? That would have to be a big yes. I'm gonna take my own advice to you though and take time to work my feelings out. I honestly think if we decide this couldn't go any further, we'll both split as friends. That's really the best I can say at the moment. His godson was smiling again, so Sirius was left hoping he was 2 for 2. We all like her, Sirius. I know that ever since Valentine's Day, Hermione and Padma treat her more like a big sister or favorite aunt when we're not in class. I would hate for it to become awkward if you guys fell out. I'm pleased you approve, and there is someone else I would like you to meet. I finally tracked down my friend Moony. Remus was the Gryffindor prefect with your mum as well as being a marauder with your dad and me. I was hoping we might invite him along for part of the summer, though the lunar cycle would decide which part. He's an expert in defense too, and could help keep up your training while you're away. This didn't get the positive response Sirius was hoping for, leading him to wonder why. You're not bothered about his little furry problem, are you? Goblins can't be infected by lycanthropy, to us they are just large wolves. I know I'm physically not a goblin, I was just trying to show we don't have the same prejudice against werewolves that wizards do. It was more the defense thing that bothered me. I don't mind learning from him during the holidays, but I want to keep Cursebreaker Weasley as our main defense tutor. Our lessons are hard, but he always manages to get a bit of fun in there too. He really is a brilliant teacher. Sirius decided to quit while he was ahead. I have no problem with that, and also have a high opinion of Bill. Now we better get out of here, and get ready for the party tonight. You and I all sorted now? I think so, just talking about it out loud has helped. Thanks, Sirius. No problem, Harry, that's what a godfather's for. Both felt better for their chat as they headed out the room. Minerva was as excited as anyone, currently waiting in the corridor, when she saw a door appear out of the stone wall, just because Harry had asked it to. Phileas had told her of this phenomenon as he used the room to practice fencing with Harry and Hermione. Nothing could have prepared her though for the sight that greeted everyone as they entered this very special room. For a start, the room was circular, even though they weren't currently in one of the towers. The ceiling was constructed from multiple bolts of brightly colored silk, the rainbow of different colors all dropping from a high center point, and creating the impression they were now inside a marquise. The silk from the ceiling continued down the walls and only stopped at the floor, reinforcing the tent-like impression. The massive chandelier hanging from the center of the ceiling was throwing flickering light onto all these colors and creating a wonderfully warm and welcoming atmosphere, aided by the intricately woven Indian rugs that were arrayed around the circumference of the room. It was here that all the tables were laid out, in settings of 4s and 6s. The center of the room was left clear and only the soft music playing gave Minerva a hint of what it would be used for later. Minerva had camped in a wizarding tent with her family when she was a young girl, but those, while clearly tents on the outside, were more like buildings on the inside. She couldn't remember ever seeing a stone room dressed to appear as if you were in an actual tent. This exciting illusion meant their evening was off to a flyer, and they hadn't even sat down yet. Excitement was certainly in the air, though 2 Gryffindor first-year witches appeared to be heading for the hyper end of the scale. Padma grabbed her sister and Lavender by the arm and dragged them toward a table that seated 6, being quickly joined by Hermione, Harry and Neville. Minerva found herself sitting at a table set for 4, with the other professors and Sirius, while the students gravitated toward tables with their housemates. Minerva was somewhat surprised to see Draco Malfoy in attendance tonight. There was no surprise that he, Pansy and the other 2 boys ended up sitting at a table for 4, away from the other Slytherins. There was a surprise though when Hermione stood up to say a few words. "We are all here to celebrate the birthday of our friends, Padma and Parvati Patil. The plan is to have dinner, followed by dancing, until we have to leave for curfew. Let's get started by singing the traditional song, Happy Birthday to You." As everyone sang the song, a large birthday cake, complete with 2 sets of 12 candles already lit, appeared on the table the twins were sitting at. With one side dressed in Ravenclaw colors, and the other Gryffindor, the girls moved to their respective ends of the cake. When the song finished, Parvati and Padma blew their candles out to much cheering. That was also the sign for dinner to appear on all the tables, along with jugs of goblin ale. When Hermione handed Padma her gift, the birthday witch was overcome. "Guys, I thought organizing this party was my present. This is too much. Hey, remember our friend who thinks birthdays are the most important day of the year? I'm beginning to agree with him. Happy birthday, Padma." Hermione then handed over a present to Parvati. The Gryffindor witch tore the wrapper off to reveal a glossy magazine, the like of which she'd never seen. "I know you like the fashions in Harrods, and I've seen you reading Teen Witch Weekly from cover to cover. I got you a year's subscription to Vogue. It's a Muggle fashion magazine." Parvati's eyes were almost popping out her head at the full-color pictures of the latest Muggle fashion. Neither she nor Lavender knew any of the people mentioned in the magazine. That didn't mean they wouldn't both be drooling over what these unknown women were wearing. Padma was also delighted with her gift, a boxed set of Jane Austen novels. She'd heard her friend say this was her favorite author, now Padma would get a chance to find out for herself. Lavender gave both sisters makeup sets, something Parvati appreciated more than Padma. Neville had sought professional help with his gifts. He was sure Henrika wouldn't steer him wrong. Not even Parvati could equate the colorful jumper she received as a romantic gift. Padma's gold bangle though was simply beautiful, and very much appreciated by the birthday witch. Harry had relied on Sirius for advice on this matter, giving Parvati a card with a voucher inside. The voucher stated "I owe you one shopping trip," causing the Gryffindor to bounce up and down in her seat with excitement. The 3 friends were pleased that she'd at least managed to curb the annoying habit of emitting the tear-piercing squeal when she got really excited. With Susan and Hannah having birthdays between now and the 1st of September, both girls would be receiving the same voucher and they could do that shopping trip one day during the summer holidays. Hermione and Padma would both be included, though neither needed a voucher. He was actually quite nervous watching his friend open her gift. Her eyes lighting up with delight told Harry he'd got it right, and allowed him to release the breath he'd been holding. "Oh Harry, I absolutely love it." Padma then began to show the table just what the it in question was. She was holding a bronze dragon skin shoulder bag that was styled decidedly more feminine than Harry's version of the item. Apart from the color and size, there was also one other prominent feature that made certain neither would ever get their bags confused with each other. This particular model had Padma spelt in blue topaz into the flap that covered over the opening. That it was also charmed bottomless and featherlight meant Padma could use it anywhere, even places that didn't know blue and bronze marked Padma as a Ravenclaw. As the meal progressed, both witches received small gifts from all their friends. McGonagall even provided one that had all of them cheering. She extended their curfew by an hour, providing they were all led back to their dorm by an adult. As the meal finished, plates of birthday cake appeared on each table. This was the moment Harry had been dreading, though neither he nor Hermione could see any way out of it. As the music increased in volume, Neville asked Padma to dance. Being the only other male at the table, Harry understood that asking the other birthday witch to dance was the only option available. He was gracious about it though, even while everyone there knew he actually wanted to dance with Hermione. Having danced with Padma tons of times, Harry knew at once Parvati was a different witch. They may be physically identical but neither he, Hermione nor Neville had any trouble telling them apart. Dancing with Padma would be light, jokey and a lot of fun. Parvati on the other hand was all about invading your personal space as she tried to get as close as possible. Harry managed to keep smiling and chatting, while offering not one grain of encouragement. The closing bars of the song had him returning Parvati back to her seat, where Lavender's longing looks were politely ignored as Harry headed straight for Hermione. Thankfully, Dean and Seamus came over to ask both witches to dance. Ron seemed engrossed in conducting an experiment to discover how many pieces of cake he could eat without being physically sick. They were left to hope his experiment would be a success. Watching Ron Weasley throw up wasn't anyone's idea of entertainment. Harry was back dancing with Hermione in his arms, and everything in the world was all right again. Pansy was dancing with Draco while running off at the mouth. Their situation inside Hogwarts had changed so much though that the Slytherin was forced to do her complaining at a whisper so low that only Draco could hear her. Look at that mudblood, hanging all over him. Who does she think she is? Standing up and speaking in front of McGonagall too. I don't know how much longer I can take this. I keep writing to my father about how bad Hogwarts is becoming. He just owls back telling me to keep my head down. I hope your father is doing something about this situation. If he is, then father won't tell me, and I certainly don't want to know. Pansy almost caused them to stumble after hearing that, forcing Draco to explain a few home truths as they continued dancing. If I get caught doing anything against Crow, I'll be barred from Gringotts. At that point, my life is practically over. Don't say that, Draco. It's true, and you would be the first thing to go. It's only the knowledge that I'll inherit when I come of age that's stopping your father cancelling our betrothal. We both know he wouldn't hesitate if my inheritance was gone. My own father would probably take action too. I would then need to marry, have a child and wait for them to come of age. With no fortune, and probably not even enough gold to put that child through Hogwarts, there won't be witches lining up to marry me. My father is far more likely to sire another heir himself, and totally disinherit me. Pansy was almost in tears at the future Draco painted for them, knowing he had described both their parents' probable actions perfectly. Both fathers would be willing to wait the 5 years needed for Draco to inherit, but would instantly cut him off at the knees should that inheritance be lost for another generation. That Lucius was the one at fault here wouldn't save Draco. The Malfoy patriarch would take whatever action he deemed necessary to get the family fortune back under his control as quickly as possible. When Draco was no longer that option, he would be ruthlessly cast aside, and Pansy would find herself betrothed elsewhere. Now you see why I have to walk on eggshells while at Hogwarts. It will soon be summer and then we can get out of this place. Let's just enjoy ourselves tonight. At least it's a good party. Hermione was dancing with Harry, so therefore it was a great party. She could tell something was bothering him though, and assumed it was what he'd been told earlier by Sirius. Should I be getting worried here? Will blade-wielding Centurion Crow be making an appearance? Oh, I hope not. Malfoy is behaving himself and McGonagall's got her beady eye on Weasley. I'm not expecting any trouble tonight. If not tonight, then what's troubling you, or can't you say? If I can't say what's on my mind to you, then I don't have any hope of getting what I want. Harry mentally took a deep breath before plunging right in. I really like you, Hermione, but offering the official courtship that you deserve is not an option for me. Hermione actually finished his sentence for him, having already worked out this connotation back when Sirius taught them about courtships. Quote ellipsis. Because it would be reported as if you had chosen a wizarding future. Can I assume the goblin option is out, also for the same reason? Yes, all I'm left with is asking if you would be my girlfriend. Yes, Hermione followed this up by wrapping Harry in her arms and performing a quick kiss, their first kiss as boyfriend-girlfriend. This led to some cheering and whistling from those around them, forcing the now embarrassed but happy couple to retreat to their table. Hermione was sitting close by Harry's side, their arms wrapped around each other with her head resting on his shoulder. I don't need any more than that, Harry. I'm really happy just being your girlfriend. My parents might freak out at anything more, at least until I'm a good few years older. It's just not the goblin way to do things so casually, Hermione. We're all about commitment and contracts. Do you think I'm a casual girlfriend, Harry? Absolutely not, and I would like to shout that to the world. Stick to telling my mum and dad for now. They were interrupted by a delighted Padma, bending down and wrapping both of them in a hug. This is such a wonderful birthday party, and now we even have another reason to celebrate. 2 of my best friends finally getting together. I'm so happy for you both. The happy couple were soon back on the floor dancing, leaving a relieved godfather with a wide smile on his face. Something his date noticed. You knew Harry was going to ask her. We spoke about it earlier. Harry wanted to offer Hermione more, but couldn't because of his circumstances. Sometimes I see Harry as a mini James, then he'll act in a way that is just so Lily. Sometimes though, Harry Crow is pure goblin and throws me totally. That lad is an enigma I need to solve to be a proper godfather figure, and your research for your book about goblins will surely help. Are you applying for the role of my unpaid research assistant? Henrika had asked the question jokingly, but could see Sirius was not taking it as such. What's the matter, Sirius? Deciding once more that honesty would be his best policy, Sirius spoke about what had been on his mind since this afternoon. Your name came up in my discussion with Harry today. It felt like your brother was asking me what my intentions were toward you. You do know those 4 really like you. She was now nervous, wondering what had been said. Henrika just asked right out. Quote ellipsis. And what did you tell your godson about your intentions toward me? I told him the truth. 10 years in Azkaban has a way of changing you, in ways I'm still not comfortable with. After an incident at the Granges over Christmas, I watched Harry and Hermione fall asleep together. They looked so content and comfortable, Emma just tucked them in and left them sleeping. I went to my room and cried myself to sleep, overcome with the sheer beauty of the scene. There hasn't been much beauty in my life, and then I met Henrika Hobson, the single most beautiful person it has ever been my pleasure to meet. She now relaxed in Syria's arms as they continued slowly waltzing around the room. Whatever was coming next, it was not the end of their fledgling relationship, and anything else they could work at. So, what I'm trying to say is that, until I can get a grip on this different person that's inhabiting my body, I don't know what else I have to offer you. I realize you may have far better offers available. A pair of incredibly soft lips pressing against his stopped Sirius saying any more. So, you just talked yourself into the position of an unpaid research assistant for the summer. Your duties will include following me around and taking notes, helping collate those notes, and making sure I don't get sunburned when we lie on these promised beaches to begin writing my book. There may have been a number of applicants for the post, but yours was the only one I seriously considered. This may just be a temporary position at the moment, but who knows what awaits us in the future. We both may find ourselves with permanent contracts a few years down the line. This which really took Siria's breath away. When I said you were a beautiful person, I wasn't just talking about looks that could stop a bludger in flight. You have a beauty that comes from inside, and shines through everything you say and do. I've watched as you helped Hermione and Padma grow more confident in themselves, and getting Neville over his shyness and crush is nothing short of miraculous. That you're then prepared to spend time building a broken down wizard back up to what passes as normal for me, I may have to stay close to you for many, many years. Henrika's smile now rivaled the chandelier for brightness. One step at a time, Sirius, one step at a time. Minerva was delighted to spot 2 of her prefects when they all left the room. Hello, Professor, we were wondering why the first years were out past their curfew. That's why Penny and I were looking for them. 10 points to Gryffindor, Mr. Weasley, and 10 for you too, Miss Clearwater. I like my prefects to show initiative, and I'm very pleased with you too. Now, if you will escort your charges back to their houses, Professor Flitwick and I will see to the Hufflepuffs and Slytherins. The groups of excited first years were soon being led away, but not before both Patil sisters had thanked everyone for coming. That Harry and Hermione had added a light kiss to their saying goodnight and morning greeting hugs was the only noticeable difference to their behavior. Now they were a dating couple. Their friends didn't react any differently either. Hermione was usually on Harry's arm as they made their way around the castle. Both Harry and Hermione felt different though, moving their relationship from best friends to a dating couple had both of them grinning like Cheshire cats. Even spotting a sour-faced Master Sharkshard, waiting with his father and Cursebreaker Weasley, couldn't spoil their mood. Master Sharkshard tried his best though. One lucky scratch and your father, and the director, seem to think you can take me. After your father has completed his business, you and I are going to crossblades, Crow. That fancy little knife of yours won't save your ass today. Harry opened the room, a room that now had a private area set up in one corner. That this area had an armchair and a sofa confirmed to Harry that the room understood what he wanted, even before he knew himself. Father, last night Hermione agreed to become my girlfriend. Can we include her in these discussions? I don't want to have any secrets from Hermione and hate to see her worrying that I might be heading into trouble. You told me my mum and dad shared everything, that's what I've always wanted too. Both Barchoke and Hermione were taken aback by this. His father nodded though, mentally deciding just how much to tell them both as they made their way over to the seated area. Bill started Padma and Neville working while the large goblin master of the blade stomped up and down, doing a passable impression of a bear with a sore head. Barchoke stared into the young witch's eyes, desperately trying to impart the seriousness of what she was about to hear. Hermione, what we speak of here this morning is effectively government secrets. Harry knows this, and must trust you implicitly to even suggest you sit in on this. I just want to make sure you understand, knowing these secrets can be a burden that can't be shared. I'll be able to talk about it with Harry though, that will be more than enough. Every time I see another task in his eyes, I worry over how I'll be able to help him. Now I'll not only know, but hopefully be able to help plan too. She can see right through my best stoic face, father, and then worries over what I might have to do. Unless it's something the director specifically doesn't want Hermione to know, I really don't want there to be any secrets between us. Having made his mind up, and seeing his son had already done the same, Barchoke began to tell them why he was here. Since this situation will obviously involve Hermione, I'm going to tell you both everything. Anything else though, I'll need to get permission from the director. All three were happy with that, so Barchoke began his explanation. Harry grasped at once what effect his father becoming an ambassador could have on wizard-goblin relations and was all set to say yes to everything when his father urged caution. They want to make this ball an evening dedicated to honoring the family who rid our country of Voldemort, with both your parents receiving posthumous awards that will keep their memories alive. The ministry hope to have a first-year wizard and witch attending Hogwarts in September, entirely funded by the James and Lily Potter Scholarship Fund. They intend to support 2 new students every year for the next decade. Hermione's hand was currently in Harry's. She felt his grip tightening as he heard this news. Her boyfriend's response then made her even prouder of him. Can we get the Lily Potter Foundation involved too? Give the ministry the deserved credit for coming up with the idea, just provide the gold to extend the period to 20 years. I also think we need a panel to decide what new first years get chosen. This has to go to deserving cases. The last thing we want is rich bloods saving money by having their children's Hogwarts tuition paid. His father agreed with all of that. I think a representative from the ministry, Hogwarts and possibly Sirius representing us until you're old enough should do. Any more members and you would get nothing done. You never asked what they intended for you. I assumed some award for me to stick on a shelf. As long as there are no statues, or anything stupid like that involved, I'll be fine. Barchoke was so proud of his son, he decided to paint the full picture for him. Fudge reckons that you attending this ball will give him the votes he needs to pull this off. For all his faults, we believe the minister has a very good chance of achieving this. Should I become ambassador, the director would like my son to follow in my footsteps. He thinks Lord Harry James Potter, Goblin Ambassador, has a nice ring to it. Harry so wanted to jump across the space between himself and his father, hugging him for all he was worth. Here was everything he ever wanted being made available to him. Instead of being faced with an impossible choice, he literally could have it all. I think Lord Harry James Potter, Assistant Goblin Ambassador, has a much nicer ring to it. I would love the chance to work with my father for many years, before he graciously retired to spend time with his grandchildren. Hermione didn't know that this was the goblin dream. To raise your family to the point where your children were ready and able to take over the reins, while you then spent your retirement telling your stories to all the grandchildren they had provided you with. What she did know though was that even the thought of this outcome made Harry and his father very happy. She supposed Barchoke standing and offering the centurion salute to his son was about as near to hugging each other as goblins got. With the meeting now over, Barchoke had a word of warning for Harry. Master Sharkshard has been taking a bit of a ribbing from myself and the director. He appears determined to prove your victory was a fluke. He doesn't know about your sword's abilities, and I had to promise the director a copy of this memory. I think Master Sharkshard got one over on Ragnick many years ago, and this is the director's form of payback. Just be careful, and make it quick. Harry was reminded of the goblin saying that, even on the sunniest of days, a little rain might fall. There was no way any of them expected the torrent that was about to be unleashed. Thanks for reading. 2 Harry Crow is now my longest story, and this chapter fought me harder than the other 27 combined. There are parts of this I must have rewritten 4 times before I was satisfied with it, a very unusual occurrence for me. A big thank you to all the readers who have given this story such tremendous support. Ask any author and they'll tell you the same thing. It really does help with the writing when you know readers are enjoying your efforts. Yield or die. Harry Crow. A reader kindly pointed out that this chapter would put me over the 1.5 million words posted on FFN milestone. Coincidentally, it should also push Harry Crow over that same milestone for number of hits. All I can say is thank you so very much for reading. There has also been a fair number of suggestions on what I should do with Harry Crow. I would like to settle the matter here and now. Harry Crow will not be split into separate books for each year, rather be one large story encompassing multiple years. I am well aware FFN is littered with unfinished and abandoned attempts at this feat. I will do my utmost to ensure Harry Crow joins the rest of my stories by having the word complete tagged onto it. If I find the story becoming stale in my mind, I will write something else for a few weeks and then come back to this. Since Harry and Co are approaching their summer holidays in this story, I think I'll be writing Harry Crow for a while yet. When it's cold, dark, wet and windy outside, writing about sunshine, beaches and bikini-clad villas becomes a very attractive option. Chapter 29. Harry understood at once what his father meant about ending this fight early. He would need to, as Master Sharpshard certainly wasn't in training mode this morning. The object of today's lesson appeared to be showing Harry how much he still had to learn, and teaching him this lesson in as little time as possible. Without his magic, Harry doubted he would have lasted a minute. He did have magic though, and it was time to use it. That he didn't have his knife in his hand lulled his mentor into a false sense of security, a security that was about to be trampled all over. After Harry parried his first 2 attacks, Master Sharpshard then found himself standing there, not with a sword in his hand, but a bright yellow daffodil. When a web then shot from Harry's sword, the large goblin found himself suspended from the ceiling, a dozen feet off the ground. Harry turned to see his father on the floor with laughter, his goblin stoicism shattered into a million pieces. Padma and Neville were cheering wildly at his victory, but Harry didn't get to see any more as his vision was suddenly blocked by a mass of brown hair. Hermione arrived and hit like an express train. The scream of terror that she then produced was also as loud as any steam whistle. Harry spun to see his mentor of the blade had easily sliced through his web, and was now using the cut section to swing down to the ground like Spider-Man. The goblin surprised everyone by using Harry's method of entrapment as a means of getting swiftly back into the fight. Master Sharpshard had a battle axe in his hand and murder in his eyes. Harry barely had time to push Hermione out of the way before the goblin attacked with a ferocity his student had not faced before. Hermione had not gone far though, and, seeing her boyfriend in terrible danger, didn't even think about her next move. Drawing her sword, she charged at the large goblin. Master Sharpshard was not to be denied though. Hermione's attack was barely a distraction. Her blade was casually and harmlessly deflected away, before a violent kick into her midriff put her out of the fight. Seeing Hermione flying across the room to land in a heap changed something inside Harry. The battle axe slicing through his dragon hide tunic and cutting across his chest barely registered. The shout of triumph died in the goblin's throat as his opponent ignored the inflicted wound, and was certainly not for stopping the fight after first blood had been drawn. Master Sharpshard now found himself facing a fully armored and totally enraged Centurion Crow. Any reminding Neville and Padma needed that Harry's father wasn't human was currently being provided in spades. Barchoke attacked the magical barrier that had reappeared in front of them like a wild animal that had a wicked dagger in its hand. He snarled, clawed, slashed and kicked to no avail though, the barrier held. Barchoke stopped as he witnessed the impossible. Hermione's bracelet began to cover her injured body in golden armor. This golden armor was still recognizable as his clan's design, but it should still be impossible. Hermione lying there unmoving after the kick to the lower ribs meant she couldn't be responsible for this, and Harry currently had his hands full. Bill was trying everything he knew to get through the shield, and having as much success with his wand as Barchoke was with a blade. The trouble would appear to be that, as skilled and experienced as he was, his knowledge was nothing in comparison to Hogwarts. The castle was a few steps ahead of him at every turn. Noticing she was also helping her champion saw Bill lower his wand. Master Sharpshard had never faced any opponent who was as quick or as strong as this Centurion. The fact that both the blades he was now facing were also firing curses as they attacked, curses that were getting through his defenses as he was forced to concentrate on not having a belly full of goblin steel, and the experienced warrior knew he was in trouble. When the terrain started to literally alter beneath his feet, putting obstacles in his path as he was forced to back away from this golden maelstrom, the goblin knew he was in serious trouble. The canute finally dropped when his left foot suddenly found a hole that wasn't there a second ago. This wasn't just trouble he was in, this was deep dragon shit. When that very same hole suddenly closed, trapping his foot, the master of the blade was sure he'd fought his last fight. Crow was fighting like a possessed demon and the goblin veteran was starting to feel the blood lost from his multiple wounds affecting him. He certainly felt the kick that lifted him right off the ground, ripping his boot apart as his foot was torn free. Landing on his back saw vines grow out the floor and start to hold him there. He didn't have time to worry about that though. An enraged Centurion had a golden foot planted on his chest and a sword at his throat. Yield or die. I don't care which you choose, just do it quickly. With the fight over, the barrier came down and Barchoke raced to his son. Harry, no, not like this. Hermione needs you, no one else will be able to get past her armor. Barchoke thought this was the only thing that saved the downed goblin's life, though being reminded who injured Hermione in the first place nearly saw Harry's blade driven home. As his son headed toward Hermione, Barchoke knelt beside his longtime friend. Tell me why I shouldn't just gut you where you lay. Maybe I won't even give you that release. My son has inflicted enough damage that you would bleed to death within an hour or so anyway. That might give you enough time to realize just how badly you fucked up. Even you must realize that killing him would start a war our nation couldn't hope to win. I would never have killed your son. Once you attacked Hermione, nothing else would stop him. I'm surprised he let you live. Barchoke let this sink in a moment before continuing. He needed to take action soon. The blood flowing from a few of the deeper wounds Harry had inflicted really would eventually kill the trapped fool. No one else can even find this room, yet Hogwarts opens its door for Harry, and changes the room to whatever he requires. You chose to fight the Hogwarts champion in such a room, a champion who's also a Centurion. I'm surprised a bolt of lightning didn't shoot out the ceiling to fry your ass. Even that there wasn't enough stupidity for the occasion, you then commit the almost fatal error of attacking his mate. Are you really so stupid or do you just have a Dumbledore complex? You're Master Sharpshard, therefore you can't be defeated. Guess again you delusional old fool, my son just cut you to pieces and dropped you onto your back. Harry dropped to his knees beside Hermione, his armor had vanished and his bare hand now touched the golden lattice protecting his girlfriend. Their friends were also there, and the retreating armor allowed Bill to cast some medical diagnostic charms on the young witch. I'm seeing a couple of cracked ribs and some soft tissue damage, nothing major though moving will be painful until we can get it treated. Bill stopped talking when it became obvious neither of the two were listening to him, all their attention was focused on each other. Hermione had never been hit so hard in her life, the blow had taken all the wind, and fight, out of her. As she'd lain there, struggling to get a breath, Hermione had heard the noise of battle and the screams coming from their friends. It felt as if her heart had stopped, a heart that only started beating again when Harry knelt beside her. Seeing her boyfriend caused Hermione to forget all about her injury, Harry appeared to have been fighting inside a giant blender. His tunic was no longer black, having liberal patches of red splattered all over the front. Don't try to get up, Hermione, your injuries. Quote ellipsis. Are nothing compared to yours. We need to get you to a healer. You need to get out of that tunic, Harry, I can't close those wounds through the dragon hide. Hermione struggled to her feet and helped Harry remove his tunic. She couldn't stop the tears though as Bill administered the wizarding equivalent of first aid. He had a cut that reached from his right shoulder diagonally stretching fully across his torso to his left hip. Neville offered his dueling robes, since Harry was now standing there in a pair of shorts. Having Hermione holding his hand put Harry's world back onto an even keel, and made him realize there was something he had to take care of. His honor demanded it. Hermione, there's something I must do first, I won't be long. The room had released its grip and Barchoke now had Master Sharkshard sitting up. Barchoke was applying essence of Dittany to the deepest of his wounds when Harry came over and knelt with his head bowed. Master Sharkshard, I await my punishment for the disrespect I showed my mentor. I used magic to make a fool of you, and for that I deserve to be punished. Padma had retrieved her sword and Hermione was now sheathing her blade. She heard and understood every word Harry spoke. Remembering that Harry had said goblins didn't do pranks, but would treat such a thing as an attack, Hermione realized just how big a mistake they had made. Hogwarts' motto translated as never tickle a sleeping dragon, Harry had practically punched one on the nose. Master Sharkshard may not breathe fire but Hermione had no problem considering him every bit as dangerous as the emblem of Gringotts. She too had something that she should really do. Kneeling beside Harry, and speaking in the goblin language, Hermione said her piece. I too must apologize, Master Sharkshard. I had no reason to interfere with your training session, and will accept my punishment along with Harry. Let there be no more talk of punishment, deserved or otherwise. Crow, you fought like a demon and are a credit to the Centurion Corps. Miss Granger, I remember telling you that you had the heart of a goblin. Today, you proved that to be true on a few different levels. I think we should take a trip to the healers and then celebrate with some grog later. Since you are both far too young to appreciate that tipple, I will just have to drink your share too. The large goblin started to laugh, which quickly became a groan as Barchoke helped him to his feet. Crow, you now owe me a pair of boots too. I'll be sending your father the bill, it's not like you can't afford them. The laughter was again cut short as they began heading for the door. Albus had heard from Minerva that Harry's father was going to be inside Hogwarts today, hence why he was loitering at the main entrance. Having watched their last meeting numerous times in his pensive, he was forced to admit, only to himself, that Phileas was correct in his summation of how that meeting had gone. Barchoke had come to Hogwarts in the hope they could work together, and Albus had backed him into a corner. Today, he intended to inquire if there was any way they could sit back around the table and talk. The headmaster didn't like using the term desperation but it was applicable here. He had been isolated from playing any part in Harry's life and was desperate for even the smallest crumb he could grasp from the current situation. Albus was prepared to allow practically any concessions in his quest to get back in the game. His problem though was Albus didn't think he had anything they wanted that could allow him to do so. His thoughts and pacing were interrupted by the bedraggled group making their way down the stairs. Harry's father and William Weasley were supporting, more correctly carrying, the clearly injured large goblin between them. This wasn't what caught Albus's eye though. Harry and the Granger girl were clearly also injured. They were supporting each other, with young Longbottom and their Patil friend showing their concern by hovering next to them. What has happened here? A training accident that our healers will soon remedy. We don't have time to chat, headmaster, so please excuse us. Barchoke was polite but everyone heard the steel in his tone. Albus though was not for being brushed aside so easily, especially since here was an opportunity to earn himself some positive points. We have a fully equipped infirmary here, and Madame Pomfrey is a highly regarded and widely experienced healer. While everything you say is true, you missed the part about mountain trolls paying a visit. We are heading for Gringotts, and I will owl the school should my son and Miss Granger require to remain overnight. You are of course perfectly entitled to take your son with you, but I must object to Miss Granger. The school would need the proper authorization to release her into someone else's care. You are correct, headmaster, though in error on whose authority is proper. The Grangers are at a distinct disadvantage because they are muggles. Since the daughter is a friend of the nation, they have trusted me to act on her behalf on matters connected with the wizarding community. Professor McGonagall has all the relevant information in Miss Granger's file. From a perceived position of strength, Albus once more saw his argument crumble. It was desperation time again as he turned his attention to the obviously injured young witch. Miss Granger, do your parents know what you're doing at this training, and how dangerous it can be? Unfortunately for Albus, it was another young witch who blew that argument to shreds. Padma had watched helplessly while Hermione lay injured and Harry battled for his life. She cried buckets while holding tightly onto Neville. If that was goblin training, then Padma Patil wanted no part of it. Her two friends then bowing to the monster that had attacked them left her totally confused. That might need to be discussed later, but there was no confusion regarding just whose side she was on. Her two friends needed a healer and the headmaster was in the way. Here was something she could do. Dan and Emma have actually watched us practicing. They know everything we do in these lessons, and so do my parents. My friends really need to get to a healer, headmaster. As Albus stood aside, he clutched for one final straw. Barchoke, when you return the children to Hogwarts, could I speak with you for a moment? Barchoke merely nodded as he led the party to the edge of the wards. Neville and Padma accompanied him that far, before racing to find Professor Hobson the instant the group portkied away. The portkey landed the group in a part of Gringotts the wizarding public never got to see. That didn't mean it was empty though. Master Sharkshard was a well-known and unmistakable figure in the nation. Seeing him being helped to the infirmary set tongues wagging. The gossip would reach all but the deepest recesses before the day was out. This proved to be true in more respects than one. They had barely made the infirmary before the director appeared. Barchoke refused to leave until Harry and Hermione had been treated. Only then did he accompany Ragnick back to the director's office. Sirius was whistling a happy tune as he approached Hogwarts. The tune died on his lips as he spotted Henrika, Padma and Neville obviously waiting on him. His arm was around Henrika before the words were out his mouth. What's happened? Both friends competed to tell the story. Harry pulled a prank on Master Sharkshard as they were dueling. Quote ellipsis. He really didn't take it well and attacked Harry. Quote ellipsis. The safety barrier went back up. Quote ellipsis. But Hermione was outside it, since she'd ran to Harry. Quote ellipsis. Harry pushed her to safety but Hermione drew her sword. Quote ellipsis. Master Sharkshard didn't care, he just kicked her away. It was left to Neville to finish the story. Padma was still upset by that bit. Harry was furious, he activated his armor and really attacked Master Sharkshard. Harry ignored his own injuries and cut him badly. Harry finally kicked him to the ground and was ready to kill him. It was only the barrier coming down and his father getting over there that stopped him. The concern was clearly evident in Padma's entire demeanor as she completed the tale. Hermione has a few broken ribs while Harry was slashed right across his chest. If they're not coming back tonight, could you ask them to tell us that they're all right? Sirius immediately agreed to that, before hurrying off with Henrika to Gringotts. Their apprehension was instantly quelled as soon as they were escorted into the Goblin Infirmary. Sirius thought if he could bottle the sense of relief he felt when he spotted his godson, sitting on his girlfriend's bed, then he would easily double the black fortune. It wasn't just relief Sirius was feeling, the Marauder was being swamped by a very confusing mix of emotions. He wanted to hug his godson, holding back on the manly tears, yet at the same time he felt like shouting at him for getting into trouble. There was even a large dose of pride stirred in there too, pride that his godson had defeated the person who had dared to injure Hermione. Sirius was positive it couldn't be normal to feel all these emotions at the same time, he was worried his head might explode from this overload. The two adults took a couple of moments to reassure themselves both Harry and Hermione were fine before Sirius asked for some answers. Hermione thinks I'm spending too much time with my godfather, she says I forgot goblins didn't do pranks. While pleased to see Harry could joke about it, this was one notion Sirius wanted to knock on the head right away. Oh, blame the poor mutt time is it, Miss Granger? I would say this was a pretty extreme reaction to a harmless prank. Understanding that both Harry and Sirius were doing this to lighten the mood, Hermione played along. This was so much better than watching Harry throwing up in a toilet. I wouldn't call transfiguring someone's favorite weapon into a daffodil, before hanging them from the ceiling like some demented Christmas decoration, a harmless prank. Oh, and all this while supposedly fighting a duel. Hiding his delight at how well these two were handling the entire incident, Sirius took it further still. Why a daffodil, Harry? I don't think you have any Welsh blood, or is it a goblin thing? Well, I didn't think a jaggy thistle would be appreciated, and shamrocks are used as the main ingredient in a goblin fertility potion. Handing a shamrock to a male goblin is a deadly insult. Since only Hermione gets roses from me, that left a daffodil. This was too much for Henrika, she couldn't restrain her laughter any longer. She wasn't alone as all four of them shared a laugh, maybe it wasn't such a horrid day after all. There was something Harry wanted to say though and here was his opportunity. Sirius, I don't know what my father has planned, but can we visit Hermione's before returning to Hogwarts? There's something we need to tell her parents, and I'd rather not do it in a letter. That Harry had been holding Hermione's hand since they entered the infirmary wasn't even commented on, it had long been considered normal behavior for these two. Sirius had a helpful suggestion for his godson. Why don't you come back to my house? Neutral surroundings might make passing on your news easier, and Dan can't kick you out of my house for dating his daughter. This drew a squeal of indignation from Hermione, that didn't mean she thought it was a bad idea though. Further down the ward, a large goblin lay behind privacy screens. The potions in his body may have been healing his injuries but the laughter was healing his soul. Master Sharkshard slipped into sleep with a smile on his face. There was a distinct lack of smiles in the director's office as they studied Barchoke's memory of this morning. Do you think he would have done it? There is not one shred of doubt in my mind, just as we both know Sharkshard would have let him, rather than yield. Can you honestly say that Miss Granger is his mate? They're both so young and, biologically, neither is goblin. Biologically, my son is not a goblin. In his head and in his heart, Harry is as goblin as you or I. We define certain acts as being goblin in nature. When have you ever seen anything more goblin than Hermione drawing her blade and springing to Harry's aid? She neither hesitated nor thought about using her wand. Hermione drew her sword and charged Sharkshard. I don't know whether it was Harry, Hermione or Hogwarts who produced that shield around her, it was certainly goblin in origin. The director couldn't argue with any of that, he was still shocked at watching Sharkshard be defeated. He didn't know there were more shocks to come. Barchoke was by no means finished. As his father, I can see Harry has made his decision, it is one I'm very pleased with. I'm really confused though by one of yours, why did you order Sharkshard to attack my son? He may have just pushed the boundaries far beyond where he'd ever ventured before but Barchoke didn't care, he needed to know just what was going on here. Their very lives could depend on it. I've been friends with Sharkshard longer than either of us would care to admit. The friend that I know would have laughed his ass off at that joke, not attacked a student like a berserker. I looked into his eyes as my son was preparing to run him through, what I saw there gave your game away. What was reflected in his eyes wasn't anger but pride in the achievement of his student. There is only one person from whom Sharkshard would accept such an order, and they are currently in this room. Slumping into his chair, Ragnick decided to come clean. I'm practically aligning the nation behind your son, I needed to know if he had the balls for what we're attempting. With Harry being so young, it was imperative we discovered just how he would react under extreme pressure. If he cracked today then we may have had to reconsider some of our options. That room certainly threw your son every advantage it possibly could, he still had to beat Sharkshard though, something I never thought I would live to see. Barchoke was not some naive young buck, he'd expected the answer to be along these lines. The director continued to justify his answers to this doubting father. Fudge may need his summer ball to get this legislation through his ministry, this will certainly assist me do the same with the nation. Your Centurion son defeating Master Sharkshard will be all over the bank before the end of the day, I distinctly remember predicting he could become a goblin hero. Sharpshard's orders were to provoke your son and see if he had what it took, or if he crumbled. This is beyond what I had hoped for. Understanding he was putting his head on the chopping block didn't stop Barchok. This needed to be said. If necessary, he was prepared to die for saying it. I understand, Director, though I don't approve about not being consulted. After this lack of trust, I feel I have no other option but to say this. Should my son and I ever be played off against each other, I already know the choice I will make. I will use my own dagger to spill my guts all over your floor, setting my son free. I will give my all for the nation and fight side by side with my son. I will neither fight nor conspire against him. The director tried not to let his shock show at that declaration. This was also not the time to rage and rant. His mind quickly added together the consequences of such an action. It would be nothing short of catastrophic. When a goblin took his own life in that manner, the location usually indicated at whom the act was directed. Harry was as devoted to his father as Barchok was to him, leaving the grieving son's actions to that horrific outcome predictable. Crow had the means at his fingertips to declare himself a wizard, and the insider knowledge to seriously harm those he perceived as taking his father from him. Ragnick had to restrain himself as this was not a time for anger, rather truthful and frank discussion. If your suspicions about your son are correct, one day I hope we both see him bonded to Miss Granger. That marriage should see muggles, magicals and goblins in attendance, all standing there proudly, as equals. That, my friend, would be a scene worthy of depiction in the Hall of Heroes. As director, I will do whatever I have to in my quest to make scenes like that the norm. As your director, and I hope still your friend, I will state honestly I can't envisage any scenario where pitching you against your son would help the nation achieve that aim. Barchok's muscles had been tensed, expecting the swish of a blade to be the only warning he was about to lose his head. Hearing Ragnarok's words allowed him to relax a little. He may still be breathing, but he hadn't walked out of this office just yet. The director's next words gave him hope he might actually see Harry again. Knowing these two were vital to his plans for the nation, Ragnick poured more soothing oil onto the choppy waters. You have become a father and son team that is respected and revered throughout the nation. This can only help with our aims. What was Centurion Crow's reaction to our news? Having totally forgotten why he went to Hogwarts in the first place, Barchok now completed his assignment. My son was very enthusiastic, though he did suggest one change. He wishes to be assistant ambassador, and serve with his father. The director had his smile back in place after hearing that. Exactly as I was saying, a father and son team that will reshape the country, and that suggestion has my full approval. I had always intended you to be beside your son, providing him with as much guidance as he needed. This is more than we dared hope for. The nation will see you take the lead, and the ministry will fall over themselves to accept, knowing that one day their boy who lived would succeed his father. Inform young Cursebreaker Weasley that the ministry deal is acceptable to us. We don't want to get too greedy at the start. It's more important that we actually get invited to the table first. The director ordered Grog to celebrate, but Barchok respectfully declined, stating he needed to get back to the infirmary. Ragnick sat alone and sipped his drink, contemplating that age-old problem faced by every leader. Finding subordinates capable of assisting their leader with shaping the nation, without them being ambitious enough to want to overthrow that very same leadership. The director was positive that thought would never even enter Barchok's mind. The senior accounts manager was more than capable enough, but his son could certainly never become director after him, so what was the point? The director had to concede though that he had found the proud goblin's limit, a limit it would be extremely foolish for him to exceed. Ragnick was no fool. Urgit swooping into the great hall at dinnertime drew every pair of eyes. By the time Padma had untied the message, she was surrounded by their friends from all houses, each desperate to know how Harry and Hermione were. Hermione says they're fine and staying with Sirius tonight. Harry will be left without even a scar. Apparently the goblins are experts in dealing with injuries like that, though Master Sharpshard is having to spend the night in the infirmary. They should be back after breakfast, if her father doesn't kill Harry when they tell Hermione's parents they're dating. I think that last bit is meant to be a joke. It's hard to tell with those two. The story of what had happened had soon spread throughout the castle, Padma and Neville ensuring the story was mostly true. Harry didn't want it known that his sword was magical. When everyone assumed he cast the spells using his knife, they were quite happy just to let them continue with that assumption. I can't believe Hermione charged the massive goblin with her sword. I can't believe Harry put him in the infirmary. It was Neville who tried to put their friends straight. Guys, he was attacking Harry. What did you think Hermione was going to do? Just stand there and watch. Padma knew Hermione and Harry better than any of them. Neither of her friends' reactions had surprised her in the slightest. Scared the shit out of her, yes. Surprised, no. When Master Sharpshard hit Hermione, Harry got really angry. Trust me on this, you never want Harry really angry with you. Padma was preaching to the converted, but her words reached further than she thought. There were still witches in the castle who, though the boy who lived was fair game. Boyfriend, girlfriend meant nothing to them. It didn't offer any protection the way a formal courtship would. Padma's words though reminded him of something. When you hunt big game, sometimes you got mauled. Caution would have to be the name of the game, with the smarter witches willing to adopt a wait-and-see philosophy. The hunt wasn't over until the boy who lived married. Albus didn't have to wait. A certain witch headed right for him. Minerva had also received an owl and, as requested, passed a message on to the headmaster. Barchok will be bringing both students back tomorrow morning, and has agreed to speak to you then. What are you up to, Dumbledore? This was the first bit of good news he'd had in months. Albus just ignored Minerva's lack of respect and answered her truthfully. Nothing more than a chat. Our last meeting didn't end too well. I just want to inquire if there is any way we can move on from there. Do you want to sit in on the meeting? I have classes all morning, otherwise I would. Albus merely nodded, already knowing that fact before he made the offer. Things may finally be moving in a positive direction and Albus Dumbledore just might get himself back in the game. Neither Dan nor Emma paid any attention to the old world elegance of the townhouse they now found themselves in. Bill had said the kids had been injured and they wouldn't settle until they saw both were fine with their own eyes. Hermione found herself gently scooped into her mother's arms, before being passed on to her father. Harry found himself replacing Hermione in Emma's arms, a sensation he could definitely get used to. Dan was first to recover and demand some answers. Hermione, you said you were going to be careful with that sword. Charging into battle with it doesn't sound like being careful to me. What the hell happened? The situation got out of control incredibly fast. I just wanted to help Harry, and anyway, we're both fine. They then faced a question from Emma, a question they both knew would be coming. Why didn't you come home? That had us thinking there was something wrong. It was time to face the music, so Harry jumped right in. Well, this way Dan can't throw me out the door when he hears our news. At Padma's birthday party, I asked Hermione to be my girlfriend. Quote ellipsis. And I said yes. Both parents could have easily guessed the daughter's answer, so Hermione's declaration wasn't strictly necessary. Emma's squeal of joy and her hugging both Harry and Hermione left Dan needing to be even more careful with his choice of words. Sirius, could you point me in the direction of somewhere I could have a quiet word with your godson? The marauder tried to keep a straight face. Go right up the staircase and you will find the library on your left. Sirius did have an excuse to laugh though, as both Ravenclaws showed their true colors. You have a library? Was asked in unison. Come with me, Harry, and we'll see if we can find it. Hermione's quick kiss on the cheek for luck probably didn't help her dad's temper, but meant Harry followed Dan up the stairs with a smile on his face. He'd started the day off facing an enraged Master Sharpshot. Compared to that, well, Dan didn't even have a weapon on him. When Dan saw Harry's attention drawn to all the books, he had to remind himself this was not a normal young boy he was dealing with. This lad was a goblin centurion. Harry had already dispatched a troll and defeated his fencing tutor in defense of Hermione. He was hardly likely to be intimidated by her dentist father, especially since Harry didn't even know what a dentist was. Dan still intended to make his point though. I was led to believe you were not looking for a girlfriend, at least until a certain Dark Lord was no more. Can you tell me what changed? I'll tell you here and now, I think you are both far too young to be even considering becoming more than best friends. Hermione and I are still best friends. Dan, this was more about telling each other, and everyone else, we intend it to be more when we're older. Hearing this was easing Dan's concerns, but he still wanted to know more. Why now, Harry? Why not wait a year or two? Your daughter is beautiful, incredibly smart and so much fun to spend time with. To be perfectly honest with you, Dan, I was terrified that some other boy might sneak in and steal Hermione away. As I said to Sirius, I don't think I could handle that. For the first time today, Dan saw a vulnerable side to Harry. He didn't think there was a snowball's chance in hell that his daughter would be interested in any other boy. Then again, from Harry's point of view, Dan could now see how he reached that decision, and there was that same snowball's chance that his daughter would say no to being his girlfriend. Harry had more to say though. There are things happening that will see Hermione and I front page news again. I can't say what exactly just now, but it won't be dangerous and we hope you and Emma will be there with us. Saying she's my girlfriend might divert some of the jibes that come her way from being on my arm. Does this mean that you're now courting? I thought the procedure meant I was supposed to be consulted first. I couldn't use wizarding or goblin etiquette, that would be seen as me reaching my decision. That's why we're now boyfriend and girlfriend. Other than that, very little has changed between us. It was a relieved father who grasped that last comment and held it close. Something else bothered him though. We were there when Sirius explained wizarding courting behavior. I take it the goblin version is different. This actually brought a blush to Harry's cheeks, but he stared Dan in the eye and told him the truth. I told you goblins only have one mate. They also apparently know when they've met their mate. My father described it as a male and a female becoming very close really quickly, and then never wanting to be apart. Because of this, they always bond within a year of meeting. If they don't, they wouldn't be considered true mates. The implications of that hit Dan like a punch in the gut. That would mean. He couldn't actually say the words, so Harry finished it for him. Quote ellipsis. It would mean Hermione and I marrying in August, something neither of us are anywhere near ready for. Again Dan clutched onto that last sentence. Hermione having a boyfriend at 12 suddenly didn't seem as bad when compared to becoming a bride. He also remembered what Hermione said about cultural differences between her friends, and this one was a doozy. Keeping his calm, Dan asked what he thought was a pertinent question. What he really wanted to do was rant and rave about a culture that would see children married before their teens. Do goblins usually find their mates so young? Goblins mature later than wizards, which certainly helped me at school. It would be considered unusual for a goblin under 16 to discover their mate. He was again amazed at how the four of them were such good friends, with such wildly different backgrounds. Dan was also delighted he'd heeded Hermione's advice and not steamed right in there pushing his values at Harry, only to discover he had been jumping to conclusions. So, just to make sure I've got this right, you and Hermione are just a normal boyfriend and girlfriend, normal to Emma and me that is. I hope Hermione will be my girlfriend for a good few years, is that alright with you? Considering the other options, Dan stood and offered his hand. He would just have to wait and see what those years brought. A voice both recognized shouted from outside the door. Dad, you finished yet? You're hogging the library. He wasn't even going to begin to analyze why his daughter was more concerned about getting into the library, rather than worrying about the talk her father was having with her boyfriend. Dan decided to take this as a good sign, until someone told him otherwise. We'd better move, Harry, you don't want to get between Hermione and her books. Padma and I are just as bad. I can see us all spending some time here over the holidays. Hermione raced in, grabbed Harry's hand and dragged him toward the shelves full of unread books. Dan headed off to find his wife, hoping she had a better handle on this than he did. He had no intention of mentioning the goblin form of courtship to anyone, ever. Thanks for reading. Dumbledore duped. Harry Crow. Disclaimer, since I'm not the owner of these characters, I may do things with them that you don't like or agree with. Sorry in advance, but that's the nature of fan fiction. To do otherwise kind of defeats the purpose of fan fiction, and copying JKR word for word would certainly see a lawsuit heading in my direction. If my efforts don't fit your idea of what a Harry Potter story should be, again I can only offer my apologies and perhaps a suggestion. Writing your own really is the only way to ensure the story progresses exactly the way you want it to. It also gives the rest of us something to read. Chapter 30. Bill was pushing his mother's cooking around his plate, rather than eating it. If this wasn't a sure sign he had something on his mind, ignoring Ginny's questions was a dead giveaway. Bill, you haven't been listening. I wanted to know about the party last night. Did Ron behave himself? Sorry Ginny, just had a very busy day. I never actually got to talk to Harry and Hermione today. Master Sharkshard was there and put both of them in the Gringotts infirmary. He was still playing with his food before the fact that there was now total silence at the Weasley dinner table hit home. Bill lifted his head to see the other 3 occupants staring at him, obviously wanting to know more. Everyone thought the duel was over but Master Sharkshard came back at Harry. Hermione then got involved before finding herself kicked out of the fight. This enraged Harry, and only his father managed to stop him killing Sharkshard. Both Harry and Hermione were fine after treatment, and heading to spend the night with Sirius. His sister's eyes were almost popping out her head as she asked the question they all wanted to know the answer to. Would Harry really have killed him? I think so. Anyone harming one of those girls is going to find themselves in serious trouble. You would really need a death wish to attack Hermione. I did hear she's now his girlfriend. Apparently he asked her last night at the party. Bill was carefully gauging Ginny's reaction to this news, and was pleased with what he saw. While clearly not happy to hear Harry officially had a girlfriend, there was no running off to her room in tears. Arranging that meeting in King's Cross was now paying dividends as Ginny had the memory of their offered friendship to cling to. His mother then tried to change the subject. Those goblins are working you too hard, Bill, we hardly get to see you. The goblins don't pay you gold to sit about and do nothing. Which reminds me, can I have a word with you, Dad? There's something we need to discuss. Father and son took a stroll through the orchard, ensuring they couldn't be overheard. The goblins are agreeing to everything, and the timescale too. There's one thing I really need to talk about though. Barchoke has offered me the position of his assistant. How would you feel about that, us sitting on the opposite sides of the table? This actually caught Arthur on the hop, making him stop and think. That would really depend on the motives behind this move. I thought your main duties were to train Harry. Dad, this morning I watched a boy become a man. Harry is a really focused and driven individual, with power and skill to back those up. He's an absolute joy to teach. Today I saw him add a ruthlessness to that mix that scared the life out of me, and also filled me with hope. For the first time I actually believed that young man could fulfill the destiny that's been placed on his shoulders. What does this have to do with you becoming Barchoke's assistant? This drew a smile from his eldest son. There's no hidden goblin plots, Dad, though I think Barchoke is hoping you and I can still work behind the scenes so we all get what we want out of this. I have been offered a 5-year contract, after which just about any job I want in Gringotts will be mine for the asking. This is a fabulous opportunity and Barchoke has allowed me to tell you the reason behind this offer. After 5 years, they're planning on Harry taking over from me. Eventually he would become the ambassador. The implications of this hit Arthur like a bludger in the gut, but one massive question remained unanswered. Will he be taking the position as a wizard or a goblin? I'm pretty sure that will still be Harry's decision. This way though, his father is providing the opportunity for him to have it all. There's a whole wide world out there, Dad, and Barchoke seems determined his son will get to experience most of it before he has to make that choice. He has Sirius teaching him wizarding culture, the Grangers are muggles and Harry's grown very close to them. Harry has also been raised as a goblin so he was facing an impossible choice. My own reading of this is that they are searching for a compromise that will satisfy everyone, including the ministry. This news would have Fudge drooling, bring up another problem for Arthur. How much of that can I tell the minister? Barchoke knew you would ask that, and offered a compromise. You can say that goblin culture is based around sons stepping into their father's shoes. You can also say that this is one part of their culture Barchoke is hoping his son retains, whatever decision Harry makes on just where his future lies. Arthur was certain the minister would easily decipher the message being sent. This could be an enormous coup for the ministry, and the goblin nation. It was time to uphold his end of the bargain. Fudge is really playing this cleverly. I honestly didn't think he had it in him. He's going to contact Sirius about the ball to honor the Potters, and enlist his help for choosing just who will receive the Potter scholarships. He's proposing the panel consist of Amelia Bones, representing the ministry, Minerva McGonagall as Hogwarts representative and Sirius for Harry. Neither father nor son could see there being any objection to that trio. The minister's planning was even more considered and structured. When all the excitement of this announced event is at its peak, and people are scrambling for tickets, the minister is going to approach the Wizengamot with his proposal. By citing that the entire event nearly didn't happen, due to outdated means of communication between the ministry and Gringotts, he thinks that will swing a large proportion of the votes he needs behind him. Letting details of the proposed arrangements with Gringotts slip to the prophet should swing some more. Harry attending the ball will be the cherry on top, and should finish the job. Like his father, Bill didn't think Fudge was so politically astute. He had even more good news to pass on. Harry wants the scholarships to run for 20 years, and is going to pay for the extra 10 out of his own vault. He's quite happy for the ministry to take the credit. Harry really thinks it's a wonderful idea and will back it with his own gold. He's also prepared to give a short speech at the ball, praising the ministry for the scholarships, and giving his full backing to the minister's goblin proposal. We could even have him hint that the ambassador's job would certainly be one that would interest him in the future. Arthur Weasley felt as if his ship had finally come in, and he wasn't talking about this year's bumper crop of apples. With Fudge's plan, and Harry's public backing, that big promotion was practically in his pocket. No longer would his children attend Hogwarts wearing hand-me-down robes and old family wands. Molly hadn't been pleased when the 2 oldest children moved away to make careers for themselves. He and Bill were just about to drag the Weasleys up amongst Britain's most prominent families. He couldn't wait to see his daughter's face when he could tell her she would be going to the ministry summer ball, and sitting at the same table as Harry. Arthur was really looking forward to going to work tomorrow. He also wondered how much more ministry, goblin policy would be decided while he and his eldest son took an evening stroll in the Weasley orchard. Barchoke entered the Great Hall of Hogwarts with Henrika by his side, and was delighted to see the welcome Harry and Hermione received as they walked in front of them. Padma currently had an arm around each of them, and didn't look like she would be letting go anytime soon, despite assurances both her friends were fine. Barchok had been watching fights for decades, and his heart was still in his mouth when Hermione drew her blade and charged. It wasn't surprising then that their friends had been terrified. Albus Dumbledore smiling at you was also a terrifying sight. The headmaster was probably attempting to appear jovial and harmless, his eyes betrayed him though. It was more the smile of a tiger, just before it pounced on its next meal. Barchok knew though that when you removed a tiger's claws and teeth, what you were left with was a big pussy. Good morning, Barchok, I was very pleased that you agreed to meet with me. Will we head up to my office? Since she has no classes until after lunch, do you mind if Professor Hobson accompanies us? Dumbledore's expression clearly portrayed that he did, but Barchok had any objections covered. The professor is working on a book exploring the habits of our nation. We are trying to dispel some of the more unsavory myths that exist about goblins. I feel having her observe relations between wizards and goblins will surely help with this academic endeavor. As one of my son's private tutors, she has access to all of Harry's file. We won't be speaking about anything this morning that she isn't already privy to. With that, Dumbledore really couldn't refuse. When they were all seated in his office, Albus got the ball rolling. I have been reviewing our previous meeting, and I would like to start this one by saying I was wrong. I have been watching as you have done exactly as you stated, ensuring your son has a well-rounded knowledge of wizarding, and even Muggle society, to complement his goblin upbringing. Harry really is a son you can be proud of. Seeing that this tactic had knocked both his guests back on their heels, the headmaster continued in the same vein. Knowing the decision he has to make, this would be a large enough burden for any youngster to bear. Harry though has even more hanging over him, with Voldemort and the prophecy to be taken into consideration too. I know we've had our differences in the past, but even you must admit, I have a wealth of knowledge and experience. I would like to place that knowledge and experience at Harry's disposal. I'm making this offer since everyone in this room has the same aims. We want to see Voldemort defeated once and for all, and to let Harry make the choice that's right for him. Both Henrika and Barchok were surprised by this charm offensive, surprised but not fooled. They knew Dumbledore's ultimate goal was to have influence over Harry. This switch of tactics didn't change that fact. The goblin had certainly come prepared, it was only Barchok's delivery that now needed to be altered. While I can't help but agree about your experience and knowledge, and certainly on the goals you expressed for my son, the issue standing between us remains the same. A matter of trust, something kind words and reaching agreement on common goals doesn't address. Without that trust, I fail to see how we can progress from our current position. As long as there was no shouting and storming out his office, Albus considered himself still to be in the game. I realize that trust is something that needs to be built slowly, and I'm certainly not so naive as to expect your full confidence anytime soon. Your son though will be at Hogwarts for another 6 years, my hope is to earn that trust within this time frame. Now that he had Dumbledore clearly interested, Barchok placed the bait in his trap. I too agree trust must be built slowly, yet every building needs a strong foundation. There is a piece of information I lack, information I am also sure you have. In exchange for this information, I would be willing to bring you into our Horcrux team, supplying all the details we have on this subject. I see this as being the basis of how we move forward, hopefully to one day achieve the level of trust between us you obviously desire. As tempting as that offer was, Albus knew of the goblin's well-deserved reputation for getting the better of any bargain. The information they wanted from him must be vital, and therefore probably worth more than was being currently offered. I would like to hear just what this information is you are looking for, before committing myself any further. As you said, headmaster, experienced and knowledgeable, I expected no other answer. We know about the prophecy Madame Trelawney made to you, we even know the where and when it was made. The information we are looking for is how that prophecy ended up in the hands of Voldemort. Madame Trelawney is of course blameless, since a true prophecy is not remembered by the seer who predicts it. That only leaves us with one other name. The canny goblin didn't think Dumbledore could have looked more shocked if he dunked the headmaster in hot grog, and then had a dragon breathe on him to singe the old wizard's beard off. Alas, what you ask, I am sworn by oath never to reveal. Surely there must be something else. Barchok shook his head, but in a manner that suggested this wasn't quite over yet. I certainly didn't expect an answer today, this is clearly something that will require some thought. You mentioned a timescale earlier and I think that's what we need here. Let's settle on Harry's birthday, I'll make a point of seeing you on that day. If you are still unable to provide the answer, then we will talk of this no more. You must understand though, your options for assisting my son or I in anything would then be nil. Good day, headmaster. Dumbledore barely noticed them leaving, still shocked at the question Barchok asked. A quick glance at the master timetable showed Severus free after lunch, he would send for him then. What a choice he was now faced with, protect Severus or Ganon, in with the team taking the fight to Voldemort, a team Harry was a massive part of. Thankfully, he had until the end of July to reach a decision. Well, what did you think? They had just passed the gargoyle guarding the headmaster's office when Barchok asked the question. It took Henrika a moment to consider her answer. I know I missed something, I just can't figure out what it was. You left that office far too easily, because I can see how important this answer will be to you and Harry. A throaty chuckle answered the Veela. There is a saying wizards are fond of, but I can assure you it is goblin in origin. There is more than one way to skin a dragon, and I'm gambling on Dumbledore laying himself bare before the end of the day. Okay, there was an image I could have done without. Can I ask why I was in that office? A distraction, and because Harry has herbology. I dangled a carrot in front of Dumbledore's nose, but that's all it was. Harry would refuse point blank to work with the headmaster, he wouldn't even let me enter that office alone with Dumbledore. He trusted you to watch my back. Harry really has a high opinion of you, Henrika. This brought a smile to the Veela's lips. Yes, Sirius told me Harry was quite protective when asking what his godfather's intentions were toward me. He said it was like being threatened by my brother. This certainly drew an amused laugh from Barchok. I fear any wizard going anywhere near Padma is in for a much rougher time of it, unless that wizard is Neville of course. I get the feeling those two are just really good friends. It might turn to more later but they just don't have the feel of a couple to me. Harry and Hermione on the other hand. I am well aware of my son's feelings for that particular young witch. It pleases me more than I can say that Hermione returns those feelings. What she did yesterday was incredibly stupid, and yet took astonishing courage. Hermione must have known she stood no chance, yet she charged in there regardless. I honestly think the result would have been different had she not. Now, if you will inform Harry at lunch that everything went well, I shall head off back to Gringotts. The goblin was out the castle before it dawned on Henrika that Barchoke hadn't mentioned just how Dumbledore would be skinned. Henrika genuinely liked the little goblin but still had to stop herself counting her fingers every time they shook hands. Barchoke was one of the cleverest and yet most devious person she had ever met in her life, who would probably take her counting those fingers as a compliment. Albus once more found himself having to provide a pick-me-up to someone in his office. Severus currently looked as if his legs wouldn't support him. I think you are overreacting, Severus. I'm sure they would understand your point of view. Quote ellipsis. And I think you are getting senile. The only point they understand is on the end of those blades. These are goblins we are dealing with. We've both seen what Crow can do if he gets close enough. No one can stand up to his blades. Black spent 10 years in Azkaban. There will be no forgiveness or understanding from that quarter either. Now tell me again how I am overreacting. Both Sirius and Harry would surely take into consideration you were a close friend of Lily's, and had no way of knowing the Potters would be the ones referred to in the prophecy. Harry is much more like his mother in that respect. He thinks before he acts. Yes, but he also has Lily's temper. You told me he cut that big goblin to pieces, and we both know Phileas regards him as practically a god with a sword. Our charms master fell off his chair yesterday when you told that story. Dumbledore tried to pacify his potions professor. This is not something that needs to be decided today. We have time to think this over and develop a strategy. Severus finished the glass of brandy, his strategy already formed. He knew Albus would betray his grandmother to get close to the boy. However he dressed it up, Severus would be served up for the greater good of Albus Dumbledore. The only decision Severus needed to make was whether he could hold off until the end of term before slipping quietly away, or if he needed to make a run for it before then. It was 4 weeks to the exams, and then another 3 before the students took the express back to London. His preferred option would be to skip the country the next day, hopefully being far away before anyone realized he might not be coming back. If he did a runner now, missing a few meals, never mind classes, would immediately set tongues wagging. With this dilemma running through his mind, Severus left for his quarters. Albus was so concerned about his friend, he accompanied him part of the way. Neither noticed the bug that landed on the back of Dumbledore's hat, and hitched a free ride out the headmaster's office. Rita was certain she had just earned her advance on Dumbledore's expose, this latest revelation ensuring her book would be explosive. Holding Barchoke from taking action against Snape might be her biggest problem, but the goblin was wise enough to know this might just set Dumbledore's alarm bells ringing. At the moment, the headmaster had no idea he was being investigated, and it was certainly in the joint interest that he remained ignorant until just before publication. Yes, they might want Snape to pay, but not at the cost of the main target being forewarned. By the time they announced the publication date to the world, Dumbledore could call in all the favors he wanted. The book would be printed inside Gringotts, and he was all out of favors there. Even if they were reduced to selling the book by our order, Rita was confident they would still sell every copy they could print. Rita now considered her sacking from the Prophet as one of the best things that ever happened to her. She may have entered the room in Barchoke's pocket, but she was leaving on top of Dumbledore. That was okay in her book. The reporter-turned-author had even settled on a title for her first book. The Life and Lies of Albus Dumbledore had a nice ring to it. The ring of the tills, filling up with all that lovely gold she was going to earn. The week had flown for the friends. Their only difference was now they had, at Hermione's insistence, allocated an hour a day for exam revision. Master Pitsley asking Harry to stay behind after potions blew their routine week right out of its nice stable orbit. Hermione had of course stayed with Harry. Though Rowena Ravenclaw's charm meant she could still understand spoken goblin, the written word really was gobbledygook to her. Harry's outburst as he read the hand-delivered note from his father indicated this indeed must have been bad news. Harry, I'm quite happy to admit the goblin language has more swear words than probably any other in the world, even if a few of those descriptions are biologically impossible. Can you calm down enough to tell me what the problem is? It's only biologically impossible when certain appendages are still attached to a body. Slicing them off opens a whole different world of possibilities, and I've just discovered someone I would like to take my blade to. She wrapped her arms around him, hoping to provide some comfort, and buy some time for her boyfriend to consider his next move. Hermione didn't even want to think about Harry's last answer. Sometimes I can forget you're a goblin, not for long though. What has got my centurion so fired up? Not a flicker of humor, all Hermione could see was rage. She knew this was bad, she just didn't know how bad, yet. We always thought Sirius Black had told his master the prophecy, and then served the Potters up on a plate. Discovering that my godfather wasn't a Death Eater, and didn't even know the prophecy, only that there was one, blasted that theory to smithereens. He was only told of the prophecy's existence as my mum and dad were forced into hiding, because Voldemort was already hunting them. That leaves the massive question, who told Voldemort the prophecy? This question set Hermione's thoughts off at warp speed. This would be top secret, so no one at the ministry would know. I read that a true seer doesn't remember a genuine prophecy, only the people that are there when it's made will hear it. If your mum and dad didn't tell the best friends, who does that leave? The prophecy was made to Albus Dumbledore. Oh my god, do you think he would tell Voldemort? Directly, no. Would he get Snape to pass on the message? We hope to find out. Either way, it was certainly Snape who told Voldemort. He's the reason my mum and dad are dead, and why Neville has to visit St. Mungo's to see his. That prophecy could have applied to 2 boys, both of whom lost their parents over it. Hermione's tears actually calmed Harry down more effectively than any words could. The very thought that he had been responsible for those tears had him wrapping his girlfriend in his arms. Hush now, Hermione, I'm sorry. I'm not going to go charging after Snape. Well, not right away. Oh Harry, I want to go charging after that bastard myself. I am so angry, yet so sad at the same time. What are we going to do about this? Hermione's use of "we" actually put a smile on Harry's face. It might be considered a wicked smile, but it was still a smile. Master Pitsley was merely an observer, and his observations would be getting reported back to Gringotts. Harry might have obeyed an order from his father not to immediately attack the Hogwarts potions master, but he couldn't think of anyone other than Miss Granger who could have talked him out of it. My father is working on bringing Dumbledore down. That's where he dug up this information. If we act on this, the headmaster is bound to put 2 and 2 together. My father currently has enough information to do him great harm, but, in a few months, he hopes to be able to destroy him. If Dumbledore gets wind of this investigation, we run the risk of him going all out to wreck the new Goblin Agreement. We have to take the chance on losing Snape to put Dumbledore's head in the dragon's mouth. She could hear, and actually feel, what this decision was costing her boyfriend. Harry was as tense as a drawn bowstring. Where does Snape's salary get paid to? This drew a chuckle from the Goblin Potions Master, reminding both students he was there. I'm beginning to think you are part Goblin, Miss Granger. That was thinking worthy of a friend of our nation. All Hogwarts salaries, except for Dumbledore's, are paid directly into the Gringotts vault. There is already an alert placed on Snape's vault. Should he arrive in Gringotts, Harry's father will need to make a snap decision. If Snape is attempting to disappear, we can help him with this endeavor. Hermione was confused at this, until she saw Harry's broad yet scary smile. Now she was really flummoxed. We can make his wish come true, Hermione. He wants to disappear, no one will ever find him in a goblin cell. It will depend whether he tries to access his vault, or decides it would be safer just to skip the country. To flush out who was responsible for running to Voldemort with the prophecy, my father had to let Dumbledore know we were looking for this person, which is why the headmaster would know we were onto him if I suddenly attacked Snape. Dumbledore said he would need to think about it, and has until my birthday as a deadline for his decision. If Snape runs before we're ready to take down Dumbledore, I may have to let him. The agreement with the Ministry is far too important to risk for revenge. A very mature decision, Centurion, and I believe the right one. Your father will certainly agree with me, though insisted you still be given the choice. Please thank my father for me, Master Pitsley. I'm a Centurion and swore an oath to the nation. I have to put personal revenge second to that oath. My father has outlined the timescale here, and I can wait that long. Between training, exams and then our holidays, I'm sure Hermione will do her best to keep my mind off it. You forgot to mention the Ministry Ball in your honor, just the biggest social event in all of Europe this summer. No, I didn't, and the Ministry will be making official contact soon. It's less than 3 months to my birthday, and these things usually take longer to arrange than that. The two then headed off to Ravenclaw Tower. They intended to eat their lunch in Harry's room, since neither was ready to sit in the Great Hall with Snape and Dumbledore at the moment. With herbology next, they may have control of themselves enough to eat dinner with their friends. Making an excuse for missing lunch would be easy, skipping dinner too would see questions asked. There were questions being asked the next day when Sirius entered the Great Hall. This in itself was not unusual as they had lessons with him every week at this time. What was unusual, and the reason for all the questions, were the two people who accompanied him. Minister Fudge and Madam Bones. Albus strode down to meet them, using all his experience to hide his trepidation. He couldn't see anyway this would be good news. Sirius, I was expecting. Cornelius, Amelia, to what do we owe the honor of this visit? The Ministry are considering a new incentive that will affect Hogwarts. We came today to talk with Minerva about lending her expertise to this venture. He wasn't sure whether to be relieved or insulted at the minister's words. Albus intended to at least pretend to be hurt. Cornelius, I am the headmaster of Hogwarts. If the Ministry has any new incentives that affect my school, I demand to be involved. His tone didn't sit too well with Amelia, and she wasn't slow to let him know. This doesn't involve the headmaster, rather your deputy. It will involve extra, unpaid work for Minerva, so we are here today to ask if she wishes to be involved. By this time they had been joined by Minerva, who wanted more details of what was involved before committing herself. If we can go somewhere private to discuss this, we want to keep it secret until the announcement. Albus immediately offered his office to the minister, though both witches then glowered at him. Quote ellipsis. And just how is that private, when those bloody portraits tell you everything? Albus had the good grace to appear embarrassed at Minerva's outburst until Sirius solved the problem. Arriving with Harry at his side, he offered the perfect solution. I'll need to wait until after the meeting to work on their lessons. The room we hold them in would certainly fit the bill for whatever we're after. Albus's nose was even more out of joint as he watched the group leave with Harry. Things were bad when he didn't even know what was happening in his own school. Henrika followed on with Neville, Padma and Hermione, knowing the room could easily accommodate whatever was needed for the two groups. Harry was asked if he would like to sit in on the initial briefing meeting, delighting him and confusing Minerva even more. Once Hogwarts deputy headmistress discovered just what was involved, she wholeheartedly threw her support, time and anything else that was required of her behind this wonderful idea. Harry had given this a lot of thought and had a few ideas of his own to bring to the meeting. I would like one of the candidates to be Muggle-born, in honor of my mother. I also intend to get involved when they come to Hogwarts. The castle can be a scary place. I want all scholarship students to be charged with looking out for those coming behind them. I certainly intend to offer friendship to the two new first-year students starting in September. I would expect them to carry that on the following year. A tradition has got to begin somewhere. Minerva caught on at once. You're looking for them to become mentors, keeping an eye on the younger ones through first year. Not just first year, Professor. This is being done in the Potter family name. I want this to be like members of a family. Brothers and sisters looking out for each other. We're very lucky in Ravenclaw to have Penny doing that job for us. She's simply brilliant and has been a great help to us settling in. In talking with our friends, not all houses are so lucky. One of my best friends is also a twin, and we have Fred and George Weasley here too. If there was a case for twins being offered scholarships, the Lily Potter Foundation would fund the difference to ensure both got equal treatment, and this didn't deprive another student of a scholarship that year. This was a golden opportunity for Cornelius to observe this boy firsthand, and so far he was very impressed. He had learned through Arthur that goblin children start school at 5, and that Harry had extra tutors too. with early indications that the top 2 students in first year would be a muggle born and a goblin raised, both of whom attended school since they were 5, it was again raising the question of why they waited until 11 before formally schooling magical children. This might be the place but certainly not the time to roast that old chestnut. Harry, we also want to honor the last surviving member of that family. On doing some research, we discovered the level of award was already set. For banishing a Dark Lord, we wish to award you the Order of Merlin, first class. Since Amelia was the one who had done the research, she knew what the minister was going to say. This allowed her to watch the reactions of the others to this news. Sirius appeared fit to burst with pride while Minerva was fighting back the tears that were forming in the corners of her eyes. Harry never even blinked. Minister, the Dark Lord isn't really gone, and I would feel such a fraud accepting on those headings. Cornelius had actually prepared for this possibility. The politician in him wouldn't take no for an answer today. I am aware of that, Harry, just as I am now aware that you train relentlessly in the hope of one day finishing the job you started all those years ago. To me, that in itself makes you deserving of this award. Seeing that this had scored points, the minister pressed home his advantage. I would also like to say, when that time comes, my ministry will stand alongside you in this battle. Madam Bones is quietly bringing her Auror department onto a war footing. This won't happen overnight, but, when you need us, we will be there with every wand ready to fight. Knowing he was always going to have to accept an award of some description, Harry was delighted by the promise of support, and left with no other choice than to graciously accept. Cornelius intended to announce the awards, and the ball in his honor, today. He would call a press conference this afternoon so the country could digest the news along with their Sunday breakfast. Harry asked, since she was now heavily involved in the Potter scholarships, if Professor McGonagall could be added to their party for the ball. The minister agreed at once, and then raised the only issue he could see being a sticking point. We are unsure how to address the award. You won the award as Harry Potter but now go by the name of Harry Crow. Whichever appears on the award, people will rush to make judgments. Cornelius had watched as Dumbledore's planned award ceremony at Christmas went to hell in a handbasket. He had no intention of there being the slightest chance of that happening with the eyes of the world on them. All the T's would be crossed and the I's dotted, nothing was going to be left to chance. Harry understood at once what the minister was implying. To have either Potter or Crow on the award would be construed as him already having made his choice. Something no one sitting around this table wanted. After a moment of thought, Harry made a suggestion. My mum and dad named me Harry, a name my father has used my whole life. Could I be just Harry? The minister looked to Amelia for her opinion. I don't see why not. Might knock a lot of the stuffiness and formality out of the award ceremony, but who's to say that's such a bad thing? With the last hurdle crossed, Cornelius headed off to organize his press conference. When the 3 trustees began to talk about the next meeting, where they would be discussing the candidates from this year's Hogwarts intake, Harry headed for his friends. Padma got in first. Okay, Harry, how much can you tell us? Well, I think all our dance practice will be needed again, and you might need to protect some poor, defenseless wizard from being attacked by witches. Neville caught Harry's drift at once. I don't know what you're both talking about, but Padma, will you be my data it? So you want me to protect you from Parvati? Hermione was fighting the giggles. And Susan. Harry was enjoying the gentle teasing, and joined in. Quote ellipsis. Hannah too. Neville was getting desperate now as he pleaded with her. Please, Padma. Oh, who could say no to those baby blue eyes, which is probably why the girls are chasing you in the first place. Let's have a deal. I'll be your date, and your bodyguard, until one of us gets a boyfriend or girlfriend. The look of relief on Neville's face set all of them off, with even Henrika laughing. The laughter soon stopped when Harry told them just what was going to be happening. Since the whole ball scholarship award thing was going to be made public tomorrow, they only had to keep it quiet for tonight. No mention was made of goblin ambassadors, that entire part of the deal was still a secret. As Harry explained what was said at the meeting, Hermione spotted a potential disaster in the making. What will you wear? It will be the same problem if you appear in robes or your Centurion uniform. Why doesn't he wear his Mr. Darcy clothes? Harry and Neville appeared confused while Hermione's blush lit the room. Oh please, Hermione, you gave me the books. It practically leapt off the page at me. Some of those dresses sounded beautiful too. We could all go dressed similar, neither goblin nor wizard. Hermione may still have been blushing but she was the owner of a wide smile. That's perfect, Padma, even my mum and dad could blend in then. Harry, she means clothes similar to the ones you were wearing when we first met. This idea also won approval from Henrika. Oh, I can so see Sirius as Mr. Darcy, and yes, I've read the book too. Harry and Neville were left bemused at why the 3 were laughing. Harry, I have enough trouble figuring out the differences between the 4 of us. Did something else just get chipped in there? I'm sure it's a girl thing, Neville, and no, I have no idea what they're on about either. We'll just turn up and have fun, that works for me. Neville remembered what Harry had worn back in September. It was also splashed all over the Prophet with those graveyard pictures at Halloween, and would have no problem dressing similar. Harry and Lord Black attending the ball dressed like that could actually start a whole new fashion trend. That thought set Neville smiling, and also shaking his head that he was once more in the middle of all the madness. This year had been the best of his life, and summer was shaping up to be even better. Henrika wanted them back on track though. This was still a lesson after all. A.N. Thanks for reading. Grumpy Gordon. Harry Crow. A.N. As we enter a new year, this story also takes me into uncharted waters. This is the first time I've ever written, chapter 31, and also the first time a story of mine has broke the 200,000 words barrier. A big thank you to everyone who's kept me company on this journey, and there is still a long way to go. Chapter 31. The prophet being delivered that Sunday morning generated an effect seldom experienced in the Great Hall of Hogwarts. It slowly sank into silence, with not even the sounds generated by cutlery or crockery escaping this vacuum of hush. It's often said that nature abhors a vacuum, and this one never stood a chance of existing for more than a few seconds. The noise started like a babbling brook, soft and gentle, but soon turned into a raging torrent of white water that engulfed every table, including the staff. Sitting unmoved against this deluge, making them stand out like rocks jutting from the foaming water, the four friends were quietly finishing their breakfast. Bill would be here for their defense lesson in less than 15 minutes. An Order of Merlin, first class. Wow, Harry, just, wow. I'm actually more excited about the scholarships, Roger, which was the only reason I agreed to this. My dad and mum laid their lives down for me that night, but all anyone ever talks about is the fact I didn't die. You didn't die yesterday, let's celebrate that. I understand what you're trying to say, Harry, but I wasn't hit with the killing curse yesterday. Ah, but here's the thing, Roger, how do you know I was? The only person to come out of that house alive was me, and no healer even checked me over until I ended up in Gringotts. Voldemort's wand was never found either, so who knows what happened that night. This had the entire Ravenclaw table held enthralled. No one had looked at the incident from that point of view before. A story appears in the prophet and everyone just accepts that's what actually happened. We all saw at Halloween how wrong that newspaper can be. I was 15 months old and whisked away from that house by Rubeus Hagrid, under Dumbledore's orders. Where was the investigation? Where was the process of law? Whatever Dumbledore says is just taken as truth, if not law. Yes, he's a powerful wizard, but he can get things wrong, just like everybody else. His girlfriend latched onto what Harry was actually saying here. It's Professor Binns all over again. No one questions what they're being told, so that becomes the accepted truth. People have been able to write what they like about that night, and no one can say whether they are right or wrong. Hermione knew Harry had memories of that night but had no intention of mentioning that fact to anyone else. The arrival of Parvati saved Harry from having to answer any more questions on what happened at Halloween. She appeared rather upset at the news in the Prophet. Weren't we supposed to be on holiday when it's your birthday? Does this mean the holiday plans have changed? Yes, we're juggling the schedule a bit to put us back in Britain for a couple of days. I thought you would be pleased, going to your first ball. The implications of what Harry just said were mind-blowing, but Parvati needed to hear the actual words coming from his mouth. There could be no mistakes made here. Are you saying what I think you're saying, Harry? I'm the guest of honor and get my own table. All of the people going on holiday with us over the summer will be at that table. She looked questioningly toward her twin. You knew. We just found out yesterday. I owled home last night. Mum's going to be so excited. I owled my gran last night too. She probably wouldn't believe that story in the Prophet if I didn't. Hermione was nodding her agreement with both their friends. Urgid took a letter home for me. It should be some evening. Harry provided the final piece of information. Madam Bones was one of the ball organizers, so Susan should be getting an ull today too, telling her and Hannah of the new arrangements. Susan and Hannah came racing over, clutching a piece of parchment in her hand. Oh, I can't believe we are all going to the ball together. This will be brilliant. Parvati's mind had wandered in a different direction though. The shopping voucher now makes sense. I'll be able to get a new dress. This saw Harry standing and shaking his head toward the Gryffindor witch. Sorry, Parvati, that voucher was for your birthday. This is a different item. We'll have to arrange another shopping trip for this. Parvati thought she was in heaven, a holiday, a ball and now 2 shopping trips. Hermione, you're just gonna have to excuse me. With a squeal of delight, she leapt at Harry and practically hugged the life out of him. Finishing with a kiss on the cheek just as Bill arrived. Harry, my teaching you defense doesn't seem to be doing much good. My humble apologies, Cursebreaker Weasley, I find there is no defense against a Patil twin who wants a hug. Bill enjoyed the casual atmosphere they could adopt at the weekend, though knew he couldn't get Harry to just call him Bill. The Cursebreaker title was a mark of respect that, in Harry's eyes, he had earned. No goblin would disrespect that. He could still tease Harry back though. Quote ellipsis. And how are your defenses when it comes to hugs from girls called Granger? Sorry again, sir, I expect AT for that class. I just can't seem to get the hang of why I would want to defend against that. This set Bill off laughing. Good answer, Harry, I only hope you're as good at dodging spells. As a special treat, we got hold of some training dummies that fire back. Should make today a lot more interesting. As long as they don't have swords or axes in their hands, that's fine with me. The weekends were Padma's favorite lessons. Having fun while learning suited her personality so much better. Girls, Hermione had a great idea about dresses. Why don't we have lunch at the Hufflepuff table and talk about it? That way Harry and Neville won't be forced to listen. Her twins' thoughts again went in a different direction. Do we need dates for this ball? It was left to Harry to break the only bit of bad news. Sorry girls, there isn't any room at the table for more people. So we need to share you and Neville. That was never going to work, and Padma quickly marked everyone's dance cards. Sorry sis, Neville has already asked me to be his date. I'm also pretty sure Hermione is not the kind of witch who shares. Well, at least not Harry. This comment drew laughter from Susan and Hannah, with no denials coming from Hermione or Harry. Bill marching the 4 away may have stopped the conversation, but this would be the main topic inside Hogwarts until the exams hit. Parvati raced back to the Gryffindor table, desperate to tell her news to Lavender. Dumbledore was certainly not pleased at the Prophet's news. Fudge appeared to be succeeding where he had failed so spectacularly. How the hell did that happen? He turned his ire in the direction of his deputy. Minerva, as headmaster, I demand to be kept appraised of all the details of this scholarship. His deputy was having none of it. Sorry, headmaster, you are neither on the scholarship board of trustees nor require the information on any educational grounds I can perceive. Just what are your reasons for demanding this information? Damn it, Minerva, I'm the headmaster. I am aware of that, though still don't see the reason behind this demand. You haven't concerned yourself with the new first-year intake for almost 40 years, why the sudden interest now? This scholarship could be a powerful force for good, but we need to ensure that the right people are chosen. We will ensure that the right children are chosen. Amelia, Sirius and I might have a different definition of right than you do, but I'm learning this is not necessarily a bad thing. If you would like to make a formal complaint, I really don't know who you would direct it at. The trust is set in such a way that, to replace a trustee, you need the agreement of the other two. If you can convince Sirius and Amelia to replace me with yourself, you'll deserve your place on the trust board. Lord Black will be in the castle today as usual. I can only suggest you mention it to him. Albus was taken aback at this information. There is no other involvement, no goblin input. No, why should there be? Amelia represents the ministry. I'm there as Hogwarts' voice while Sirius speaks for the Potters, until Harry is old enough to replace his godfather. The only request made was from Harry himself. He wants one of the students chosen each year to be a muggle born like his mother. We all agreed to that. Dumbledore didn't agree, but then his opinion was neither asked for nor apparently counted for much when he gave it. He decided to keep his own counsel and wait for a better opportunity to try and let his specific thoughts on the matter be known. At the moment, there was such a groundswell of support for this measure that to speak against it would see him swept aside. Severus appeared at his side and slapped his copy of the Prophet onto the table. Leaning in so only the headmaster could hear, Severus made his feelings known. Still think I'm overreacting. I would be publicly flogged, before my soul was a Dementor's lunch, and that would be just the ministry's response. Severus strode out of the hall, taking Dumbledore's appetite with him. Sirius entered the great hall and stopped dead in his tracks. His eyes had immediately travelled to where his godson usually sat, and soon locked onto Harry. What had stopped Sirius was the fact that Hermione wasn't there. It took him a moment to spot her sitting at the Hufflepuff table. That she was smiling and chatting animatedly with their friends eased Sirius' fears. He didn't know how these two would handle their first fight. He was certain though that neither of them would be smiling. He approached Harry and Neville, deciding to play dumb. Hey you two, where are the girls? Hi Sirius, they're over at the Hufflepuff table, chatting with the other three about dresses for the ball. They thankfully spared Neville and me that torture. This blew the last remaining fears that they'd had of falling out clear away. Sirius also had something to add to that conversation. Your father has offered the goblin tailors to make all our outfits for the ball, since they made the original that inspired this idea. Neville was immediately shaking his head. I had to tell Parvati about the birthday party. You're on your own for this one, mate. Quote ellipsis. And here was me thinking a Longbottom had my back. Hey, if it wasn't for Padma, I would be dreading this ball. Witches can be really scary. Just go over there. You know Hermione won't let anything bad happen to her boyfriend. Thanks a bunch, Neville. Sirius was trying not to laugh as he watched Harry stroll over to the 5 girls. His girlfriend was the first to spot his approach. Does Sirius want us to start early? I thought we had another 10 minutes. No, Hermione, he brought some news from my father. He's offering the goblin tailors to make all your dresses. For the second time today, Harry had a witch screaming with joy before engulfing him in a bone-crushing hug. There were no complaints this time though, as Hermione was the one doing the screaming hugging. They had kept any public displays of affection to hand-holding, so the kiss that followed the hug would again set tongues wagging. Not that it was much more than a peck on the lips, it was just the first time they had seen this couple kiss in public. Hermione though was too excited to care. That's fantastic, Harry, and solves all our problems. She then turned to their friends, trying to explain her excitement. The goblin tailors made my dress for Harry's centurion ceremony. They are simply brilliant. I got to choose everything and they were so nice. My dress also fitted like a second skin. They made Madame Malkin seem like an amateur. Her excitement instantly spread to their friends, though the option to hug Harry in thanks wasn't available to anyone else. Hermione still had him wrapped in her arms, proving Padma correct. Hermione wasn't about to share Harry with anyone. Witches and wizards the length and breadth of Britain rejoiced at this announcement, and then quickly began to plan how they could acquire tickets for the event of the year. The country's purebloods tended to fall into one of 3 categories, and their opinion on this momentous event depended on which faction they supported. The Light faction thought this recognition was long overdue, and couldn't wait to see their savior accept the country's highest award. Those witches and wizards of a neutral persuasion depended heavily on their abilities to read the political situation, so they could lean in that direct while maintaining their center stance. Since the ministry appeared to have jumped heavily into the Light, that would be the direction they would lean, for now. None could see any reason not to support this event, so they would. Those with a darker disposition had been caught on the hop by the sudden shift in the ministry's position. Malfoy's exposure had left the minister with no other option but to distance himself, and his ministry, from Lucius Malfoy and his supporters. They had briefly rejoiced at Dumbledore's very public embarrassment, before realizing that had pushed Fudge the one place they feared, right into the capable arms of Amelia Bones. The head of the DMLE was tough, resourceful and very bright. That she had lost all but one of her entire family to Death Eater attacks meant there would be no forgiveness to be found there. With Malfoy and Dumbledore expressing contradictory opinions on every subject, Cornelius Fudge had usually given the impression that he didn't know what day of the week it was, not anymore. The ministry now had a clear direction, and it wasn't in their favor. At this moment in time, to publicly fight against this change in the tide would be politically and socially suicidal. They would have to bide their time and slowly try to reverse the current back in the direction. Most would openly support this event, and even attempt to acquire tickets, just not try too hard. Minerva was trying hard to understand the resistance against her choice for a Potter scholarship. She had spent the best part of a fortnight going over every new student's file, and this child jumped out at her at every turn as a deserving candidate. She was left unsure what criterion the other two were working with, but was determined to get to the bottom of this. Ginevra will be the 7th child Molly and Arthur will have sent to Hogwarts, and September will see 5 Weasley children attending the castle at the same time. They are also as light a family as it's possible to find, and their eldest son has been tutoring Harry and his friends for most of the term. In all of our new first year, I can't see a more deserving case for a Potter scholarship than this. That she is also a pureblood will balance nicely with the Muggle-born we've already chosen. If you have another reason for rejecting this candidate, then I think I'm entitled to hear it. It was left to Amelia to try and calm her old friend's fears. We agree with everything you've just said, Minerva, but there is specific information we can't divulge just yet. Can I say that good things are planned for Arthur at the ministry, things that will certainly ease any financial worries the Weasley family might have. These planned changes could leave our choice of Ginevra then open to question, something I don't think we can afford, especially in the scholarship's inaugural year. This information is very sensitive but will certainly be made public before the summer ball. It will all drop into place then and you will see we are right. She was racking her brains for a hint of what these planned changes could be, especially since Sirius appeared to be aware of them, and Minerva could only come up with one thing: it had to involve Harry. Deciding it was pointless to pursue this any longer, and knowing Amelia wouldn't lie to her, Minerva conceded her argument. Very well then, remove the financial hardship and there remains no grounds to support that candidate. The which you both chose would have been my second choice, so I will happily support her as the other Potter Scholarship student. I shall also be studying the prophet closely for Arthur Weasley's good news. This drew a relieved chuckle from Amelia. Believe me, Minerva, you won't have to look for the news. It will be blazed right across the front page. Sirius wanted to know who got to tell Harry, with Minerva asking for that honor. Harry said he wanted this to be like an extended family. I wanted to have a chat with him and see just how far he wants to take that. I will be arranging a visit to Diagon Alley. He may want to meet with them before September 1st. That's a brilliant idea, Minerva, but we will be out of the country for most of the summer. Arranging it near the end of the holidays would work. They could all do their school shopping together. He could see she was troubled. The signs were hard to miss. Nervously chewing on the end of her quill while neither turning the page of her book nor writing any notes, Hermione had been deep in thought for the last 10 minutes. Since the four friends were currently in the library, revising for exams, Harry had to keep his voice to barely above a whisper. Hermione, if you don't tell us what's bothering you, we won't be able to help. Getting caught wool-gathering actually made her blush. It was also scary sometimes how well Harry could read her mood. Sorry guys, was revising some stuff from earlier in the term and my mind just wandered. To be honest, I was struggling to believe some of the things that's happened to us. I mean, we're only first years. Seeing where this was leading, Harry tried to point her in the right direction. Why are we sitting here revising for our exams? The answer to that was obvious, and Hermione didn't disappoint. So we can get good marks in our exams, it's important that we study and do well. Harry had another easy question for her. So, you would expect the four of us to perform better than, say, Ron Weasley? This very suggestion appeared to light a fire under Hermione. Considering he does the bare minimum to get by, and none of us have ever seen him studying, that would have to be yes. He seems the type who will grab his books the night before the exam, and there's always the chance that the right questions might come up for him. I would still expect the four of us to get higher marks though. What are you getting at, Harry? What you're saying is that we'll be prepared, while Ron Weasley has to hope for a large slice of luck to do well. Since that summed up Hermione's thoughts, she nodded in confirmation. Padma and Neville were also listening intently, curious to see where this was going. Well, I think what you have to consider is that I've been prepared, and also been aided by massive slices of luck. There was no chance Harry was going to get away without explaining the comment. I walked into Hogwarts as a goblin warrior, a warrior who had been training and being briefed for this mission for years. Discounting Master Flitwick, and now Henrika, Hermione knows more about the Goblin Nation than the rest of the staff put together. Quote ellipsis. But Harry, I've barely scratched the surface. I know, but none of them have even bothered to learn that much. Let's take the sorting as an example. You three now know me, what would you expect me to do in that situation? It was Padma who was first in with an answer, beginning to glimpse what Harry was trying to say. You would never renounce being a goblin, and certainly not because of a situation Dumbledore forced you into. Neville and Hermione agreed totally with that assessment, gaining a smile from Harry. We had the chances of Dumbledore pulling something like that around the 20% mark. There was even a concern he wouldn't let me leave and confine me to the castle. Hermione's hand shot into his at that declaration, offering comfort as Neville asked the question. What would you have done then? I have a way of sending my father a short-coded message that we save for emergencies. Gringotts would have shut its doors until I was released, meanwhile Hermione and I would have been doing our best to escape. Once outside the wards, we would portkey to Gringotts. She didn't know what it was about being included in his escape plans, but Hermione was sitting with a wide grin on her face. So you see I was well prepared, but then also handed a massive slice of luck by Hogwarts declaring I was her champion. The duel with Master Sharpshard also comes to mind. We all know he could take me in under 2 minutes. Instead, my Centurion armor makes me faster and stronger while being able to cast with both blades is a massive advantage. Even so, it was Hogwarts who finally tipped the balance. She hindered and obstructed Master Sharpshard at every opportunity, while keeping my path clear. Padma and Neville were both sure what had swung that fight in Harry's favor. Kicking Hermione had enraged their friend beyond anything either had ever seen. Hermione herself was beginning to see the point Harry was making. So you're saying that preparation, along with luck, has got you ahead all year? That was pretty close to what Harry was trying to say. The headmaster didn't bother to do his homework, and has found himself on the back foot since the 1st of September. We studied every move he's ever made and had a full profile of Dumbledore that was constantly being updated. I don't know if it's his arrogance that he couldn't possibly be wrong or if he didn't want anyone to know I was at Gringotts. Master Flitwick sits at the same table and would have been a mine of information on goblins. The headmaster had that resource at his fingertips and never used it. He keeps treating me like a wizard, with even Snape seeming to learn that doesn't work. Does that answer your questions? It was now a blushing Hermione who nodded, before going back to her revising. She could hear Padma sniggering in amusement and was trying to ignore it. The discovery that Snape was responsible for passing the prophecy on to Voldemort had kicked Harry's animosity against Dumbledore to a whole different level. Hermione just hoped they could reach the holidays without a confrontation. She should have known better. Minerva really couldn't exclude Albus from this demonstration, not with the examiners arriving in the castle earlier than usual. With Harry once more all over the prophet, Griselda had maneuvered to get the rest of the examiners into Hogwarts when the interest was at its peak. All she'd needed to mention was that Minerva wanted their opinion on the boy who Livid's class, and her fellow examiners couldn't wait to set off for the castle. Harry was having to perform boyfriend duties and try to talk Hermione down from the funk she was getting herself into. The older Ravenclaws had recognized most of the examiners and wondered why they were in the castle early, sparking Hermione's funk. Our exams don't start until Monday, Hermione. You don't get those examiners until our OWL year. Professor McGonagall told us they might be coming to see our class. It will just be the same as last time. A chance to help put her friend's mind onto something else while teasing was not something to be dismissed lightly. Padma just couldn't resist. Oh, Hermione, I wonder if any of the other girls will take Harry up on his offer to pet his dragon. Catching the double meaning her friend was hinting at, Hermione knew exactly how to stop this stone dead. As long as they remember I know the goblin command for bite their hands off, I don't see there being any problems, do you? She wasn't sure whether it was the look in Hermione's eyes or the tone of her voice, but something sent a shiver up Padma's back. Merlin, Hermione, you can be one scary witch when you want to be. Are you sure you're not part goblin? Saying that to any other witch would be considered a severe insult, but Padma knew Hermione would take it the spirit it was offered, as a compliment. Why thank you, Padma, that's the second time someone has said that recently. Harry must be rubbing off on me. It was only after spotting Harry's wide-eyed expression that Hermione realized what she had said, that and the sniggering traveling up and down the Ravenclaw table. Padma put her arm comfortingly around Hermione's shoulders. Ignore the plebs, Hermione, we knew what you meant. I think saying that Harry's had an influence on all of us is certainly a better way of putting it though. She could feel her friend's shoulders shaking. It was only when Hermione couldn't hold her laughter in any longer that Padma realized she wasn't upset. Hermione laughing at her slip of the tongue just confirmed what Padma had said. Harry was certainly influencing all of them. The transfiguration lesson went pretty much the same as last time, with Padma having her bluff called and stroking the dragon with a trembling hand. The examiners looked pleased, all except one. There is always one. The students had noticed him at once. He could hardly be missed. This wizard was well over 6 feet tall, yet would have trouble tipping the scales over 10 stone when he was soaking wet. This despite having a snout that could have been a model for the dipping nose cone the engineers designed for Concord. Wearing a frown since before he stepped in the door, this was one long streak of misery. Gordon McPhee had been saddled with the nickname, Grumpy Gordon, when he attended Hogwarts. Moaning McPhee was also suggested, but Myrtle had kinda got the moaning name tag all sewn up. The ghost really had no peer in the moaning stakes when she was on her game. Grumpy Gordon was a nickname that stuck even to the present day, probably because it was so apartment. I fail to see why we should change centuries of history because one class wants to do things differently. Our current method of transfiguration was painstakingly developed by our forefathers, one class a week for 9 months, and suddenly we want to throw all that away. Albus was appalled at what he had witnessed in this classroom. This new form of transfiguration had the potential to trigger massive changes in magical Britain over a very short period of time, something that in his opinion was to be avoided at all costs. I'm afraid I must agree with some of the fine points Mr. McPhee has raised. I saw no notes being taken nor homework issued, far less a textbook being used for reference. What textbooks would you put on the list for next year? Are there even textbooks available? Gordon seized on this to further his argument. Exactly my point, headmaster. We have books written by recognized masters on the subject that we would be consigning to the rubbish heap. No textbooks, no notes and no homework. Why do we need a transfiguration master teaching a class when the skills she spent many years learning clearly aren't required? Minerva was ready to go to war, but Griselda interrupted before the enraged transfiguration professor could say anything, far less draw her wand. Perhaps we could ask Mr. Crow if there are any books on this method of transfiguration. The entire class were hanging on every word spoken. To most of the students, this was their favorite class. Even Ron Weasley would cast his vote for this new method of transfiguration. With no notes to take, books to read or homework to be done, this was easily his favorite class. That he had completed the entire first-year curriculum by the end of January was immaterial to Ron. No one wanted a return to the more traditional method of teaching transfiguration. It's Centurion Crow, Mom, and sorry, but the only written material on transfiguration is purely introductory. The class were then left wondering if Snape had based his nasty demeanor on his favorite examiner. There were certainly startling similarities in the sarcastic delivery. Did you really expect him to have books? Please. With Dumbledore already in the classroom, the last thing Harry needed was a reminder of Snape. Everyone in the class who really knew Harry winced at his answer to this examiner, an examiner who reminded the Muggle-borns of the great Gonzo from the Muppet Show. Excuse me, sir, the goblins had a written language and were experimenting with printing while people on this island were huddled over pieces of shredded bark, trying to get a spark by striking 2 lumps of flint together. The goblins have had the written word as long as man has had fire. This silenced the entire class, but Harry was just getting warmed up. I realize that there are people in this room desperate to call me a liar, and that's okay. Just because you think I'm full of dragon shite still doesn't make your views on any of these matters right. Dumbledore then tried to play mediator, which was certainly the wrong person doing entirely the wrong thing where Harry was concerned. Harry, my boy, can I offer a piece of friendly advice? These people standing here hold your future in their hands. It might not be wise to antagonize them. Harry cut right across the headmaster. Quote ellipsis. Which is why we had a history exam that was the laughing stock of Europe. I'll save these witches and wizards the trouble of remembering me for future reference. I won't be sitting any OWLs. There was now lack of noise and movement as that comment froze everyone. Well, not quite. Hermione's hand again shot into Harry's under the desk. He held his girlfriend's hand before offering a comforting squeeze to let her know he was still in control. Albus was so shocked it was left to Griselda to break the silence. Centurion Crow, if you have no intention of sitting OWLs, and presumably NEWTs, could you tell us why you are here? That's easy, Mom, I'm at Hogwarts for an education. Grumpy Gordon thought he had his opportunity. Without exam passes, you're nothing, boy. The ministry can legally snap your wand. The thunk made the entire class jump, all except Hermione, who'd seen Harry draw his knife and slam it point first into the desk. I don't have a wand to break. Even Dumbledore's pet half-giant couldn't snap that, not without slicing his fingers clean off. Might stop him illegally lifting any more toddlers out their cribs. McGonagall's Harry, combined with Hermione squeezing his hand hard enough to stop blood flow, drew Harry back. He had no intention of backing down though, just curtailing his temper. Mr. McPhee hinted that this class doesn't need Professor McGonagall. I'll say it out loud that Hogwarts doesn't need Mr. McPhee. Professor McGonagall has been teaching her NEWT class for 7 years and knows her students' capabilities in transfiguration better than anyone on this planet. Why should a stranger then come into the school, meet that student for about 15 minutes and then they get to award a grade that affects that student for the rest of their life? Minerva could see Harry getting agitated at the slight to the goblins but couldn't understand why he was already refusing to sit exams. We need to be seen to be impartial, Harry, that is why we have examiners from the ministry. I trust your opinion, Professor, rather than that of an outsider. When Master Pitsley thinks I've reached apprenticeship level, he will tell me. I will then have to decide if he would take me on to become a master, or whether my future lies elsewhere. No goblin needs a slip of paper to say how far they took their education, our system has no such exams. Since I'm attending Hogwarts as a goblin, I have no need of them. Harry was rubbing his thumb along the back of Hermione's held hand, drawing as much comfort from this action as his girlfriend was. He needed it as Dumbledore once more entered the verbal fray. The old wizard just didn't know when to shut his mouth. Harry, my boy, you are taking a decision here that will affect the rest of your life, a decision that doesn't need to be made for another 4 years. I would ask you to reconsider that decision. Why, is your new plan to send Tom Riddle my OWL results and hope he dies of shame that a goblin beat his scores? I have to say it's defiantly an improvement on your power of love suggestion. I still only kiss Hermione. Hermione wasn't in the least embarrassed. She was watching how close Harry's hand stayed to his knife that was still sticking out the desk. She moved their joined hands until they were next to her sword hilt. Harry gave a slight smile at this, but Dumbledore wouldn't let it go. If you don't sit your exams, you could potentially find yourself wanting to stay in the wizarding world and being unable to do so. Harry's loud laughter cut Dumbledore off, leaving half the class thinking he'd finally lost it. It took Harry a moment to regain control before he could answer. Sorry, Hermione, but that was funnier than any of those comedy tapes you showed Padma and me over the holidays. He then turned his attention back to Dumbledore. If I decide to stay in the wizarding community, I shall be Lord Harry James Potter, Order of Merlin, First Class. Do you honestly think people will care whether I sat my OWLs or not? Your mother and father would want you to. Dumbledore never got to say any more. Harry was on his feet with his knife yanked out the desk and now pointed between the headmaster's eyes. My father will agree with my decision, believing it is mine to make. As to my mum and dad, I'll never know since they're both gone. It's looking more and more likely you had a hand in it too. Remember my promise, old man, if we get proof then I'll be coming for you. Hermione noticed Harry's armor had begun to creep down his wrists though his knife never wavered. She was certainly not the only one who was relieved to hear the bell ringing. Minerva actually stood in front of Albus before speaking. Class dismissed. Centurion, a moment of your time outside, please. Harry nodded before heading outside with the rest of the class. The instant her last student left the classroom, Minerva spun on Dumbledore. You just couldn't let it go, could you? Always thinking you know best and trying to push that view down other people's throats. Is it any wonder you're barred from going anywhere near Harry? You lose me my 2 best students and I might just follow 'em out the door. I'll tell you this, Albus Dumbledore, if you had anything to do with Lily and James' murder, I'll kill you myself. The examiners all stood there, shocked and stunned. Every member of the British magical community had laid eyes on the picture of a golden boy who lived standing over a bleeding Dumbledore. All the examiners had thought they were about to witness the live version. Albus had been playing down any talk of tension in his school. His deputy just backed Crow and threatened to kill the headmaster if the boy's claims could be proven. Griselda was thinking if that crime could be proven, the wizarding public would do the job before Minerva could get her wand on Dumbledore. This ball would confirm James and Lily Potter as 2 heroes of their country. If Albus was involved in their murder there would be hell to pay. Gordon couldn't believe what he just witnessed. His speciality was defense, so he had been focused on the boy's eyes. What he saw there sent a shiver of fear up his spine. This boy was squaring up to Albus Dumbledore, yet there had been no fear in his eyes, and it certainly wasn't a case of bravado either. There was a determination expressed there that Gordon expected to see in a few of the better NEWT candidates, very occasionally an exceptional OWL student, certainly not in someone finishing their first year at Hogwarts. He also couldn't help notice the other 3 students who were obviously ready to spring to his aid. Just what was going on here? Albus was wondering the exact same thing, and also wondering how that could have gone any worse. When Cornelius discovered Harry wasn't going to be sitting any OWLs, he would hit the roof. When it became known that Albus Dumbledore was responsible for this revelation, and he was sure Minerva was going to put the blame on him, Albus wondered if he might not be barred from the ministry too. The 3 friends had waited along the corridor for Harry, with Hermione racing to him the instant McGonagall returned to her class. Hey, I'm fine. Sorry about that, but can we cancel revision tonight? They had all caught up with each other now, leaving Padma free to answer. Sure, Harry. You got detention with McGonagall. What? No, I just want the time to tell you all what's going on. Can't have my friends thinking I'm turning into a right nutter. The rest of the school can think what it likes. Hermione was back on Harry's arm as the 4 friends headed off to lunch. She actually stopped a moment at Harry's answer. What did McGonagall want with you then? Oh, she wanted to put a word in for Hagrid. She claims he's a rather simple soul who would jump in the lake and wrestle the giant squid if Dumbledore asked him to. Sirius actually agrees with that assessment, but he can't forgive Hagrid either. Hagrid may have been blindly following Dumbledore's orders, but he knew Sirius was my godfather, so he must have known that's where I was supposed to go. This had Hermione shaking her head in disbelief. In the armed forces, if you're given an order that's unlawful, that I was following orders, defense doesn't apply. I don't know how that works when a headmaster is giving the orders to a groundskeeper. Oh, McGonagall also wanted a word about the Potter scholarships. They've made the choices and needed to know if I was going to meet the 2 students beforehand. She suggested meeting in Diagon Alley, and then we could all do our shopping together. Sirius and Amelia both knew our summer schedule, so McGonagall had already picked a date she knew we'd be available. That's a brilliant idea, Harry. I wish I'd known someone on the train last year. Sitting with friends on the express at Christmas was so much better than being alone and terrified on the 1st of September. This drew a big smile from Hermione as she too cast her mind back. I agree that's a brilliant idea, Neville, but I met Harry on the train so I can't really complain. Did McGonagall tell you anything about them, Harry? He nodded before answering. One is a muggle-born wizard who's going to be the first in his family, but not the last. He has a younger brother and sister, and both of them are magical. His name is Colin Creevy and his dad is a milkman. Hermione, what's a milkman? She thought of the best way of explaining this that her friends would understand. You know how at my house we can phone and the takeaway gets delivered. Well, Colin's dad delivers milk. Padma was still struggling to get her head around this phone and it will be delivered to your door concept, even after seeing it in action multiple times. So you phone and his dad rushes to your door with some milk. The old Hermione would have went into great detail about dairies, milk floats and regular rounds, and they would all have missed lunch by the time she was finished. Something like that. Padma. Who got the other scholarship? Harry. A young girl who is an only child and lost her mother a year or so back. Her name's Luna Lovegood and I got the impression McGonagall was really hoping we would take her under our wings. Padma grabbed Neville by the arm as they increased their pace toward the Great Hall. Well, whether they know it or not, those two just found themselves with 4 new friends. Now let's get to lunch. Watching Harry scare the adults always gives me an appetite, and we've got our normal defense class next. The 4 friends made their way to lunch. The quartet weren't the only ones that noticed neither Dumbledore nor McGonagall made it down. Thanks for reading and happy Hogmanay. Offers abound. Harry Crow. Disclaimer, I do not own Harry Potter and write here purely for my own pleasure. I am constantly amazed that people appear to enjoy these efforts and can only offer my thanks to those who take the time to read them. Chapter 32. After dinner, the 4 friends headed up to the 7th floor. Harry didn't want there to be any way this conversation could be overheard. He also appreciated Hermione waiting until now to discover why he'd suddenly announced to all of first year he had no intention of sitting his OWLs, even though she was obviously desperate to know. Hogwarts provided the quartet with a cozy room that held a couple of sofas facing each other. Harry and Hermione slipped into one, leaving Neville and Padma to occupy the second. Taking a deep breath, Harry began to tell his friends why he'd asked them here. Padma, Neville, there are things going on behind the scenes you need to know about. I'm sorry that I can't tell you everything, but I think you deserve to know what might affect the 4 of us. Neville, this is going to be hard to hear, mate. It's only certain things we've just discovered that have me telling you this now. Padma shifted closer to her friend. The way Harry was talking, Neville would soon need any comfort she could offer. We have to go back before we were born to discover where all our troubles started. They began with a prophecy that links me to Voldemort. You see, until Voldemort visited Godric's Hollow that Halloween, the prophecy could have applied to one of 2 boys, Harry Potter or Neville Longbottom. This was a revelation not even Hermione had heard before. It shocked the 3 listeners as Harry continued. It wasn't until Voldemort cast his spell at me that I became the child of the prophecy. Had he chosen to visit the Longbottoms first, Neville could have been saddled with being the boy who lived, and I would be the one visiting my mum and dad in St. Mungo's. Those Death Eaters knew about the prophecy. With the Potters dead, they went after the Longbottoms, looking for some answers. Both wizards now found themselves being comforted by the witch sitting next to them. Telling the story was affecting Harry nearly as much as Neville hearing it. We knew the prophecy was made to Dumbledore and assumed Sirius had told Voldemort about it, while betraying my mum and dad. When we found out Sirius was innocent, my father began an investigation into the people who were responsible for an innocent man being sent to Azkaban. That's when we discovered what Crouch was up to, and got Sirius free. The investigation didn't stop there though, and has just provided us with the name of the Death Eater who told the prophecy to Voldemort. It was Snape. It was only Padma's arm around Neville that stopped him springing to his feet. He looked to Harry, hoping this horror story wasn't real. Harry, why is Snape still walking around Hogwarts? Believe me, Neville, I so want to hack the bastard to pieces. The problem is Dumbledore. He knows what Snape did and has been protecting him all these years. This proved a revelation too far for Padma. She spat out a string of words that they assumed to be Hindi before reverting to English. How could the doddering old ass be stupid enough to keep Snape in the school with you two at Hogwarts? If it wasn't for Master Pitsley, both of you would even be in his class. That's just sick. Neville was having a revelation of his own. Harry's outburst in class now made perfect sense. You think Dumbledore gave that information to Snape so he would pass it on to Voldemort? It's the only thing that makes any sense because I know how much I want to attack that greasy bastard. For you not to, there would need to be a very good reason. Harry was delighted to see how far his friend had progressed from the boy who was almost frightened of his own shadow. My father maneuvered Dumbledore into a position where he would reveal how Voldemort got to hear about the prophecy. The only problem is, Dumbledore has no idea he was set up and hasn't twigged we know about Snape. If we go after Snape, Dumbledore is bound to realize some of what's going on. There are things happening that should destroy any public credibility Dumbledore has left, and may even see him heading to Azkaban, if we can provide enough information for the Ministry to go after him. There is a chance Snape may slip out the country before we can drop the shit onto Dumbledore. I think it's a chance we need to take. Given Dumbledore's track record, the odds of Snape being someone he manipulated to get what he wanted are better than even money. There was still something troubling Neville though. I just can't work out why he would do that. What's in it for Dumbledore? Henrika spelt it out for us in history class. Neville. Voldemort and his Death Eaters were killing any and all opposition. The estimate at that time was the Ministry would fall by Christmas. Sirius told me our parents were very close, and also part of a group that opposed the Death Eaters. This group was led by Albus Dumbledore. The implications behind this hit Hermione hard. He would be able to manipulate situations to meet the terms of the prophecy. You told me your parents had defied Voldemort 3 times. Padma was on the exact same wavelength as her friend. Quote ellipsis. And if he had Snape on the other side, he could pretty much do what he liked. Henrika tries to get us to look behind the facts of history. Can't you just see Dumbledore thinking the Potters and Longbottoms being wiped out was a fair price to pay for stopping Voldemort, especially since it was costing him nothing? The mental picture that Harry was painting was one that his friends had no trouble recognizing. Hermione had just put 2 and 2 together, and hoped harder than she'd ever hoped for anything in her young life that the answer she was seeing was actually 327, anything but 4. Is this all a mission for Gringotts? Harry, is that why you're not going to sit OWLs? Seeing the panic in her eyes, Harry took his girlfriend's hand in both of his. I came to Hogwarts as a goblin warrior. My mission was to promote goblin-wizard relations, with getting rid of Bins at the top of my list. Harry Crow's personal mission was to make friends, and get some idea of where his place was in the world. When I spotted a young witch struggling to get her trunk onto the express, I thought here was someone else looking for a friend. I had watched you approach the group of Slytherin girls. I didn't hear what they said, but I'm certain it wouldn't be welcome to Hogwarts. Hermione leant into Harry, the panic in her eyes now replaced with an apology. After the troll in the infirmary, when I thought you and Padma wanted nothing more to do with me, I had decided not to return after Halloween. I was sure my father would have a replacement history teacher by then, just as I was sure there was nothing left for me at Hogwarts. I understand keeping secrets is bad, which is why I told the three of you as much as I could that lunchtime with my father. You three now know more about what's going on than officials at the ministry. Pulling her boyfriend toward her, Hermione then instigated their longest kiss to date. This kiss wasn't about passion, rather both confirming they hadn't lost something that was so important to the young couple, the fact that they were still a couple. I can say I'm sorry, Harry, but I thought it would be better if I showed you. I have been racking my brains all day to figure out why you would do the work and then not sit exams. With all this talk of manipulation, I added up the facts and came up with a totally stupid answer. The answer was so shocking though, it actually stopped me thinking straight. Since the day we met, you have been as honest as you could with me. Harry now had a smile on his face, thinking that one day kissing Hermione might actually overtake hugging Hermione as his favorite thing in all the world. I'm sorry too, the reasons I gave in class were the truth, but it was really something I should have talked over with you first though, rather than just springing it on you along with everyone else. Dumbledore just makes me so mad that I announced my decision on the spur of the moment. I'll need to stay out of his way until the holidays. I could actually feel my armor slowly starting to slide over my body, getting ready for action. I didn't even know it could do that by itself. Padma had been ready to slap some sense into her friend. She thought they had been slowly breaking Hermione out of her habit of overthinking every situation. Hermione had then saved the situation by relying on her instincts, and changing Harry's frown of disappointment into a goofy grin. We'll help you with staying out of Dumbledore's way. He's not someone I think any of us want to be around. Miss Granger there may just have suffered a brain fart, but Neville and I never doubted you for a second. It was a blushing Hermione who tried to tease back, desperate to put her clangor behind her. I'll have you know, Miss Patil, that young ladies do not suffer from flatulence, of any kind. I will admit to having a moment worthy of Ronald Weasley. Her boyfriend interrupted before she could say any more. Thanks for that vote of confidence, guys. Hermione, please don't take this the wrong way. I would rather think my girlfriend suffered from the occasional brain fart than she was in any way comparable to Ronald Weasley. The kiss on the cheek that came with this comment confirmed to Hermione that Harry had forgiven his girlfriend's faux pas. For that, he could call it whatever the hell he wanted. Turning his attention to Neville, Harry again pushed the conversation into an uncomfortable area. I said you were the closest thing to family I had left, Neville. I still believe that. Because of this, there's something I want to ask. The next time you visit St. Mungo's, could I go too? I would really like to meet my godmother. Neville's head was now down, but he drew comfort from Padma's arm slipping back around him. This was a subject he found incredibly difficult to talk about, yet these were his friends. Harry even considered him family. She won't know you, Harry. She doesn't know me. We take her some sweets my gran says were mum's favorite. She eats the sweet and then slips the wrapper into my hand. Gran says to throw them away, but I like to think of it as a present from my mum. I've kept every single one. I have them all carefully folded in a drawer in my bedroom. As he slowly and painfully told his story, they could all see the moisture gathering in Neville's eyes. To be honest, his three friends were suffering from the same condition. Neville, the goblin healers have a lot of experience with this curse. My father is going to offer their expertise to your gran when we meet over the holidays. They may not be able to do anything, but it couldn't hurt to try. The offer is being made because your mum is my godmother. Any steps toward good relations that come from this is purely a secondary benefit. Padma could practically feel the surge of hope that rushed through Neville. She agreed with Harry, there really was nothing to lose. His second comment prodded something that had been fermenting at the back of her mind. Padma decided just to ask her friend about what was troubling her. Harry, why are Gringotts pushing so hard for better relations with wizards? It goes against everything I've ever heard about goblins. Knowing they deserve the truth, Harry laid it out for them. The very blood policies that are slowly killing the magical community are having the same effect on Gringotts. It's all about maintaining power and bloodlines. You two are bloods and will probably have betrothals negotiated for you. I understand in some families they are even considering cousins now as spouses. The betrothal comment added a green tinge to Neville's complexion, but Harry continued before anyone commented on it. They are so desperate to hold on to their power that every year, brilliant and talented witches and wizards are forced to leave Britain. This is simply because they don't possess the proper ancestry to be considered for decent jobs or as proper spouses. In a few weeks, the 7th years will graduate and discover that the bigotry in Hogwarts was only a sample of what they'll be faced with in magical Britain. These policies not only affect Hermione's future, but mine too. He turned toward his girlfriend. You've seen some of our city under Gringotts and, while it's large, that's all there is. In Britain, witches and wizards outnumber goblins by at least 10 to 1. Current ministry policy prohibits goblins living anywhere else but under Gringotts, causing us the same problems as you. Every year, more and more bright young goblins are deciding their future doesn't lie in blood-controlled Britain, and are heading off to less restrictive countries. With an aging population and increasing numbers of younger goblins leaving, we are only a few generations away from serious population decline. Now perhaps you can see why we're pushing for this. Harry's story had him enthralled. We don't even know if this will work, but have to be able to show some progress to stand any chance of slowing the numbers leaving, putting even more pressure on the decision I've got to make about my future. Not all goblins will get behind this plan though. We have our fair share of bigotry too. There are those who, if Dursley had left me on the desk, would have fed me to a dragon and considered there being one less wizard in the world as a good place to start. This drew a yelp of fear from Hermione, and saw her burrowing even closer into her boyfriend. My father is a very clever goblin. He saw the possibilities immediately. His original intention was simply for Harry Potter to turn up at Hogwarts and be sympathetic to Goblin views. As I grew up, it was me who kept pushing for more. Extra tuition in history, economics, languages, anything to make my father proud of me and show him, and the nation, he was right to adopt a young wizard called Harry. Being awarded Centurion status was way beyond anything we could have ever dreamed of. His attention was once more focused on Neville. Our healers were able to remove that fragment of Voldemort out of my head. The only solution the wizards have is to hit the container with a killing curse. This drew yelps from his three friends, but Harry was determined to get his point across. I'm not saying our healers are better, Neville, just different. Since there has been a lot of study into that curse, those differences just might be able to help your parents. Neville was holding on to the glimmer of hope this offered. Harry, I will talk to my gran about this, and you visiting. I think you're right, we really have nothing to lose. My father knows far more about this than I do, the two of them can chat about it when we're all on holiday. That feeling of having barely scratched the surface of goblin culture was back with a vengeance. Something Harry had now mentioned twice was niggling at Hermione, so she asked her boyfriend if he could explain it. Why have the goblins done a lot of research on that particular curse? Realizing that this would be something that could affect the Longbottom's final decision, Harry told his friends some information that had been conveniently forgotten by wizards. It's called the torture curse for a very specific reason. About 400 years ago, this vile thing was invented by the British Ministry of Magic, for the sole purpose of torturing captured goblins. This was met by a trio of disbelieving stares. Goblins are pretty tough. Beating them up or breaking bones doesn't usually get you much information, other than having your circumstances of birth questioned. The ministry had a war on their hands and needed information from their prisoners. Something new was needed. The curse was supposed to be kept secret, not much chance of that happening in the ministry. It was only after the war was over that this particular curse was classed as an unforgivable, when wizards started using it on other wizards. Ministry law states that using this curse on a human being can see the caster get a life sentence in Azkaban. You do remember what ministerial department deals with goblins? All three friends were struggling to answer that without using the word barbaric. Hermione, though, had jumped to a different situation. Does that mean Lucius Malfoy could have cast the torture curse on you that day in defense class and nothing would have been done? Technically yes, though my knife would have been buried in his chest before Malfoy could cast. We're classed as dangerous beasts. Hermione, is it any wonder goblins are leaving Britain? If Gringotts ever reach the stage where we have to bring in staff from abroad, it would be the beginning of the end. We would need to pay them a higher salary to compensate for the poor conditions in Britain, meaning the bank would have to charge its customers more. Our only alternative would be to close Gringotts. Either way, there are no winners. Padma checked her watch and got a surprise. Guys, we've been chatting for ages. If we don't get a move on, we'll miss curfew. They were heading back to the dorms and Neville was enjoying Padma holding his arm. She'd been there for him tonight when he needed a friend. Harry's words from earlier struck another chord, and Neville didn't want Padma's hand on his arm replaced by that of a stranger his gran picked out. Can we extend our dating deal to include betrothals? If our families see us close, then maybe they won't start negotiations with people we don't know. It was a shocked Padma who had to clarify what her friend just said. Are you sure, Neville? I would hate to think I was taking advantage of you. We're friends and have a lot of fun together. You would be doing me a favor. Some of those girls scare the life out of me. I'm not talking about becoming boyfriend and girlfriend, just being good friends and looking out for one another. If you get a boyfriend, I would be fine with that. Padma knew Neville Longbottom would be considered quite the catch. He was also someone she really liked and was delighted he wasn't looking to be her boyfriend, yet. I can live with that, though I think it's you who'll get a girlfriend first. Neville just smiled with relief, giving Padma a friendly hug before saying goodnight to his friends and entering Gryffindor. The three Ravenclaws headed for their own house, with Hermione nervously asking Harry if they were okay. A misunderstanding that we talked out. We're fine, Hermione. I knew what not knowing why I wasn't going to sit those exams must be doing to you. I should have spoken to you earlier. I was just so busy trying to figure out how much I could tell Padma and Neville. Sorry too about the history lesson that turned into. With Neville safely tucked up in Gryffindor, Padma could now focus her attention on the Ravenclaw couple. She'd been surprised and delighted at how open Harry had been tonight. Even Neville had crawled out of that shell of his a little more. Oh, don't be daft, Harry. Apologizing to Hermione for extra lessons. You put a lot of trust in us tonight, and offered Neville some hope. I'll spare you another Patil sister jumping you for a hug and just say thank you for that. The three friends made curfew with mere minutes to spare. Gordon had heard fanciful tales of this special room inside Hogwarts. Watching those four leave breakfast and head off for the second morning that weekend had him determined to investigate. His patchy information led him to this 7th floor corridor where he made straight for the only door that was available. Upon entering, he couldn't have begun to describe what the room looked like, probably because Gordon couldn't take his eyes off the boy. Harry had a metallic shield over his left forearm and the knife of his held in that same hand. This was because he was wielding the sword of Gryffindor in his right hand. A kilt would have dated him back when the Highlanders fought the English Redcoats, though the Redcoats never fired spells at their enemies. The boy was fighting two dueling dummies. These were the top of the range versions that actually fought back. His three friends were cheering him on while the red-headed tutor studied a stopwatch. Time. This led to much cheering, before they noticed Gordon. Harry's smile vanished as he made his way to confront his uninvited and unwelcome visitor. Can we help you, Mr. McPhee? Gordon couldn't miss that neither sword nor knife were returned to their sheaths. The boy was ready for battle. When I heard you received extra tutoring in defense, I was naturally curious. My father pays for private tutoring in defense, and that's exactly what it is, private. I would like you to leave, now. Not believing the cheek of this brat, Gordon addressed himself directly to Bill. Do you allow your students to talk to ministry officials like this? I work for Gringotts, not the ministry or Hogwarts. My job here is to teach these four to fight. You are disrupting my lesson. Gordon focused once more on the boy. He'd come here for information and intended to get it, one way or another. If you've been trained to fight, let's see you throw me out this room. This would at least provide Gordon with a measure of this boy's capabilities. The idea that he could be forcibly ejected from the room never even crossed the examiner's mind. He was looking forward to wiping the smirk of this brat's face. Okay, sir, goodbye. Gordon thought he was ready for anything, but the boy turning his back and returning to his friends caught him by surprise. A stinging hex to his arse should enrage the brat enough to fight. That was when the second surprise kicked in. The examiner couldn't move a muscle as Vine suddenly had him tied like a joint of butchered beef. His feet then left the floor as he shot toward the door. Gordon hadn't seen the boy cast a spell yet. Here he was, flying through the open door and smacking straight into the tapestry that was hanging in the corridor. His bindings may have vanished, but it still took a moment to untangle himself from the tapestry and get his bearings. What was throwing those bearings off was the lack of a door he'd just been thrown through. None of his diagnostic spells returned any evidence of a room existing, a room he'd been standing in moments before. He was going to be in the castle until Friday and would be keeping a close eye on those four. His report to Dolores would certainly make interesting reading, though he now agreed with her this boy was a threat to their way of life. Sorry about that, guys. Hogwarts will make sure we're not disturbed again. Just as well we were running defense drills, and you weren't firing curses from your sword. How did it feel holding both weapons and your shield? Bill was pleased to see the honesty once more shine through in Harry's answer. It felt slightly awkward, but I think that's more because this is an attacking configuration, and I wasn't allowed to attack. Using two blades that can cast spells proved successful against Master Sharpshard, but it would leave me too open against multiple opponents, especially if they had wands. That's why I wanted to add my shield. Can I try it again, where I can fight back? Bill nodded and started his stopwatch. What they saw next threw any concept of time out the door quicker than Hogwarts had got rid of McPhee. Harry was suddenly in full Centurion armor and charging the dummies. He moved like liquid gold as he dodged and deflected curses while laying down a double barrage of his own. The dummies had been programmed by wizards on how to respond to attacks. They had no program designed for an attack like this. Harry was on him in seconds, and you didn't need a stopwatch to know the fight was over only a couple of heartbeats later. His shield knocked the dummy's wand arm away as the knife he now held in that hand did the real damage. As the shield did its job, Harry's knife slashed across the dummy's torso before a blasting curse sent it spinning backward. If anything, it got off lightly. The other dummy lost its wand arm to the sword that then buried itself into the artificial torso of its opponent. A banishing charm saw dummy number 2 then fly across the room along with the first one, leaving both lying in a tangled heap. Harry stood panting, though more with adrenaline rush than effort, as the other four watched while only the ticking of Bill's forgotten stopwatch broke the stunned silence. It was predictably Padma who had something to say. Wow, Harry, McPhee doesn't know how lucky he was that Hogwarts threw him out the room and not you. That was scary to watch from here. I never want to be on the other end of it. Thanks, Padma. I felt as if I'd been ignoring the goblin part of me for too long. That's how I would fight, against goblins or wizards. What do you think, curse breaker? The words were out before Bill had time to think of what he was saying. I reckon any wizard seeing you charging like that would shit themselves. It was only the giggling coming from his other 3 students that alerted him he'd said something inappropriate. I also think we might need new training dummies we might need to put armor on, if you were going to attack like that. Really devastating attack, Harry, and no webbing. I learned my lesson with Master Sharpshard. Put your opponent out of the fight so they can't attack you again. Bill didn't know if a reparo would actually work on the dummies, so had them on shield drills for the remainder of the lesson. He asked Harry for a quiet word, after escorting them to the Great Hall for lunch. Ducking outside for a moment provided the privacy they needed. Bill didn't waste time and got right to the heart of the matter. My father is determined to invite Ginny to this ball. He thinks her sitting at your table would be a father making a daughter's dream come true. I wanted to check that you were okay with this arrangement. This drew a frown from Harry. When we suggested 3 tickets for the Weasley family, we assumed you would be the third guest. This was actually an embarrassing situation his father had placed Bill in, and didn't bode well for future wizard-goblin negotiations. My father had no sisters, and then 6 sons before Ginny was born. He dotes on her. It's actually killing him waiting on Fudge making his goblin announcement to the Wizengamot so he can tell Ginny she's invited to the ball. This left Harry shaking his head as another potential problem raised its head. You do know we are all going to the nation's tailors and having our clothes made for the ball. There will be 5 girls sitting there in a certain style of dress and your sister will be the odd one out. If she wears the same as the rest of us, it could be construed as the ministry already bending over backwards to please the goblins. It is well known Susan is already part of our group, and will be on holiday with us, so her dress like us won't matter. Ginny is a totally different case since her father will be the ministry's direct link to the nation. Harry thought hard for a minute before answering. I have no objection to your sister being there, though not at the expense of even 1 vote being changed against us. I think you'll need to run this past my father. I will happily abide with what he decides. The senior Weasley was supposed to be the ministry's leading expert on muggles. It would seem he had a bit to go to get his head around goblins. It would be interesting to hear Dan and Emma's opinion of the man, after meeting him at the ball. Fudge had judged his moment perfectly. Half the Wizengamot were almost asleep, and the other half couldn't wait for this session to finish so they could get back to their own lives. As Dumbledore asked if there was any other business, the minister stood before the old fool could bring his hammer down. Excuse me, Chief Warlock, I have a matter to bring before the members. It concerns the ministry's summer ball, an event that has all of Europe talking, and scrambling for tickets. This drew a few laughs. Johnny Foreigner wanting to attend their event, and not being able to get tickets, was considered the way things should be by most of this body. This is easily the premier event on this year's social calendar, and one that I know we're all looking forward to. Why I'm standing before you today is to inform this body that the event nearly never took place. He now had everyone's complete attention, so Cornelius pressed on with his presentation. A brave young man will become this country's youngest ever recipient of an Order of Merlin, first class. Now, through no fault of his, if anyone at the ministry wants to officially contact young Harry, our own laws state it must be done through the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures. Labeling young Harry as a creature is not something I can stand here and support. That is why I am proposing legislative changes for this house to consider. This created a right hullabaloo, with Cornelius and Amelia the only calm people in the chamber. Even Albus had worked himself into a state, though that was more likely to be because he didn't know any of this beforehand. The minister knew they would all be running scenarios through their heads, attempting to second guess what he was up to. His hope was that, when he provided details of his proposal, they would see it was nowhere near as bad as they were now considering. When the first challenge came, Cornelius was disappointed. He now owed Amelia 5 galleons as she had predicted correctly. Excuse me, Minister. Surely you don't expect the Department of International Magical Cooperation to now incorporate our liaisons with goblins? No, Madam Umbridge, I was suggesting no such thing. That raises a very interesting point though. Both members of the Crouch family only received justice because young Harry passed information to Madam Bones through her niece, who's a friend of Harry's at Hogwarts. That department now has a new head because of that information. It also highlights a need for a more direct channel to a nation that every single person in this chamber, with the exception of Albus Dumbledore, does business with. This actually generated some sniggers in the chamber, and broadcast to everyone just how far Dumbledore's star had waned when he was a figure of ridicule for the minister to have a pop at. It was time for Cornelius to reveal his plan to the chamber. We currently have a department that deals exclusively with muggles, mainly the misuse of their artifacts. My proposal would see that department tasked to take on our relationship with the Goblin Nation, and its current head promoted to handle all the ministry's dealings with both. As many of you will already know, Arthur's oldest son is currently employed by Gringotts as a cursebreaker, and as a personal tutor to young Harry. That last morsel was indeed news to many, though welcome news. Through this very fortuitous link, a preliminary inquiry allows me to stand before this chamber with the complete proposal you'll hear today. While the ministry would be represented by Arthur Weasley, the Goblin Nation have proposed Senior Accounts Manager Barchoke to be their ambassador to the ministry. This chamber may know him better as the Goblin young Harry calls father. This was a bombshell that silenced the chamber. If they rejected this proposal, they would effectively be rejecting the boy who Livid's father. Umbridge came back for more. Excuse me again, Minister. Just what powers will this new department have? Madam Umbridge, I'm surprised at you. This proposal is not about granting any one person or department the ability to make sweeping changes. Have you forgotten that only this chamber has the power to make any alterations to our laws? The new department will be tasked with opening a dialogue between ourselves and others. If, in the course of time, this dialogue leads to any proposed changes in those laws, it will then be debated and voted on in this chamber. I believe Barchoke is also considering having William Weasley as his assistant, hoping this will help avoid any issues of protocol from delaying this project becoming a working entity. This drew nods of agreement all around the chamber. Two purebloods should be more than able to keep a goblin in line. It wasn't even as if the ministry would be granting him a great boon. Classing goblins the same as muggles wasn't much of a step up. If it meant they had a way to intervene when Gringotts threatened to close another pureblood's vault, it would be well worth the goblins' meager gain in status. Dolores just couldn't leave it alone though. She was like a dog with a bone it didn't want to be parted from. Minister, are you aware the boy in question declared publicly that he wouldn't be sitting his OWLs? Cornelius had been prepared for this, and understood he had to kill this story stone dead. I am aware of Harry's declaration, and the circumstances surrounding why he made it. I have spoken to Harry on many occasions, and Madams Bones and Longbottom will be holidaying with him over the summer. I'm sure I can speak for all three of us and say we are of the opinion that he is a fine young man. We are also aware how he reacts to attempts to manipulate him, especially by Headmaster Dumbledore. We have 4 years yet before he needs to make the final decision on that subject, and we all know a lot can change in 4 years. Here was the minister's clearest indication that Dumbledore was on his way out. The entire Wizengamot had witnessed the boy's reaction to Dumbledore in this very chamber, so it was Cornelius who was being believed here, despite Albus's strong protest. The minister still had the floor and finished his presentation. The normal period for proposed legislation like this to sit before this chamber is 40 days. I do not want to face the accusation of rushing this through the chamber, so I am proposing we defer voting on this until the 3rd of August. Amelia immediately seconded that proposal and, with no one willing to publicly put their name to an objection, the proposal was passed. Albus still sat in his seat, even although the chamber had now emptied. He was supposed to be the great manipulator, but Cornelius Fudge had just ran rings around him in a chamber he previously owned. The old wizard though was grudgingly forced to admit this was a work of sheer genius, even down to the date of the vote. Instead of allowing extra time for members to organize their debate, Cornelius had craftily scheduled the vote to be right after the ball. People would enjoy themselves that Friday night, then come to this chamber Monday morning to vote. He had attempted to get William Weasley to work for him, and been vigorously rebuffed at every turn. Yet Cornelius not only managed it, the minister apparently had Barchoke on side too. Scholarships, Order of Merlin Ball and an ambassador, everyone walking away from the table thinking they got what they wanted. Albus found himself tipping his hat to Cornelius and Amelia as the pair made their way back into the chamber and headed toward him. Very well played, Cornelius, very well played indeed. We're not there yet, Albus, and you're forcing me to do something I really don't want to. This is a very prestigious event, an event that I can't have anyone upsetting the guest of honor over the course of the evening. You have proven time and time again that you cannot leave young Harry in peace, therefore I can't take the chance of you being there. Sorry, Albus, but you are barred from the ministry ball. He really only had one question. Did Harry or his father ask you to do this? No, they know nothing about this. The two of you in the same room is too much temptation for you not to interfere. It was my decision not to allow that to happen. Both walked away and left Albus sitting there a broken man. Albus was actually trying to decide if he could bring himself to play the last card he held, giving up Severus to Barchoke. The goblin's comment about seeking him out on Harry's birthday now made perfect sense. Barchoke fully expected Albus to be at the ball. For Albus not to attend would send signals around Britain, and even Europe, that his days in a position of power were numbered. Whatever decision he made about Severus was now pushed a couple of weeks closer by this. He would need that time to convince Barchoke and Harry that he should be invited to the ball. They left their history exam arm in arm. Hermione stretched up and kissed Harry on the cheek before resting her head on his shoulder as they walked. Why thank you, miss, and pray tell what I did to receive such an honor. I want to make sure I repeat it, often. Hermione couldn't help but laugh at the playfulness of her boyfriend. The pressure was now off all of them. Our last exam, Harry, they're all over. Normally I would be worrying myself sick by this point, going over every paper in my head and working out how many points I had dropped. Now, I've got you, we've got friends and a whole summer to look forward to. The first 10 days jumping between all our homes and getting prepared for the ball, then we're off on a worldwide adventure. I've never been this happy that school is ending. In fact, I've never been this happy. This earned Hermione a return kiss on the cheek before Padma interrupted. It's too nice a day to sit inside. Let's grab some food from the hall and eat it down by the lake. This proved to be such a popular idea that most of first year ended up down by the water. The summer holidays were just around the corner. Thanks for reading. 2 It's official. Britain has just had its second wettest year since records began. As a cyclist, I didn't need people with PhDs and supercomputers to tell me that it started raining at the end of March and still hasn't stopped. Evening classes in art building are proving rather popular. First class ball. Harry Crow. Disclaimer, when carrying out DIY, it isn't always about saving money. To me, being able to stand back and say, I did that, is equally as important. That is why the first person to click on this chapter is also the first person, other than me, to read it. I realize this might not be everyone's cup of tea and can only suggest they get the professionals in. I can heartily recommend J.K. Rowling's early works. She really makes the character of Harry Potter her own. Chapter 33. Albus sat at the leaving feast and couldn't remember when he'd experienced a worst year at Hogwarts. The reason for his personal annus horribilis was sitting at the Ravenclaw table, along with 2 Gryffindors and a couple of Hufflepuffs. While they had remained at their own tables as Slytherin were awarded the House and Quidditch Cups, the 4 first years had moved toward Ravenclaw as soon as the feast commenced. He'd since learned that this group would not only be holidaying together, they were attending the Ministry Ball as Harry's guests. Harry would have Muggles, a goblin, a Veela and a wizarding family from India as guests at his table. This was certainly a provocative mixture, yet Albus Dumbledore was the one barred from attending. Unlike Cinderella, Albus didn't need a fairy godmother, being perfectly capable of transfiguring his own horse and carriage. Glass slippers or a suitable wardrobe wouldn't cause him any trouble either. His problem was that, while Cinderella had an invitation to the ball, Albus Dumbledore didn't. An even bigger shock to Albus though was the reactions of both Weasley parents at his visit to their home. After reading of Arthur's potential new position at the ministry, Albus had thought this would give him an into what was happening with the goblins, and more importantly, Harry. To say he'd been given short shrift at the Burrow was putting it mildly. Molly had delivered a personal howler from as close as her rather large bosom and their height discrepancies allowed. Albus was hoping everyone had forgotten the Quirrell incident. Arthur then took over the hazing from his wife before practically throwing him out of the Burrow, apparently endangering 4 of their children and then attempting to blackmail their eldest son was not appreciated by the Weasley family. Barchoke's deadline of Harry's birthday also caused scheduling problems, since the goblin was going to be out the country for most of the summer and their meeting at the ball was now no longer an option. Albus was left with no choice but to pass a message to Barchoke through Sirius. At least the answer took some pressure off. The goblin was prepared to wait until the beginning of next term, giving Albus the entire summer to make up his mind. Albus was still torn though. He badly needed an opening to get closer to the boy as every other door he tried had been slammed in his face. With the celebratory ball causing a stir, and the proposed new goblin initiative, he couldn't see any way Severus could survive being outed as the person who gave Voldemort the prophecy, leading directly to the Potters being murdered. His potions professor would draw scant comfort from the Great Hall being bedecked in green and silver if this was his last summer as a free man. Hogwarts deputy though held polar opposite views to those of the headmaster. Apart from Slytherin House winning both trophies, Minerva thought this had been a stellar year. Her tough stance on discipline may have seen quite a number of students on probation but had improved all the students' general behavior by a noticeable amount. With a line drawn, and the consequences for crossing it known, Hogwarts had purred along nicely since Christmas. You then had to factor in the new history curriculum and its professor, plus completely changing the way Transfiguration was being taught to first year. It was also hard to dismiss the impact Harry's private tutors were having on the school. Bill Weasley was not only teaching most of first year, his revision classes for students facing OWL and NEWT had been very well attended. The Weasley twins had actually come to Minerva with Master Pitsley's opinion that they would be beyond OWL level by next summer, and could sit their exams a year early if they wished. Both had actually confided in their head of house that Harry was well ahead of them. Minerva noticed that it wasn't just Slytherin who were celebrating. It looked like the group of mixed first years sitting at the Ravenclaw table were ready to party too, and the good cheer was spreading to the rest of the hall. Albus may be disappointed that Harry Potter didn't come to Hogwarts, but Minerva thought Harry Crow had been the conduit through which all the positive changes had flowed. Minerva couldn't help but smile at the thought she would be seeing this group over the summer, not only at the ball but when they met to shop with the Potter Scholarship students. The woman with the reputation for being the strictest person in Hogwarts had probably smiled more this year than any other since she started teaching here. There weren't too many smiles at King's Cross after the Express arrived. That wasn't strictly true though. Emma, Dan and Sirius all thought it was funny the way Hermione and Harry were holding on to each other, as if they would never see the other again. Gone was Harry's stoic public face and Hermione actually had tears in her eyes at the thought of being parted. After a couple of minutes of this, Emma leaned toward Sirius. Dan and I are actually working next week. We finish up for the holidays on Friday. How about we take them both home with us for the weekend, and then Harry can use his portkey on Monday morning. The alternative would be these two mopping around their houses. Poor Urgit would end up knackered carrying their letters back and forth. I think that's a great idea. I'll let his father know to expect them Monday morning. Would it be okay if they spent a couple of days at my house? Henrika's going to be very busy at Gringotts for the first half of the holidays. Dan was trying to appear miffed at this arrangement, and failing miserably. Emma made no attempt to hide her excitement at having him home, though she could still tease the man who had quickly become a good friend to both her and Dan. You have a library, Sirius, we may never see them again. Just go, and we'll see how long these two take to notice you've left. Harry's goblin upbringing was telling him this was totally irrational, but it didn't help one bit. He also knew they were meeting up next weekend to get their outfits for the ball. That just made him feel worse. His head told him he'd be fine, but Harry's heart was screaming it couldn't last a week without Hermione's hugs. She'd gotten him addicted since the first day they met. It was an addiction he had no intention of fighting. That Hermione apparently felt exactly the same was the reason they were still standing on the platform, long after everyone else had left. He didn't know how long they had been standing there, but it was now quiet, a state that couldn't exist when Sirius was around. Harry removed that hair he loved so much from his eyes, to see a pair of parents smirking at him. With no sign of his godfather anywhere, he was forced to ask the obvious question. Do you know where Sirius is? This got his girlfriend's attention. She recognized the smirks on her parents' faces at once. They were up to something. Dan didn't keep them waiting. Oh, he got fed up waiting on you two to let go of each other. Your godfather left ages ago. I suppose that means we've got a lodger for the weekend, but only if you take Hermione with you to Gringotts on Monday. Dan was soon experiencing his own personal patented Hermione hug. He wasn't sure if it was her sword fencing or all the practice his daughter was getting with hugging Harry, but Hermione could now make his ribs creak with the ferocity of her embrace. She quickly moved on to her mother, any thoughts of the Blues banished now that Harry was coming home with them. The boy in question had a mad grin on his face, and finally remembered to answer Dan. That would be bloody fantastic. Lucius had watched all this from the shadows, still hoping for a break. He'd easily discovered where the Pattles lived. The information proved useless though. In the middle of a moonless night, he'd attempted to get close to the house, purely on a fact-finding mission. The arm that Voldemort branded all those years ago was burning as if it was going to burst into flames. This was before he could get anywhere near the house too. Lucius was forced to get out of there fast, just in case his mere presence had triggered an alarm. If the Patil home had wards like that, Lucius was glad he didn't know the Mudblood's address. This little bint was already the one person who possessed the power to completely destroy this boy. Unfortunately, she would also be the best protected. Even slipping her the book in Diagon Alley wouldn't help. The wards around her house would probably fry Tom's diary the instant she returned home. With the Pattles being equally protected, this left the head of the Malfoy family with a bit of a dilemma. Did he pass the book off to some non-entity, like that Chinese witch, or even blood traitor Weasley's daughter, or did he wait until the last minute and take an attempt at a bigger prize? He knew they would all be here come 11 o'clock on the 1st of September. A packed platform should provide the cover for him to slip the slim volume into an unsuspecting pocket. Lucius understood this would be a massive risk, leaving everything to the very last moment. He also acknowledged there would need to be a large slice of luck involved too for him to achieve the result he wanted. Lucius could console himself with the though that, if he couldn't get anyone close to the boy, he could still ensure the diary made its way home to Hogwarts in some poor, unsuspecting child's pocket. Harry was trying to be there for his friend as they both made their way along the St. Mungo's corridor. It was as if Neville was experiencing every emotion humanly possible with each step that took him nearer to his parents' room. There was joy, yet tinged with sadness, excitement flavored with trepidation. This was clearly something he looked forward to, but at the same time dreaded. Harry, just don't expect too much. Neville, I'm going to meet my godmother and your dad. That's more than enough for me. Augusta walked behind them both, not having words to express how proud she was of her grandson. He had changed beyond all recognition from the timid little boy she practically had to force onto the Hogwarts Express last September, and Augusta knew who was responsible for this dramatic transformation: his friends. The way they had set this summer's holiday itinerary, it was 1 week busy, followed by 7 days of rest. Because of her age, Augusta had no wish to hold the youngsters back. She gave the first week in Florida a miss, joining them in the Turkish villa beside the Black Sea. There she spent one of the best weeks of her life, listening to her grandson try to explain this whole other world they'd visited in Florida. She also watched him like a hawk, delighted with what her old eyes were seeing. The group of 4 were even closer than she remembered, with Padma and Neville always being together. The affection they had for each other was clearly visible, giving his grandmother hope she might actually see him settled with a good wife and family before her time came to leave this world behind. The Longbottoms were purebloods, and proud of their heritage. The family didn't let that fact define them though. She would be ecstatic if her grandson decided on either of these girls. She had spent the week in the very good company of the Grangers, with Barchoke and Sirius dividing the week between them. Both had business in Gringotts to occupy the rest of their time. Watching this loving couple care for the children made a nonsense of all that pureblood dogma, and the academic results from Hogwarts bore this out. Minerva had confided in her that Neville was not only the top first-year student in Gryffindor, he placed 7th overall amongst all his peers. Augusta expected that his 3 Ravenclaw friends finished higher, and was fine with that. That there were 9 Ravenclaws in first year meant her grandson had outperformed at least 3 of the cleverest house. That was totally unexpected and a phenomenal achievement on his part. When the youngsters had tired themselves out with swimming and games through the day, the adults then got to spend quiet evenings sipping drinks and enjoying each other's company. Each were fascinated by the others and the subjects discussed were wide and varied. Neville had talked with her about the offer of help for Frank and Alice. Augusta was more than willing to listen. Watching them for the last 10 years had left her ready to talk to the devil himself if it offered the slightest glimpse of hope. Barchoke had arrived with some goblin ale for the youngsters earlier that day, and it was this he was drinking as the 4 sat watching the sun go down. It was time for the serious conversation. Augusta, the last thing I want to do here is raise any false hopes for you or Neville. Our experience has taught us that there are no absolutes when dealing with victims of this curse, and that no 2 victims react the same to the treatment. I have to be honest here and say that sometimes there is no reaction at all, and we have never attempted this treatment on victims after such an extended period since their exposure. Dan asked for an explanation of the treatment, and what it hoped to achieve. This curse is a vicious thing, Dan, the most disgusting curse ever invented. While the Avada Kedavra kills its victims, it is instantaneous and therefore relatively painless. The Cruciatus curse triggers every nerve ending in your body to send messages of great pain to your brain. As dentists, Dan and Emma were used to dealing with people in pain. Neither could wrap their heads around a body coping with that much agony. The wizarding theory is that a body can only stand so much pain, before reverting to madness. Forgive me ladies, but we goblins think that is a pile of dragon shit. One of the differences between goblins and wizards is that we question everything and anything, and are constantly trying to find better answers to most problems. Goblin pride was also at stake here. The very thought of a pain so terrible that it would drive us into this madness was repugnant to our nation. A lot of research was done to discover that Mother Nature is indeed wondrous. Barchoke certainly had the other three's attention, but he was no healer. He offered the explanation that had made sense to him. The treatment is purely potions based. Not possessing the specialized knowledge of how they work on the mind, this is how I understand it. Living underground, fire is essential. It can also be a dangerous thing. A fire breaking out is usually a minor matter, easily dealt with. Should one happen when we're sleeping, taking hold before it can be brought under control, we have stringent evacuation procedures and choke points where the fire can be contained from spreading. We have discovered our bodies react in a similar fashion, closing down routes to the brain in an attempt to keep itself alive. He could see they were following his explanation, so continued. The fact that a patient is still alive shows the body was successful in this most basic function, though we have no way of measuring the damage done. Our treatment is like the cleanup crews who move in after the fire has burned itself out. Repairing the damage and rebuilding, making that section habitable once more. As you can imagine, no two fires are ever the same, and sometimes it takes years for a section to recover. Emma and I are well aware of the measures the body can take to protect itself, though neither of us could be considered experts on the subject. What we could offer is a way to assess the damage and measure any progress. There are private clinics with machines that can measure brain activity and perform scans inside your head. Watching the reaction to her husband's revelations, Emma felt she needed to clarify something. These procedures are entirely non-invasive and totally pain-free. Sometimes an indicator dye will be injected into an arm to provide better images, but that's the only thing that may be required. Mostly the patient undergoing these tests just lay on a bed. We could look into getting a full range of tests done before any treatment. Those same tests carried out, say, 6 months later would provide proof of what effect your treatment was having. This was something Barchoke was not expecting, and immediately the goblin asked Dan if he could get more information on these procedures for their healers. Barchoke then turned his attention back to Augusta. In a small number of cases, this treatment has brought about a complete reversal of the damage caused. I think we have to be realistic and say that is probably unlikely when dealing with patients who suffered this curse so long ago. Sadly, there are those that show no improvement. We can only hope they don't fall into this category. Between these extremes lie different degrees of recovery that are as wide as the sea currently in front of us. Would a mother recognizing her son, or a son recognizing his mother, be considered a success? Only you and Neville could really answer that. Augusta had been glad of the glass of port in her hand that evening. It helped her distill the entire problem down to one question: did she trust these people? With that question instantly answered, the rest was easy. The Grangers had made some calls and Sirius had picked up the brochures that had been delivered to their home. Augusta hadn't been able to make head nor tail of these glossy-colored pages, but everything looked safe. Barchoke admitted the copies Sirius had dropped off at Gringotts had left their healers drooling at the possibilities this would provide. At the end of their week, Augusta had parted company with the group. They were heading off to Rome, where the rest of the Patil family would be joining them for a week of sightseeing. She had been busy making arrangements of her own, arrangements that would come into play today. They had the ministry ball tomorrow, and then the entire group was heading off to spend a nice, quiet and restful week in the Maldives, though, with their numbers swelling to 17, Augusta questioned how quiet it might be. She entered the room to find precisely what she expected, her son and his wife in exactly the same condition as they had been for the last decade. This state of affairs was no longer acceptable to the acting head of the Longbottom family, not now that she knew there were possible alternatives. St. Mungos were about to discover that Augusta's reputation as a formidable witch was well earned, and she was about to add some new chapters to that reputation today. The Portkey had barely deposited the father and son to the Grangers' back garden when Harry was running for the door. The way he was feeling, only one thing would help. Hermione was waiting with open arms, and soon both were wrapped in a needed hug. How did it go? Barchoke took a moment to watch the distress flowing out of his son before answering. Augusta said it went exactly as planned. Frank and Alice are traveling by private ambulance to the clinic. After some tests, they'll spend the night there before more tests tomorrow and then heading back to London. Those nurses Augusta found will stay with them on rotating shifts, and then, after returning to the city, Portkey with Neville's parents into Gringotts. Neville appeared every bit as upset as Harry. He could have done with Padma there too. Just being in his girlfriend's arms had calmed Harry enough that he could answer. She'll be there tonight for Neville's birthday. Padma's like Hermione and seems to know instinctively what to do. I've not been here 5 minutes, but already I'm feeling better. He gave his girlfriend a kiss on the cheek in thanks before continuing. It's easy to see why the Sorting Hat couldn't put Neville anywhere else but Gryffindor. Walking down that corridor when you know what's waiting at the other end takes real courage. We have to help them, Father, whatever it takes. We will, son, everything we possibly can will be done. These tests will also tell us if the Muggle doctors have any way of treating this. Our healers were very impressed that these facilities existed. Far less could be used on anyone. Emma was now busy fussing over Harry and making sure he was feeling better. It was Dan who followed up on that. Our doctors are always striving to increase their knowledge of how our brains work. They may be able to offer some form of help. We find it strange but refreshing that your healers are so willing to share information between each other. It must make things so much easier. We have dentistry publications that are periodically delivered to our practice, as do most dentists in Britain. They not only keep us up to date with any new developments in procedures and technology, they have information on anything interesting that's happening in dentistry anywhere in the world. For at least 150 years, The Lancet has been providing the same function for doctors the world over. Shared information in that publication has led to more than a few medical breakthroughs. The more time Barchoke spent with these people, the more he found his views on the world changing. Seeing Harry was back to himself with Hermione at his side reminded Barchoke there was another matter he wanted to discuss with the Grangers. It would require the use of their memory viewer though. Only Barchoke had seen this before and could understand the shock, fear and anger that he found himself surrounded by. The memory ended as Harry approached the stricken Hermione and her golden protection dissolved back into her bracelet. Harry and Hermione were of course in each other's arms, but Emma had them both in an embrace and she didn't appear ready for letting go anytime soon. Dan was very angry that Hermione had been hurt but incredibly moved at the way Harry had fought like a demon to avenge her. He'd gotten to know Barchoke though and understood they hadn't just watched this as a means of entertainment. I have to assume you had a reason for terrifying the life out of us with that. This drew a wry smile from the goblin. I think it's fair to say that Hermione's safety is a very high priority for everyone sitting here, and is the reason for you watching my memory of that morning. Your daughter's safety was such a high priority, her bracelet has more protection runes than any piece of jewelry ever worn by a witch or wizard. Our problem is, it shouldn't have been able to protect her like that. This has never happened before. Emma was puzzled at this. Harry's do it all the time, isn't this a good thing? As a centurion, Harry's are specifically designed to do that. They are also bound to him by blood and will never come off. We are still trying to determine how his magic allows the armor to increase his speed and strength when Hermione gave us a whole new problem. Her bracelet expanding to become body armor is not a good thing, it's a great thing, but only if she can repeat it. His daughter having the ability to suddenly be protected by armor was a bloody brilliant thing in Dan Granger's book too. How do we go about achieving that? We want to blood bond the bracelet to Hermione and see if that works. The director has promised to consider using the Centurion enchantments on it if need be. Tomorrow will thrust Harry even more into the spotlight, and we all know who will be right by his side. As a friend of the Goblin Nation, we intend to do everything in our power to offer Hermione protection. Both parents immediately wanted to know what this blood bond entailed, and any side effects. She merely has to prick a finger and rub her blood into the discs containing runes, then I need to perform some enchantments. The only downside for Hermione is that the bracelet will never leave her wrist after that. Dan realized this would mean his daughter walking around for the rest of her life wearing Harry, Hermione, best friends forever on her wrist. He also realized that the world Hermione had entered could be a dangerous place. He considered the slim possibility that these two wouldn't remain best friends, leaving Hermione with this constant reminder of that fact, a small price to pay for the protection this would afford his daughter. He glanced toward Emma to see his wife already nodding her consent. Barchoke returned his attention to the youngsters. This is going to take some work, Hermione, but you'll have Harry to help. I also think this should be kept a secret, and hope you never need it. If we keep it to the group who know about Harry being able to cast with his sword, that should allow you to practice without alerting anyone. You'll probably need to wait until you return to Hogwarts though, you have other friends with you for the rest of the holidays. Hermione had a question that was worrying her. That shield formed over my clothes, will it form under them if my bracelet is blood-bound? This is so unusual that all I can do is offer my best guess, which would be yes. This drew a blush from the young witch. Harry might not have a problem with displaying his chest, Hermione had no intention of letting that happen to her. At least not for a few years anyway, and then only when she and Harry were ready for that. Despite Harry's repeated protests that it was Neville's special day, those protests were ignored, especially by Neville, and the party at Longbottom Manor was held for both birthday boys. Neville managed to turn Harry's opinion around halfway through the evening when he confessed this was already his best birthday party ever. It was a group in very good spirits who were gathered in the ante-room at the ministry, waiting on tonight's events getting started. As the guests of honor, they would only enter the ballroom after everyone else was seated. An aide then informed them that the minister had just taken his seat, it was time to go. Arthur Weasley brought up the rear of the procession, with Molly on one arm and a wide-eyed Ginny on the other. Ginny was dressed in the finest robes she'd ever owned, yet still didn't fit in. She was here though, which was more than any of her brothers had managed. She didn't really need to console herself, just being here tonight was magical. She was drawn out of her dreaming by a loud fanfare of trumpets. What's that, Daddy? Oh, that will be Harry. Oh wow, he can play the trumpet too. Molly's harumph was ignored, just like her husband had ignored her opinion on tonight. With Bill no longer having to spend his weekends at Hogwarts, he had switched to spending that time in the burrow. He was still teaching though, trying to prepare them for what they would face tonight. Three things very quickly became apparent to Molly. This was a really big night for the Weasley family, they were woefully underprepared and they'd be leaving the biggest asset the family possessed sitting at home. Arthur had ignored her advice to take Bill, instead plumping for giving his beloved daughter the best early birthday present he possibly could. Tonight could make or break them. The Weasleys were the ministry's representatives at this table. Instead of having an expert on goblins, Bill probably knew more about muggles than his father too. They had an out-of-her-depth, starstruck, soon-to-be 11-year-old little girl. Her husband obviously hoped this would be a foot in the door for Ginny, trying to avoid another situation like Ron at Hogwarts. Molly couldn't fault him for that but already knew this attempt was doomed to failure. These were very nice kids but they were talking about a party they attended last night, shopping in Rome and all were looking forward to going on holiday together soon after tonight's ball. What was Ginny supposed to talk about with them? The swimming hole is quite muddy but the apples needed the rain is hardly going to be riveting conversation. After Ginny attends Hogwarts, they would all have some common ground to chat about but tonight was a mistake. Molly had begun to wonder if the goblins weren't a lot cleverer than they were being given credit for. It was assumed that Bill becoming Barchoke's assistant was to save the goblins making silly mistakes. Molly now though her son's real job would be to stop Arthur putting his foot in his mouth. If tonight backfired on him, Molly silently swore that Arthur would be sleeping in that bloody shed of his until at least Christmas. Hermione was on Harry's arm as he led their procession into the ballroom, she sparkled at his side, literally. The goblin tailors had recognized their work would be featured in the wizarding press all over Europe, so only their very best would do. They would be pleased to know the photographers were practically fighting with each other to capture images of their fine work. They had chosen pastel colors as the basis for the designs, with Hermione's being pale green. The goblins had taken the designs handed to them and applied their own stamp though. Hermione's dress was high at the neck with the bodice delicately embroidered and deep green semi-precious stones reflecting any available light. All the other dresses had sashes around the waists, ending in bows at the back, but hers had a wide and bejeweled dark green belt, from which her sword hung in its sheath. The dress was almost to the floor and the puffed shoulder sleeves were covered by an embroidered shawl that appeared to have gold thread running through the green material. Add in the jewelry from Barchoke and Hermione was a showstopper. The goblin tailors had achieved the most difficult of tasks. Instead of attempting to dress young girls as women, their designs merely hinted at the beautiful women these young witches would one day become. Harry's waistcoat matched the shade of his date's dress perfectly, while his frock coat was dark green to match Hermione's accents. Of course, the young couple sported matching swords too. Dan, Emma and Barchoke followed their children into the ballroom. Dan thought his wife was the most beautiful woman at the ball as her cream dress highlighted the tan this year's holiday had provided. Unlike the girls' dresses, Emma's was a more traditional look for this period. The bodice, while lower, was adorned with pearls and her dark brown shawl and sash matched the shade of Dan's frock coat perfectly. That Emma was the most beautiful lady present was not a view shared by everyone, as they were followed by Sirius, and a simply stunning Henrika. Like each couple the goblins had designed clothes for. Sirius' dusky pink waistcoat matched his date's dress perfectly, and the dark maroon frock coat complemented those highlight colors. Sirius had Minerva on his other arm but all the attention was elsewhere. Photographers that had been almost fighting over Harry and Hermione nearly started a riot trying to get closer to Henrika. Neville came next, with Padma on one arm and his gran on the other. As all the elder witches had done, Augusta had chosen to wear what she normally would to an occasion like this. She thought her grandson looked incredibly handsome in his chosen clothes though. They in turn were followed by the other three petals. While Parvati was dressed in the same style as the other young witches in their party, Smita and Ramrao had chosen more traditional Indian wear. Amelia was behind this riot of color, though Susan and Hannah were almost as bright as they too shone in the goblin-made dresses. The Weasleys brought up the rear as the special guests were escorted to their table. There was a small band stage in front of the guest of honor's table, and it was to this stage that the minister soon made his way. Harry's table was front and center, with the nearest surrounding tables populated by ministry officials, and those willing to pay the asking price for getting close to the boy who lived. Cornelius cleared his throat before beginning his prepared speech. Good evening everyone, it gives me great pleasure to greet you all at this very special event. Our guest of honor made a couple of requests regarding tonight, requests I was delighted to comply with. First, young Harry asked if some of the formality could be removed from this evening, as it's his birthday. How could I say no? This drew some laughter, cheering and a good few shouts of happy birthday. Cornelius wasn't lying, he was just being a politician and stretching the truth. Harry had asked that he be awarded his medal as just that, Harry, hence losing the formalities. There was also a request made that we do the presentation before dinner, getting the speeches out the way and allowing everyone to enjoy their evening. Yes, a request had been made, but the minister had no intention of saying the request came from him. With the presentation done, his hope was that the press would stay for the free food, perhaps the first dance, and then bugger off. Cornelius was well aware of the undercurrent of animosity that was presently flowing amongst some sections of their society. One glance at Harry's table was enough to know that here would be the lightning rod for those animosities, especially as the night progresses and the drink flowed. The minister wanted the press long gone before any incidents presented themselves. It was Halloween 1981 when the Dark Lord visited Godric's Hollow. Tonight is about this country acknowledging the debt that we owe the Potter family for their bravery and selfless sacrifice. The ministry wanted a way to express the gratitude, and from this, the James and Lily Potter scholarships were born. A panel consisting of Madam Bones, Professor McGonagall and Harry's godfather, Lord Black, were convened and tasked with administering this scholarship. In September, a young first-generation wizard and a pablood witch, who tragically lost her mother in an accident, will be the first recipients of this scholarship. Young Harry though is taking his involvement even further. He and his friends intend to meet these recipients in Diagon Alley and make sure their transition into Hogwarts students is as painless as it can possibly be. This was met with loud applause. Helping children through Hogwarts was not something that anyone could really publicly oppose. We are now at the portion of the evening that everyone is here for. Rather than me standing here and talking about the boy who lived, I think we would all rather see Harry receive his Order of Merlin, first class, and then hear from him. Harry rose with the applause and purposely walked toward the minister. He'd gone over this speech with his father and Hermione, and was as ready as he would ever be. While wizarding speeches appeared to be long and flowery, goblins tended to be more direct and leave less room for misinterpretation. Kill the bastard before he guts you might be appropriate but would hardly go down well tonight. The minister pinned Harry's medal onto his coat as his table led the loud cheering that followed. He was then invited forward to say a few words and an expectant hush fell over the ballroom. I would like to thank the minister and his ministry for this prestigious award. I hope you will all forgive me if I say that the honor tonight's event is bestowing on my mum and dad means so much more to me. Yes, they gave their lives fighting a great evil, as did a lot of witches and wizards who will have relatives and friends sitting here tonight. I see this scholarship as something that honors all those who fell fighting the good fight. This is their honor too, their remembrance. The applause started slow, shocked and tearful faces were now reflected back at Harry. They had come tonight to see and hear a boy, instead they found themselves entranced by this charismatic young man. The applause quickly built, and, like a powerful wave, soon engulfed the ballroom. When it died down, Harry began the part of his prepared speech that he knew would be controversial. Yes, my mum and dad died fighting a great evil, but the great evil wasn't Voldemort. Harry used the shock of him saying that dreaded name out loud to remove a small glass vial from his waistcoat pocket. No, Tom Riddle was nothing more than a powerful wizard who used existing prejudices to almost bring this country to its knees. I have here a vial of blood. Can anyone tell me how pure it is? This was greeted by total silence. It felt as if someone had asked the Queen if it was her that just let one rip. Not expecting an answer to his question, Harry continued. My three best friends and I are a pretty strange mixture. A daughter of an ancient Indian pablood line, the scion of one of Britain's oldest pablood families, a first-generation witch and then me, a wizard raised by goblins. Do you think this vial here tells you any of that? Prejudices in 1981 dictated my mother should be slaughtered like an animal because of her circumstances of birth, yet we are all here tonight honoring her. Harry turned to face a minister who was turning paler by the second. Minister Fudge's courageous stance on this matter should be applauded, and certainly has my full support. It takes a brave man to say this bigotry will no longer be tolerated in Britain. Tonight's awards broadcasts that message out like a welcoming beacon to the rest of the world. As does his recent attempts for a closer relationship with the Goblin Nation. This had the color returning to the minister, and it got even better as Harry's attention once more shifted to the audience. As you probably know, I've spent most of my life living as a goblin, and I can honestly say I see a lot of similarities between our cultures. My father is a brave and honorable goblin, traits I know both cultures hold dear. He is also a head of family, a head who, just like every other head of family, hopes one day his eldest son will follow in his footsteps. I really could never see myself becoming a banker, but an ambassador is certainly a position worth aspiring to. Harry had made that as plain as he possibly could, and it was now time to finish up. A few days ago my friends and I were in Rome. We took the time to visit that city's ancient Colosseum. I found it sad that the civilization who built this magnificent structure were wiped out, simply because they couldn't adapt to the changing world around them. The sterling efforts and forward thinking of Minister Fudge's administration should ensure a fate like that will never befall this society, and see our country go from strength to strength. I would like to thank you all for these awards, listening to me, and hope they're serving the food soon. I'm a growing lad and am really looking forward to dinner. Cornelius led the applause, and shook Harry's hand as the boy returned to his table where they were all on their feet. The boy who lived had just given him and his ministry an endorsement that no amount of gold could buy. He had also cleverly made that support conditional. Providing his ministry stayed in the light, he could count on Harry's support. Since this was the direction he wished to go, that shouldn't be a problem. Cornelius almost shit himself when the boy took out that vial of blood. This was a subject one didn't talk about in polite company. He couldn't think of anyone else who could have pulled it off. All that was needed now was for his vote to pass the Wizengamot on Monday, and Cornelius could relax, for a little while at least. Harry returned to his table to a rapturous reception, and a congratulatory kiss from his girlfriend. Molly had listened while Bill talked about this young man, but seeing him, in action, so to speak, had practically taken her breath away. He just stared down the pablud elite of Britain, Europe too, and told them they had been wrong. This was no childish rant though. He stood there like a warrior and verbally tore their former leader to shreds, before finally outing their pablud superiority beliefs for the nonsense that they are. She wondered how many of them would enjoy their meal after that, being reminded they were here to honor a muggle-born witch and her goblin son. Something was bothering her though, so when the table quietened, Molly asked her question. Harry, I hope you don't mind me asking, but you never actually said who the blood belonged to. She felt the full force of those green eyes and that devilish smile, framed by his long, jet black hair. Molly suddenly realized this boy had the charm, charisma and confidence to pull off just about anything. That was precisely my point, Mrs. Weasley. It didn't matter whose blood it was. Actually, it's not really blood at all. This is fake blood that I bought out of a joke shop in Crawley. It's supposedly edible and strawberry flavored, if anyone wants to try it. Sirius, Dan and Ramrau suddenly had their respective wives and girlfriend pounding between their shoulder blades to alleviate their choking, a consequence of trying to burst into laughter while eating soup. Not sure whether her hearing had suddenly malfunctioned, Molly asked for confirmation. You face down this entire crowd using something you bought out of a joke shop. Harry's smile went up another notch in answer as Arthur suddenly had a horrible premonition of what his new job could entail. Bill tells us you were friends with Fred and George. Oh yes sir, the great guys, especially after we came to an understanding that meant no more pranks on us. Of course, that was a story the entire table wanted to hear. It left Molly certain she was right, they had really underestimated the goblins. Arthur thought his wife was correct too, he wasn't anywhere near prepared for this job. Dolores hadn't been prepared for that speech, at least she wasn't alone in that, it certainly ruined her appetite. She'd been working quietly behind the scenes for the last few weeks, trying to ensure this disgusting goblin proposal was kicked out on Monday. That speech from the boy who lived just destroyed all her endeavors. That wasn't the real reason she was currently stirring her soup, rather than eating it. Glancing over at the top table destroyed any appetite she had. How were you meant to enjoy your food with mudbloods, muggles and even creatures sitting in the heart of the ministry? Why didn't they just invite a centaur along too and be done with it? She was sure the caterers would have arranged for a bale of hay, save the curtains and upholstery from getting chewed. A house elf could have been ordered to follow the beast around with a shovel. Centaur shit on the ballroom floor would really have made everyone's evening. It was time for Dolores to stop her musing and face facts. Unless something was done here tonight that would show this boy for the child that he was, the goblin proposal would sail through the Wizengamot on Monday. It was also looking increasingly likely that she would have to be the one to do it too. Now all Dolores needed to figure out was just exactly what it could be. Thanks for reading. 2 running a bit late this week, though this is the longest chapter of HC to date. I've also been very busy with a project I could use your help with. I've been working with some 13/14ths kids to produce a film against knife crime in Scotland. This is a national competition, run by the Scottish government, and we've reached the semi-final stage. Around the beginning of February, the competing videos will go online and people will be invited to electronically vote for their favorite. Sussed where I could use your help yet. We'll post more details when they come into the school.